Chapter 61. Chapter 61 Advancing Towards the Future. Nicholas Joseph Fury was not someone who enjoyed playing games, and neither did he appreciate it when someone was playing games with him. The only thing preventing him from balling up the file on his desk and slamming it in the trash was the glare of his assistant, who likely knew what he wanted to do if she took his eyes off him. Maria Hill asked with a tiny smirk at the corner of her mouth, "Would you like some coffee?" Fury gave her a stern look that would have sent lesser men to their knees, but she only stared back with moderate amusement. He said, "No, I would not like some coffee. What I would like is some goddamn intel on what the fuck we are dealing with." The file was a summary of everything they learned from what they called the Hand Massacre, which occurred a few days ago. Intel showed that Jade Chan had not made it to school, that Harry Potter left the university and went home in the middle of the day and exited his house with a briefcase before taking a cab to an abandoned warehouse, that the surveillance crew was able to follow him and use a camera and long-distance mic to record the conversation he had with the people he went to meet. Up to that point, the file had nothing wrong with it. It was what came after that which boiled Fury's blood. According to the tape, Jade Chan had been kidnapped for some sort of ransom. Harry Potter came and provided the ransom in a security-locked case. The hostage was called, but revealed that she was not safe. Then things stopped making sense. Harry ordered someone to kill the one in charge, and someone in a goddamn mask fell through the roof covered in what witnesses described as golden lightning. He then rips the dude's motherfucking heart out, and Harry Potter is filmed casually walking out of the warehouse while the man in the demon mask tears through what appeared to be highly trained martial artists like they were made of tissue paper. Harry Potter returns home and leaves 1 hour later, returning with Jade Chan, who returns to school the next day with a note stating she was sick the previous day. Authorities later discovered a warehouse filled with corpses which were slaughtered in a manner very similar to the one displayed by the man in the demon mask. One analyst determined that from how the doors were wrenched open, someone had been kept there and rescued after quickly dispatching men who would put Fury's best agents in a tough position if taken all at once. There were two things Fury did not like about the file. The first was what was missing. There were no details as to the identity of the one who destroyed the warehouse and the one who dispatched the leaders. What was irksome was that both seemed to happen at the same time, meaning it was either someone very fast or two different people using the same means. Fury didn't like either possibility. The second thing about the file he didn't like was the brutality of it. With the exception of the one Potter gave instructions to kill, none of the other victims were instantly killed. Instead, they were fatally wounded and left to die in an agonizing manner. Fury wasn't a bleeding heart who gave a damn about what happened to people who kidnapped children, but what he did care about was that such viciousness could only be a message. What Fury didn't like was that the message obviously wasn't just for the Hand, the group the victims had been identified to have belonged to. It was obvious that Potter knew he was being watched. Potter's tech promised ownership of the future to whoever controlled it, and Potter wasn't sharing. Fury intended to make contact with the young billionaire soon, but he'd lost his method of approach. On paper, Potter was clean. Sure, Fury had a list of Potter's suspected secrets, but he didn't have proof of anything good enough to leverage the world's youngest professor to play ball. That usually wasn't an issue. Fury just had to use his suspicions of those secrets against him and put some fear into him before promising protection. Those mutant girlfriends of his could act as bodyguards, but they were not always around. But Potter just showed everyone watching how the smartest person in the world deals with those kinds of threats. The fact that Potter did so knowing he was being watched was a clear indicator of how well that would turn if Fury tried it. What Fury really didn't like was that this move worked. Potter knew that until someone figured out the identity of the man in the demon mask and how to counter him, no one would try to threaten him again. This also meant that Potter was confident no one would find his identity. Fury had access to most intelligence networks one way or another, but the file on his desk showed no results in any of them. Fury considered that it might be a magical. Fury had been the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. for over 10 years and knew of the hidden magical world, of course. In his opinion, they were walking bombs which, mostly, kept to themselves. It became an issue when one wandered out of the wards containing their isolated community because most electronics had a substantially reduced shelf life in their presence, save the ones who were born without their ability, the ones called squibs. Attempts had been made to work with magicals throughout history, but it never ended well for either side. How could you work with someone who valued nothing you owned and could erase your memory or turn you into a frog and teleport away if you pissed them off? The fact that munitions randomly went off near them because the chemical physics of gunpowder changed into something more volatile in their presence made cooperating after the 20th century even harder. Hitler tried, of course, but he tried everything. Most of those he had worked with the magicals either vanished or had their memories erased, which was in fact something that contributed to his loss in the war. They only cared about themselves and were dangerous and unpredictable to work with. This was the main reason that governments knew not to work with them and treated them as radioactive. Most governments had ways to detect magic. There were certain materials which acted as a litmus paper in the presence of magic and changed color, like a Geiger counter for magic. Their wards were quite adept at preventing magic from leaking, so as long as the location was warded, the magic under Whitehall wouldn't harm the tech in the building itself and their shopping centers wouldn't affect the surrounding areas. None of that meant anything, however, because according to the paper that was stuck under Potter's desk and recovered, Potter was a squib. Magic was detected from him, but the level was not enough to cast spells or harm electronics. The difference between Potter and other squibs, though, was that Potter had figured out how to make magic work with tech. Fury still remembered that video, which was broadcast on an unencrypted channel in Britain a few years back. He'd had it classified and declared a hoax, but the footage clearly showed an evil wizard leading dozens of others getting played by an 11-year-old with toys and fine china. The boy in that video clearly matched Harry Potter, but the video showed him using magic, which meant either he wasn't a squib or what he used wasn't magic. Then some years later he goes and enrolls in Xavier's Institute for Gifted Youngsters. Fury still found it impressive how few people actually knew what went on in that school. So was he a wizard or a mutant squib? Then there was that mutant detector on that debate, which showed he wasn't a mutant either and was simply using tech. Every little secret Fury could use against him was disproved in public, which left threats as the only path, and now that road was ruthlessly closed. Fury continued to glare at the file on his desk with the hope it would burst into flames at some point, but his wish was not to be. The only thing Fury could really hope for while he tried to figure out another way to approach Potter was that the 16-year-old genius wasn't up to something unspeakably diabolical until then. Back in Harry's study, the sound of his villainous laughter echoed darkly throughout the house at the completion of his latest sinister plot. It is alive, it's alive, it-is, alive, ha 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 ha. Wanda teleported behind Harry and whacked his head with a rolled-up newspaper. Bad, Harry, bad? No diabolical laughter before noon on weekends. Harry rubbed the back of his head and smiled awkwardly. Wanda's teleporting had become finer than threading a needle, and Harry didn't even feel a ripple in space when she appeared, allowing her to sneak up on him. Rogue teleported in using Kit's power and asked, "All right, what have you done this time?" Harry smiled and activated the newly completed program. A white light formed above the desk and revealed the form of a floating corgi wearing a chef's hat. The corgi moved his legs as if he were swimming and started moving through the air. Wanda instinctively grabbed the corgi and held it to her. She said, "It's warm. It feels real." Harry nodded. The danger room could simulate heat and cold thanks to the air conditioner Jerry rigged into it from an alien spaceship, but the house's hard light constructs didn't have a temperature. "I've upgraded the house's hard light system with targeted microwaves which can heat targeted spaces, giving the construct the feeling of warmth. That part was easy. The hard part was programming the details of soft fur, warm bodies, and texture to perfectly duplicate the real thing." Wanda was petting it and said, "Okay, why the hat?" Harry snapped his fingers and two more corgis appeared floating in the room. One had a bow tie and the other had a feather duster in its mouth. "I was thinking of having a hard light butler, but then I realized that a hard light butler didn't need to have a human shape. So now we have a hard light chef, butler, and maid, all programmed to do everything required of them and also in the form of flying corgis." Wanda and Rogue kinda just gawked at the floating corgis. Rogue seemed to be trying to think of something wrong with this, but she actually couldn't find anything. Tangible holograms didn't need to walk, so why not float or fly? They just needed to interact with physical things, so they didn't actually need to look human. Rogue shook her head and said, "It bugs me that a floating corgi butler makes logical sense in this family." Harry laughed and pointed at the bowtie wearing corgi. "Our butler is named Twinkie." He pointed at the one in the chef hat who seemed capable of expressing joy at being pet due to the sophistication of the programming. "That one is Little Potato." It did in fact have a browner color scheme than the golden-colored Twinkie. Harry pointed at the last one floating around with a feather duster in its mouth and said, "You can decide the name of our maid." Wanda said, "Fairy." "That one's a girl, right? She can be Fairy." Rogue said, "Fine with me, but why Fairy?" Wanda smiled and said, "In folklore corgis were said to be the mounts of fairies. Since she can already fly, then she is a fairy." Harry nodded and made some adjustments in the programming. "Sounds good. Little Potato will be cooking from now on except for special occasions. I've had my own cooking session recorded for the last 2 months and they will be used as reference. The food probably won't be as good." Little Potato turned his head away from Rogue and barked. Harry smiled and said, "But it should still be delicious and I can use my time for other things now." Harry was quite busy these days, and even with the time turner he was still making breakfast and dinner for 5 mouths every day and more during Jade's study groups. Now the hard light system would perform all the tasks needed to make the food, and anyone who walked into the kitchen would see those tasks performed by a floating corgi in a chef's hat. He continued, "Twinkie can deliver tea on request and perform small tasks. And Fairy will clean anything that doesn't already clean itself. You can summon them by calling aloud for them and they will appear, and when not working they will behave like common house pets." Wanda asked, "Why not an actual corgi for a pet?" Harry shook his head and sighed. 2 reasons. First, these won't require care and don't need to be walked. Second, I don't know if Goose would eat an actual dog if I brought one home and it barked at her. Harry's familiar actually had her own room with magically cleaning litter box, water bowl, and multiple types of food. Harry even made a computer and TV Goose could use to entertain herself with, which worked using cameras and motion sensors to navigate and change the channel. She was likely the most spoiled cat on the planet, but her room also had some paths into Harry's room and study, and she would often climb onto Harry's lap and enjoy being pet. Harry showed Jade and Jean, with the former excited to see the looks on her friends' faces at the next study session on Tuesday. The following Foundations of Metaphysics class was the due date of Harry's second project. With the exception of Doom's solo act, every other group which entered only submitted a blueprint, while Doom himself actually brought a prototype. Reed and Susan submitted by email a basic blueprint, but Harry could tell that they were too busy in other matters to put the same effort into it as their last one. During the lecture, an enormous blue circle appeared beneath the class and started glowing. In a flash of blinding light, the walls vanished and were replaced with what looked like a massive throne room of a king with an old man wearing a crown sitting on an ornate throne at the end of the room. The students were still in their chairs and looking around as they appeared to be surrounded by priests and men in strange robes. A man who looked more holy than the rest shouted, "Brave heroes, please save us." Since the blackboard was gone, Harry was staring directly at the holy man. He said, "No, send us back." The holy man said, "We cannot, it was a one-way summoning. But the goddess may return you home if you can triumph against the demon king." Harry shook his head and said, "Then tell the goddess I will help the demon king unless she sends us back right now." "What? No? How dare you?" The holy man angrily shouted at him, his face filled with fury. The king had stood up by this point and shouted, "Guards, seize him." Harry snapped his fingers and a barrier appeared around the students and Harry. The weapons of the incoming guards bounced off the barrier. Harry twisted back but remained facing the king and slowly said, "Ka, me, ha." The Pope fellow shouted, "All mortals must fulfill the will of the goddess. Me." The old man continued, "Those who defy her must be exterminated." Harry twisted forward with an open palm double-handed thrust and shouted back, "HAAA." A blinding beam of light whited out the room and when it cleared away, the holy man in front of Harry, the king, the throne he sat on, and the wall in the back were all gone. A massive crater extended out from the barrier where Harry stood and extended further than the eye could see. Harry looked up and said as if speaking to someone, "So, gonna send us back?" Another blue circle appeared below the students and with another flash of light, they had returned to the classroom. Harry was very glad none of his students were epileptic, otherwise he couldn't do pranks that required flashy lights like this. As if nothing important had occurred, Harry returned to his lecture while silently praising himself at the dumbfounded looks on his students' faces. They probably thought they had gotten used to Harry's pranks by now, but the dropped jaws and frozen faces of disbelief at what had transpired proved that Harry still got them. At the end of class, Harry took Doom and his prototype wooden puppet down to a testing room. Within was a neatly built inner room with walls of glass and several metal coils coming up from the ground and hung from the ceiling. The glass had been treated to prevent any signal from entering from the outside so the puppet could not be controlled. Inside the glass room was a line on the ground and 20 feet further in was another line. Don't enter with anything metal or sensitive to magnetic fields. Just place your puppet at the starting line and enable it and close the door. Doom's puppet showed that it had been cut open and the exterior was likely just a shell and frame for the hidden inner workings. Doom set his puppet on the starting line and pulled something out of it before closing the door. The puppet leaned forward as if it would fall, but its leg lifted and stepped forward. With each motion it stepped again and again, but a third of the way through the course it fell over, causing Doom to frown. Harry flipped off the switch for the magnets in the room and entered himself to pull out the puppet. Harry said, "Your use of non-ferrous memory metals and endothermic reactive materials to act as muscles is definitely better than the blueprints submitted by your fellow classmates. However, the magnetic field was too strong and the extremely weak effect of the magnets on those metals was still enough to overcome the chemical program you built into the puppet." Doom didn't show it, but Harry could tell that he was surprised that Harry easily figured out how his puppet worked without taking it apart. Harry then walked over to his own puppet on the wall and placed it at the starting line before closing the door. Harry flipped the wall switch to turn back on the magnets, and after a few moments, Harry's puppet actually took a martial arts stance. With another movement it stepped forward and took another stance. The puppet was not only moving through the magnetic field without issue, it was also performing a martial kata while doing so. Doom didn't blink as he watched Harry's puppet from the other side of the glass. Making a puppet do that wasn't difficult. But making a puppet do that in such a strong magnetic field under the given restraints was something even Doom didn't know how to do. From the outside, Harry said, "I'm glad you won this time. I doubt Reed has enough of a mystical foundation to understand how the puppet works." Without batting an eye, Doom stated, "You are a sorcerer." Harry confirmed, "Personal student of the Camartage's ancient one from when I was 12. Doom continued, "And metaphysics is just the science of magical energies." Harry smiled and walked back inside the magnet room to pull out his puppet after it had finished the 20-foot kata. Once out, Harry pulled apart the puppet's joints and showed them to Doom. After looking at it for a few moments, Doom asked, "What is this crystal?" The joints appeared to be connected by a hard crystal, but the crystal was unlike anything Doom had seen before. Harry turned on the hard light system on his briefcase and showed him the chemical formulas. "This is something I've been working on even before I went to Camartage. Or at least this is something that I created from a project I started when I was 11. It is basically crystal muscle tissue and doesn't include any metal at all. It is chemically programmed similar to your setup, but the movements of the crystal are far more precise." This was actually the result of Harry's effort in looking up ways to make a better broomstick. Current broomsticks absorbed a solution into the grains which hardened into a three-dimensional crystal matrix which held the spells the broom used to change ambient wizard magic into flight. Harry's first target was to figure out everything he could about the solution which turned into the crystal matrix, and eventually he figured out how to make crystal muscles that didn't even require magic materials to use. Harry was still working on a magic version that he could use to plant a crystal seed into something and it would grow a crystal matrix muscle structure under the surface which could be controlled by magic instead of chemical reactions. While Doom was looking over the various formulas, Harry said, "The world we live in is defined by its composition. By creating new materials, you can redefine the world." Doom said, like your metagems. Harry smirked and said, metagems are just a red herring. You think they are valuable? Ask me how I make them. I know you want to. Doom gave Harry a somewhat cold look. Harry had just blatantly accused Doom of being in his class to steal the secrets of the metagems, and Harry was offering them as bait if he admitted it. Not being one to back off, Doom directly asked, how do you make them then? Harry smiled and answered, I use sound waves to alter the physical structure of normal gems. Do you know why that information is worthless? Doom's eyes widened just a bit before narrowing. He understood the implication almost instantly. Even if Harry gathered the world's greatest minds and showed them all the process of changing a gem into a metagem, they'd never be able to replicate it if it used sound. That was because using sound to alter something meant there was zero room for error. The valuable intel would not be the machine Harry used to alter the gems, but the program which the machine used to do it correctly. Without that program, the greatest minds would have to figure it out from scratch, and it was obvious how confident Harry was that such a thing would take thousands of years if fast, and hundreds of years even if all the resources of Earth were devoted to it. Harry continued, metagems are just a distraction. You are older than I am and got your doctorate before me, but I still consider you my student, Dr. Doom, and I don't want you to be distracted. I don't know what level you are in your sorcery, but if you need some assistance or have any questions, feel free to ask. Doom directly stated, then I do have a question, one sorcerer to another. If you wanted to free a soul from a devil, how would you do it? Harry considered it and asked, how did the devil acquire the soul and which devil is it? Harry's hands then glowed with red mandalas and Harry sealed the space in the room under Doom's eyes. You don't speak a devil's name without them knowing, but this spell would hide them as long as the name was only spoken once. Doom took a moment to observe the barrier and said, the soul was exchanged for the promise of power to enact revenge, and the one who made the deal was Mephisto. The room glowed bright for a moment as if it would shatter, but after a moment dimmed and returned to normal. Harry shook his head and said, Himha. Relatively speaking, there are only 3 ways. The first is to exchange it for something he wants. I would never recommend this way, of course, because nothing good can ever come out of a deal with him. Harry saw a dim spark of fury in Doom's eyes and knew that he was thinking of something. Harry continued, the next way would be to use force and take the soul yourself. However, this would be, by far the most difficult way. You'd have to separate him from his dimension, because if he is connected to it while within it, his power would be unlimited and there is no way to fight someone on his level with tricks. The third way is to use a massive threat. How I would do it is I'd design a massive weapon which could destroy his domain, and then I'd make 2 of them. Without any warning, I would use one of them in his realm. Someone of his level should have multiple ways of protecting his realm, so it is unlikely it would actually be destroyed. Depending on the damage though, if it is enough, you can threaten to use another of the same weapons and state that until you were given what you wanted, you'd continue using it over and over. For the first time since Harry had met Victor Von Doom, the man actually gave a look of surprise. He'd obviously not thought of such a possibility. The problem when dealing with devils was that they could not be threatened or blackmailed in the conventional sense. Harry was beyond conventional logic, however, and knew far more than most about devils and demons. Even a being of Mephisto's caliber would not give up his domain so easily. And he couldn't use the soul Doom wanted as leverage, as Doom could simply state if it was harmed, Doom would destroy his realm no matter what. This was a strategy that would actually give Doom a position to bargain that was not impossible. Of course, destroying his realm was not going to be easy, but it was a direction which was something Doom didn't have before. After a few moments, Doom said, "Thank you, Professor Potter." Harry removed the spell on the room and said, "Anytime. Are you gonna watch the launch?" Doom didn't answer and simply took his puppet and left. The Storm Foundation had a bunch of cameras in their rocket and many of them would be streaming live. They actually used some equipment brought from Brilliance Incorporated to deliver the signal, which allowed various news groups to televise the launch, which was something that had never been done before. Thankfully, Harry didn't have any classes during the launch and sat in the teacher's lounge with other faculty members watching the countdown on the big screen TV. Professor Stearns sat on the same couch and said, "I hope those kids will be all right up there. I've had a few of them in my classes in the last few years." Harry agreed but wasn't too worried. Susan sent him an email that his modifications had been given to the design team, and though expensive, she'd been informed they had been implemented. With that, anything short of a coronal mass ejection shouldn't affect their ship. The countdown finished and the rocket launched into space to the cheers of the faculty room. Most of the news segments were discussions by experts on the nature of the pyramid that was in orbit. News clips of the pyramid shooting into space a few months ago and some videos of the purple sky were sporadically aired as many around the world waited and wondered if this mission would give any answers. The rocket eventually parked itself in geosynchronous orbit near the pyramid, and the camera showed the world a clear look at it along with a clear look at the hole in the side and obvious damage it had taken. Harry lightly reminiscent back to his wedding day. There were a lot of regrets about it being moderately ruined by apocalypse and the ceremony failing. Because of the type of ceremony held, there was no way to use time travel to go backwards and get the timing right. If Harry took Jean back a few hours and tried to do the ceremony, the seal on Jean would resonate with her past self, which had been battling Xavier, and be placed on both at the same time, creating a paradox. Sealing a cosmic entity didn't allow cheating, and trying that would have certainly killed them all from the backlash. Creating the portal he used to head to space and destroy the inner workings of the pyramid also unsealed the space on the island, which allowed Sinister to run off in the alien spaceship, but at the time Harry couldn't care less about the man and had no other choice. Once in position, Johnny Storm and Ben Grimm got in some spacesuits and headed out into space to check the pyramid. On live TV they flew through the vacuum of space and approached the massive hole Harry dug out of the ship and entered the depths. Even inside the pyramid in outer space, the cameras still provided an excellent picture. Experts on TV started debating the Egyptian symbolism while Ben and Johnny started setting up equipment. About 30 minutes later alarms within the shuttle's cockpit started blaring. Susan said on camera, "There's something coming. Johnny, Ben, get back here on the double." Johnny wasn't the type to argue with his sister and rushed out, but Ben first went to grab the equipment. Reed saw this on camera and shouted, "Leave it, Ben. Get back here now." Ben used his suit's propulsion to quickly leave the pyramid. The fact that Reed had told him not to take back the equipment told him how serious this was. The ground team was asking questions and Reed answered, "Some kind of energy storm is going to pass through us at any moment." Both Johnny and Ben were rushing back to the shuttle. Harry calculated the timing and determined they'd make it back before the storm hit so they'd be fine. As Johnny approached the shuttle's airlock door, the energy storm passed through the pyramid. What happened next was something no one could have guessed. On live TV, the pyramid exploded with a flash of light of indescribable color. Harry stood up from the couch as the other teachers nearly cried out in shock. Johnny made it inside the airlock but Ben was still outside. The wave of strangely colored energy was gaining on their position but Ben made it inside. Johnny hit the switch to close the door right before the wave of energy hit the ship to everyone's relief. The relief however was short-lived as the wave of energy passed unimpeded through the hull of the ship. Harry's breath froze. That wasn't supposed to happen. This meant either Susan lied to him or someone lied to her. It was easy to figure out which but it didn't matter in either case. The energy stored on the pyramid was designed to awaken the X gene of every human with a dormant X gene on the planet and was something not all of them would survive. That energy was then supercharged with Harry's magic to the point it destroyed the entire system designed to spread the energy over the planet. And that mixture was just hit by a cosmic storm of all things and exploded. Yeah, that wasn't good. Chapter 62. Chapter 62 The Power Cosmic. The footage from the cameras in the various rooms showed Johnny and Ben collapsing inside the airlock and Susan and Reed getting knocked out. The footage however continued streaming and red lights were showing all over the console. Sparks shot out from the control stick and the shuttle started turning. Moments later, the shuttle started losing altitude and looked like it was about to enter orbit. Harry got up from the couch and said, "I need to make a call," and left the lounge. The moment Harry was out of sight of any cameras and witnesses, he teleported to the roof and checked the time before using his time turner to go back in time 3 hours. There was nothing Harry could do to stop his students from getting exposed to those energy waves, but there were other things Harry needed to do to prevent a different disaster. Once he was back in time, Harry equipped some gear that would allow him to comfortably survive space without magic and used a portal to head to the orbiting pyramid. Oddly enough, Harry did have something for this situation. Harry took out several hundred crystal spheres and placed them in a stationary position in the space between the pyramid and the Earth in a field nearly a mile in diameter. The shuttle had been very close to the pyramid so Harry just had to place them behind where the shuttle would park and the timeline would not be affected. Harry then patiently waited and not long afterwards the shuttle showed up and approached from the side while synchronizing its orbit. Harry himself and the spheres were all concealed so they would not be noticed or mentioned on live TV. Eventually the cosmic storm showed up and Harry got a good look at it. It was a band of energy that extended up and down further than the eye could ever see but it was only a few hundred meters wide. It just so happened that it would pass through the space with the pyramid and the shuttle before passing to the side of Earth. Of course Earth's magnetic field would protect it from a storm of this magnitude even if it did pass through it but it would not protect those outside the shuttle from getting microwaved to death if exposed. Johnny and Ben made it inside and the ship's natural Faraday cage design would protect them from the cosmic radiation, but the wave of energy created from the exploding pyramid was different. It easily passed through the ship and was now on its way to Earth. Or not. Harry placed the hundreds of spheres outside the area of the cosmic band but in front of the Earth. The massive wave of bizarre energy passed through the hundreds of spheres. The further into the cloud of spheres it passed, the dimmer the light of the energy wave appeared. These were energy collectors, all of the ones Harry possessed. Harry had been looking for a new source of energy to use for battle meditation and these could collect energy better than anything else on the planet. He'd been getting kicked out of any realm he'd tried to collect high-level energy from so his plan had been to drop the spheres, make a distraction, and hope he could collect them again, basically a robbery. That kind of trick would only work once so he had to make it count and it just so happened that they could be used in this situation perfectly as this energy had no master and was even in the material plane. The strength of the wave completely died before it passed through the cloud of spheres. The wave on the outer rim of the sphere cloud was unaffected but the cut part of the wave was in front of the Earth meaning the comparatively small cloud of energy absorbing spheres had basically cast a shadow over the Earth, shielding the surface from the wave which passed harmlessly around the planet out into the void of space. Thankfully the moon was behind the Earth at the time so it too was unaffected. The wave itself along with the cosmic storm also passed through Harry of course. The cosmic storm was incredibly powerful, but Harry's magic defense from his wisdom stat allowed him to survive lightning bolts without issues and since Harry was wearing a full set of gear, the effect was too weak to mention. The energy from the pyramid however was strange. It was both powerful and weak at the same time. It was difficult to describe it. It was both a spark and a star, yet more, and nothing at all. Even if it was an attack, Harry's body could not internalize and store energy that he had not acquired through combat, so the energy had no effect on him. He wouldn't be able to find out what it was without studying what he collected later. Harry summoned his spheres and put them all in his inventory before he invisibly floated over to the shuttle and psionically scanned it. He confirmed that everyone was alive, which was good. What was bad was that one of the thrusters was going off due to an electrical failure and was pushing the shuttle back to the Earth. Harry took a moment to calculate the trajectory and had to stop himself from rolling his eyes. Of course it would crash at several times the speed of sound directly into downtown New York City. Why'd he even bother calculating it? He should obviously just assume everything is heading towards New York in the future. Ironically, because the cameras were delivering their stream using metagem quartz, they were not affected by the energy wave, so while the ship was careening towards the Earth, the camera feeds were still rolling. Harry followed the descending ship and tried technopathy to get the ship to engage the autopilot. Unfortunately, that seemed fried too. The ship was also descending at the wrong angle and would burn up into a ball of flaming metal before striking the city with enough force to leave nothing standing taller than 4 feet off the ground. Harry's phone beeped, and this time he didn't bother to stop his eyes from rolling. Since the crew wouldn't survive the ship's re-entry regardless, the powers that be just sent a missile to blow it up. This would save New York, and Harry couldn't blame them for making the call. Harry obviously wouldn't let his students die like that. It just depended on how much he wanted to reveal to the world. Since the cockpit was still streaming live on a feed that the government couldn't cut, Harry couldn't just teleport in, nab them, and teleport out. He needed to fly the shuttle and make it look natural, but the shuttle couldn't be flown from the inside and Harry wasn't strong enough to fly it from the outside. Unless he got creative, that is. Harry charged his cells with dimensional energy and turned himself into a cloud of dust. Ever since he got his Obscurus perk, he'd had a lot more control over this form. Obscurus particles were also invisible to non-magicals, and with his invisible energy readings there was no camera on Earth that could see him. Harry flew over to the shuttle and engulfed it. The extreme heat of descent was not something that could easily harm particles made of energy, and Harry was able to manually push the shuttle into a properly aligned descent while slowing it down and preventing it from melting and destroying itself. Harry saw the missile on its way in the distance, but a minute after Harry started correcting the ship's course, the missile exploded. Harry hadn't done anything to it yet, and he figured that someone noticed the uncontrolled flight had become controlled. Whoever had their finger on the trigger wasn't going to kill a bunch of college students on live TV unless there was no other option. After descending far enough into the atmosphere for the flames over the shuttle to go out, Harry's Obscurus form ripped the panel off the back of the ship and pulled out the parachute, causing the shuttle to drastically decelerate. Harry maintained awareness of the inside of the shuttle and noticed that Susan seemed to have come to and was pulling on the control stick on her side to change the wings of the shuttle to decelerate it further. Harry helped and pushed the flaps up as the control system was partially fried. Harry's presence was actually making the systems worse, as his exotic energy was messing with anything that survived the energy wave. He figured it was a small price to pay. The shuttle's path had changed from New York City to the coast off Long Island. The shuttle descended right into the side of the piers and started skimming across the water as it slowed. Once it touched down, Harry removed himself from the shuttle and reformed his body. If there was a random magical at the pier, he'd be seen, so this was as close to New York as he could escort the craft. Those at the pier were running out of the way, but Harry controlled the descent enough to ensure the craft only reached the shallow depths before coming to a complete halt. Other than some boys and one unfortunate boat filled with cabbages, there were no other damages caused by the landing. Harry continued to maintain invisibility and monitor the crew. Susan had confirmed Reed was unconscious but fine and had used an emergency lever to open up the airlock doors and confirm Ben and Johnny were also alive, though they were decently beaten up as they had descended without seatbelts, unlike Susan and Reed. Thankfully they were in their spacesuits, which supported their unconscious bodies and prevented something as terrible as their necks snapping from the turbulence of landing. Harry confirmed that all 4 had been contaminated by energy, but they were alive. Even if Harry walked over to them now, he actually had no way to remove the energy from their bodies without knowing more about it, so he'd reached the limit of what he could do. Harry sent a small spell at Susan to make her think that she'd corrected the orbit instead of it happening on its own, but Harry found that the spell had no effect. He wasn't sure what to make of that and figured it was an effect of the energy. Since there was nothing else he could do, he teleported out and waited until it was 1 hour and 10 seconds from when he'd gone back in time. Harry then used the time turner to go back 1 more hour and teleported back to where he'd left the university from, 10 seconds after he left. Harry then returned to the staff room after visibly putting his phone away and back to his seat on the couch. The newscasters were going crazy as the footage showed the shuttle accelerating towards the Earth. One newscaster stopped speaking and grew somber. "We have reports that the shuttle is going to crash land in New York City. A missile has been launched to intercept." Cries of outrage and fear echoed back and forth in the faculty room. There was a camera on the front of the ship looking forward, so there was no good way to hide the missile, which would show up on camera in a little bit, and because of the nature of the broadcasting equipment, the government had no way to interrupt the feed. This was the part where Harry intervened. The blinding light from the heat of the shuttle was automatically adjusted by the camera, meaning that the orientation of the shuttle slowly changing was noticed by all viewers. A number of experts were making guesses about what had happened, but most concluded the ship had an autopilot which had automatically activated. Investigations later would disprove this, but Harry doubted those would be released to the public. It was a minute later that the missile could be clearly seen from the cameras in the cockpit's shuttles, and just moments later it exploded on screen. Harry along with the other professors shouted in celebration as new reports were plotting the projected course of the shuttle. The deploying of the shuttle's parachute jostled the ship enough to wake up Susan, who looked out the window and shouted, "What the fuck?" on live TV. Only the tension in the room prevented Harry from laughing at her use of profanity. The sky out the window was blue, showing they'd re-entered the atmosphere while she was unconscious, and the land on the horizon was getting closer. Susan took a moment to confirm Reed was alive and said to the cameras, "Richards is alive but unconscious. I'm going to try to land the shuttle. All comms are down and I don't even know if anyone is receiving this." She quickly pressed dozens of buttons and was getting more frustrated with each press. Her expression softened with relief a moment later. "The brakes are slow to respond but have been deployed." She continued to look out the window every other moment. This was the part where Harry was moving the wings to assist in the braking of the shuttle. What Harry found odd, however, was that Susan was not looking at the horizon when she looked out the window, but randomly around the edges of the shuttle at the shuttle's nose and such. Harry wondered if she was looking at his Obscurus form, if she could see it. Harry had confirmed years ago that people with a specific saturation of some types of energy in their body could see a patroness. The Ancient One and those time travelers, for example. All were technically muggles, except the Time Lord, but they could see something muggles shouldn't be able to because their senses were unbound from saturation of non-standard energies. Susan had not said anything about what she was seeing though, possibly because the camera feed from the exterior of the shuttle didn't show the same thing and she might have thought she had brain damage. Harry would definitely have to visit her in the hospital and explain a few things to make sure she didn't think she was going crazy. The shuttle splashed down but was still getting closer and closer to the incoming pier. It smashed through an unmanned, parked, shipping boat filled with cabbages which smashed over the windshield, but that slowed it down enough to stop right at the edge of the water. The teacher's lounge and everyone in the newsroom on TV shouted in celebration. Harry was actually grabbed by Professor Stearns and hugged, and Harry just shook his head and patted the man on the back for a moment before Stearns let him go and jumped off the couch. He was very excitable. Susan had immediately gotten off her chair the moment the shuttle stopped and rushed to the back to open the airlock doors. The system didn't respond, so she had to open the panel for a manual override to unlock and pull open the door. Johnny and Ben were both still unconscious, but Susan released the locks on their helmets and confirmed their status. Ben and Johnny are both alive. Ben appears covered in bruises and Johnny's temperature is too high. Please send emergency medical services at once. The cameras showed that the coloration of Ben's face was off, swollen as if he had been viciously beaten up, though the actual color of the bruises were less red than they should be and more orange. The live feed finally cut out at that point as the two-way communication system in the shuttle was mostly fried, so Susan couldn't receive any messages sent. In a small corner of Harry's mind he wondered if this was good advertisement for Harry's metagems, as the streaming system was entirely unaffected by the strange energy waves, though everything else was. He'd already seen when he tried using magic to fry the Sentinel with a metagem system that systems which use his gems have a bit more wiggle room when it comes to shielding than other systems, which was why the camera and battery connected to the streaming system also survived. Many of the faculty cancelled their classes to watch the shuttle, so when the broadcast was over, Harry returned home and went into the basement to check out the spheres. Once he set up some safety measures, he pulled one out of his inventory and sat down next to it and enabled battle meditation. Dimensional energy, recommended level 5200. Power cosmic energy, recommended level 100+. Time energy, recommended level 300-500. Due to the shielding on the house itself, the only standard energies within were time and space. Dimensional energy was what gave space its space after all. Because Harry had placed the spheres outside the range of the electromagnetic band that passed through the area, the spheres didn't absorb any energy from it, meaning they only contained this power cosmic energy which seemed to originate from the explosion. Harry wasn't interested in the energy from that space storm. It looked fancy, but it was basically just a concentrated form of electromagnetic energy which would only support battle meditation up to level 150 at best. It was enough to kill a normal human, but useless to Harry. Cosmic energy was a rather general term and encompassed most forms of background stellar radiation. However, when Harry used battle meditation, the proper names of such energies would show, such as electromagnetism, gamma radiation, heat energy, etc. The fact that this energy was called power cosmic energy meant it was something else entirely. Harry tried scanning it with the equipment he usually used for metaphysics research, but the results were inconclusive. The energy was made from the energy Apocalypse was going to use to awaken the X gene, which had been stored for 5,000 years, combined with Harry's exotic energy, combined with the electromagnetic energy of the space storm. Yet somehow they had combined into this. As far as Harry knew, combining energies didn't work like that. Deciding to contact someone who knew more than Harry did, Harry equipped some monk robes and made a silver portal to Camartage. One of the benefits of no longer being 12 was that his height matched the other young apprentices, so he actually stood out less than usual, though those who knew him still recognized him, of course. Harry avoided most of the crowds and made his way over to the Ancient One's abode and found Master Wong. The bald monk gave a curt nod of greeting and said, "I hope you have not brought any bad news this time." Harry shook his head. There was some trouble, but it was handled. Wong actually snorted. "Handled," he says. Every alarm in every sanctum went off at the same time, but moments later they were silenced. "The Ancient One is already waiting for you." Harry chuckled and followed Wong. The sanctums defended the Earth against mystic threats, and the wave of power cosmic energy heading towards the Earth likely raised some flags. There are defenses that could have been enabled to protect the Earth, but those were costly to set up and the strange wave may have been able to pass through them. Harry's solution of directly absorbing the energy that should have hit the Earth was much simpler. Harry found the Ancient One on a cell phone, browsing the internet while waiting for Harry. Harry pulled some tea and cups from his inventory and poured some for her and himself before placing it back into his inventory and sitting down. After both took in a sip of tea, the Ancient One said, "Your tea is getting better." Harry said, "Perhaps one day I'll surpass yours. It is good to set high expectations for yourself, however impossible they may be." Harry smiled at that and took another sip of tea before he explained everything that happened today. At the end of the story, the Ancient One said, "Neither the awakening of Apocalypse or this event with your students happened in the timelines I have observed, so I do not know what the future holds. It is rather enjoyable, truth be told." Harry rolled his eyes and said, "You just enjoy watching me run around trying to put out all the fires I apparently started." Though she didn't answer, her smile confirmed Harry's guess. Harry took out a sphere of power cosmic energy and placed it on the table. The Ancient One didn't use any form of magic to scan it, she simply looked at it for a moment and said, "Put it back." After Harry put the sphere back into his inventory, the Ancient One said, "Power cosmic is not a term I am familiar with, and I have never seen this form of energy before, but I do have some guesses." Harry said, "I've never felt anything like it either. It feels like everything and nothing, both life and death, yet neither. There was no level limit on absorbing it during battle meditation. Even if it's just a guess, I'd appreciate anything you can tell me about this." Though Harry read everything in the sanctum, not all knowledge was written down after all. Some things could only be learned through experience. The Ancient One nodded and said, "The closest term I would use to describe it would be primordial energy. I've never encountered it before, but I've heard some theories about it. It is the energy created from the void which sparked and fueled the Big Bang itself. The first energy, the energy that gave birth to all other forms of energy." That certainly surprised Harry. Every form of energy was basically just another unit of measurement. You can't measure heat with a ruler, you can't measure brightness with a thermometer, you can't measure time with a magnet, and you can't measure radiation with a scale. Metaphysics basically introduced a dozen new units of measurement for a dozen new forms of energy. The idea that all forms of energy share the same origin meant that all units of measurement were derived from the same source. This was something that went completely against every form of common sense. It also explained why his systems back home couldn't measure it. If true, this energy was literally unmeasurable. Harry asked, "Do you have any theories on what will happen to my students and their friends?" They were completely saturated with this last I checked, though their vital signs were stable. The Ancient One considered it and said, "Most if not all the energy will likely turn into another form of energy within their bodies. If they survived the assimilation, they should survive the metamorphosis." Harry frowned at that. "Anything I can do to prevent it or help?" The Ancient One shook her head. "Neither of us are experts in this power cosmic, thus neither of us know a safe way to remove it. Until you learn more about the energy, anything you attempt is more likely to harm your students. However, you must be careful. This is the energy that created the Big Bang. I will be most disappointed with you if you destroy the Earth during your research." Harry nodded. "I'll carry out the dangerous experiments in the mirror dimension. That guarantees little. If you accidentally destroy the mirror dimension, it will have untold consequences on this plane as well. In addition, there are beings trapped in the mirror dimension who have not died with the passage of time. Should they acquire some of this power cosmic from you during your experiments, the consequences will be unimaginable." Harry sighed and knew she was right. The mirror dimension was not a playground. Several lazy sorcerers in the past have in fact unwisely tossed certain dangers in the mirror dimension, and not all of them may have died. There are beings that may not be capable of escaping under their own power, but they can put themselves into a dormant state to await the right opportunity. "All right, then I'll go the slow and steady route. That would be the wisest choice." After finishing their tea and some more small talk, Harry bid the Ancient One farewell and returned home. Jade had just come over with her study group as Harry walked out of the basement. "Hey guys, you see the news?" Jade answered. "You should have seen it, Harry." The teachers and students were freaking out. It seemed they had access to the news during the class. Probably living streaming on a cell phone. Gwen shook her head and said, "When the news said the shuttle was going to crash into the city, 2 girls in my class fainted and 1 boy screamed like a little girl." Harry turned to look at Peter, who noticed it and put his hands up. "What? No, it wasn't me, I swear." Felicia laughed and said, "It wasn't Peter, it was actually our resident quarterback." Harry shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, we have some new staff now." Harry turned to face the kitchen and said, "Little Potato, can you make some tea?" The 3 happy barks that came from the kitchen drew everyone's attention. MJ blandly asked, "Was that a dog?" Harry answered, "Our new chef, Little Potato." Rather than argue with the bizarre logic, Peter quickly changed the subject. Prof. Harry glared at him for a moment, causing him to freeze and start over. Harry, have you heard if the shuttle's crew will be okay?" Harry shook his head and answered, "I don't, but I'll be visiting them at the hospital. Honestly, I'm surprised I haven't been called yet, since they were exposed to some weird energy and I'm the best available expert on weird energies around." Gwen asked, "Best available? So there is someone better than you?" Harry answered, "There is always someone better. I studied under a master for a while and still ask for advice every now and then. I was actually just in contact until a few moments ago and had a discussion on possible identity of the energy which the crew was exposed to. Peter asked, what was it? Harry shrugged, something that shouldn't exist and makes less sense the more you analyze it. MJ said, I heard Harry say the crew would be taken to an Oscorp facility, not a hospital. Harry looked over at Ms. Watson who realized what she said and continued, different Harry. Norman Osborn's son, Harry Osborn. Oscorp has them? Crap. Gwen asked, what's wrong with Oscorp? They are one of the most advanced companies in the world. Harry answered, compared to other companies at the same level, there is not much wrong with them. The problem is that most companies at that level have a lot wrong with them. Felicia asked, and what's wrong with your company? Harry looked up as if pondering something and said, most of my employees and business partners bring knives to work and if a week goes by without them being used, it's considered slow. Everyone made a strange face at that, even Jade who had not seen Harry's memories yet and didn't know about the goblins. 2 barks came from the kitchen and Harry said, thank you little potato. Twinkie, can you bring out the tea? Harry looked over at his guests and said, Twinkie is our new butler. Everyone turned to face the hall leading to the kitchen and moments later, a golden, bow-tie-wearing corgi waddled out of the hall floating 4 feet in the air and moved its legs as if swimming as it slowly floated over to the table. In the corgi's mouth was a large silver tray containing a half-dozen cups of steaming tea. The floating fuzz ball set the platter on the table and gave out 2 more happy barks. Harry walked over and pet Twinkie saying, good boy. With his other hand he got a cup and took a sip. Jade said, come here Twinkie. The golden corgi turned over and ran across the table before sitting in front of Jade who started petting it. Felicia was the first to break out of the stupor that came with witnessing such a strange thing and scooted over to pet the corgi too. Is this real? Harry answered, it's another hard light projection. But it's warm. Harry nodded, microwaves. Peter said, cascading modulation? You have targeted wave motion inference built into your hard light system. Harry took another sip of tea and answered, yup. The coding was a pain in the butt. Did you use correlation system designs or TRIP-RD static analysis? TRIP-RD static analysis is easier with my systems. Right, because of the feedback hardware. But if you used a terminal inference for sub-processors, wouldn't the programming have taken care of itself if you used correlation system designs? Harry blinked and took a seat. Well, now I feel like an idiot for manually programming everything from scratch. Harry might know every computer tool that existed but that didn't mean he knew the most efficient way to use them all. Peter's suggestion would have allowed the system to partially program itself through a week of trial and error which would have been a lot easier than the manual programming Harry had to do. Gwen said, look what you've done Peter, you've hurt Harry's feelings. Felicia said, yeah, he might kick you out and not let you come back anymore. What? No, I mean it's amazing he could do so much programming manually. I can't imagine all the effort he must have put into it. Gwen said, effort you've pointed out was a complete waste of time. Wait, no, that's not what I said. Really? Harry finished his tea and smiled, it's fine, I learned a bit while manually coding it so it wasn't a waste. Harry looked over and Peter and said, it's your birthday in 2 weeks right? I'll get you some socks. Felicia asked with a bit of humor, socks. Harry nodded, a good warm set of socks are not something you'll really appreciate until you have worn a pair. If you're interested Felicia, I'll get you a pair for Christmas as well. It was New York after all. New York got cold and warm socks were awesome. Though he'd outgrown the pair Dumbledore gifted him years ago, Harry did like them and he sent a pair back to Dumbledore every Christmas. Felicia rolled her eyes and asked, why's like the richest guy on the planet gifting socks? Harry shrugged, the best things in life are rarely gifts, but things you acquire yourself. Rather than give a person something they'd be better off getting themselves, it's better to get something they'd enjoy but likely wouldn't get for themselves. MJ smiled and said, like warm socks. Exactly. Like warm socks. Peter looked like he was about to argue but warm socks were not exactly a bad gift so he actually had no reason to refuse. One of the reasons Harry liked having Peter over was because the kid was without a doubt the smartest person Harry had met. Peter didn't know everything Harry knew, but the soon-to-be 15-year-old knew and understood a shocking amount of physics, engineering, computer systems, and even biology, genetics, and chemistry. What shocked Harry the most was that Peter didn't do massive amounts of research. According to Peter, his parents had a lifetime subscription to a lot of science magazines and publications. Many of those actually included published doctoral theses and Peter not only read them all, but did the relevant research to fill in the gaps for what he didn't know and understood it. Apparently Peter could have tested right out of high school but according to Gwen and MJ, his guardians wanted him to stay in school and make friends so skipping 2 years was the best he was allowed to do, and he was only allowed to do that because Gwen had done it too. When Jade and the rest were studying for upcoming tests, Peter was apparently reading papers recently published by various scientists and their relevant work which he kept in his backpack. Though Harry could discuss such things with his fellow university teachers, Stearns knew nothing about computers and Connors knew nothing about physics. If they were willing to talk about their own research that'd be fine, but neither would give details about their projects and wouldn't speak about it even if Harry guessed. So Peter was the only person with multiple interests Harry could speak the same language with and bounce around to various topics without receiving dead, blank looks from the other party. The next day Harry informed the university that he was going to visit the shuttle's crew and asked for someone to take over his classes. Professors Connors and Stearns offered to teach his classes as long as Harry told them how the kids were doing when he got back, which Harry easily agreed to. Harry confirmed through some hacking that the Storm Foundation was not doing great. They'd apparently invested nearly everything into this project, which is why they had almost full control. However, not only did they come out with nothing, but the shuttle malfunctioned, contracts were terminated, fines were levied, and everything was crashing around them like the cabbages in that shipping boat. At this point they'd be lucky if at the end of the day they were able to keep their main office in the Baxter building at the other end of the city. The reason they were at Oscorp was because Norman had apparently footed the bill for healthcare as a PR stunt, and it was actually working out very well for the man. Harry wanted to ask Susan what happened to the shielding and determine what effects the power Cosmic would have on his students and their friends. He'd brought over a large suitcase with a lot of tools and headed out for the building they were being kept in. Thankfully, Osborn liked to have everything in one place. His research site and standard personnel were all in the same building, so there was no guard to prevent Harry from walking in. Harry walked right up to the desk and said, "Hello, may I know the room and floor the crew from the Storm Shuttle are being kept?" The woman at the other end of the counter said, "No unauthorized personnel are allowed in the tower, sir, and no visitors have been authorized as they crew are under quarantine receiving the best medical care money can provide." Harry rolled his eyes at the obviously scripted lines and said, "They are under quarantine because they got exposed to weird energies, right? Well, I'm Harry Potter, the best expert you're going to find in weird energies. Please do me and yourself a favor and call your boss's boss and tell him Harry Potter is here to see those four." The woman looked at Harry for a moment before making another call. A few moments later she said, "Third elevator on the right, 15th floor. Someone will be waiting for you there." Harry nodded and thanked the woman. If nothing else, this should prove to be interesting. Author's note. The four are getting the same powers as normal. I just didn't like their original comic origin story where a band of cosmic energy randomly comes out of nowhere in space and gives them powers. So I added a few details which makes it seem less like something which happens all the time. Now what do you think Norman is going to do with four super-powered humans leaking highly unstable radiation? Let's see how many origin stories I can squeeze out of this one. Serious question though, what is the first villain the Fantastic Four should debut against? Not Doom, he comes in later. They are getting the title of first superheroes in this FIC, so I need them to unite against something, and fight it publicly that will earn that title. I'm seriously tempted to just do Mole Man Chapter 63. Chapter 63, An Invitation to the UN. Once the elevator's door to the 15th floor opened, Harry saw an older goggle-wearing gentleman in a lab coat waiting for him. "Dr. Potter, my name is Otto Octavius. I'm glad you could come because we have a real head-scratcher here." Harry offered his hand for a greeting and said, "Dr. Octavius, I've read all of your work in the field of energy physics." Otto shook his hand and returned a smirk. "And I yours. I wish our first meeting could have been under better circumstances though. Please, follow me." Otto escorted Harry through several security doors and past a few guards and a metal detector and scanner. He asked Harry to put his suitcase through. Harry didn't argue, as there was no point in the schematics of the toys in his suitcase being derived, as it was pretty simple and used metagems as a base. As he took him through the checkpoints, Otto said, "The four were exposed to something which I can't make heads or tails of. Each one is experiencing different symptoms, I guess you could say. Every bit of lab work has yielded more questions than answers." Harry asked, "Symptoms?" Otto shook his head and said, "Show is better than tell at this point. We've arrived." Otto gestured to a plane of glass, and on the other side were four beings, in a room with four gurneys. Reed Richards' head looked mostly normal, but it was near the ceiling with a neck stretching several feet. In his hand was a tablet he used to read, being held by arms which had also stretched several feet. There was another tablet which appeared to be floating back and forth through the room. However, the ghost-like figure of Susan Storm would flicker next to it, showing she was holding it while pacing. Johnny Storm seemed to be on fire. Kinda. Flames would ignite over his chest and arms and die out without burning his skin or causing any noticeable discomfort. In the corner was an orange boulder that reached up to the ceiling in height. Further inspection showed the boulder appeared to have been carved into a humanesque silhouette of a giant stone man crouching on the ground next to a crushed flat gurney. It looked to be several tons in weight and took up nearly a fifth of the space in the room. Harry asked, "Guessing that's Ben Grimm?" Otto answered, "The mineralization of his cells started while he was in the ambulance and soon covered his whole body. What scans we were able to get before he changed into that thing indicated that even his organs appeared to have partially mineralized, though his blood is normal. Ms. Storm, as you can see, has a natural field around her capable of bending light. Mr. Storm, according to our readings, causes oxygen near him to combust into fire, yet Mr. Storm himself is not burnt nor harmed. And Mr. Richards' body has gained malleability of interminable limits." Harry said, "I'd like to go in to check on them." Otto answered, "I do not know if what is afflicting them can be spread. Are you sure? I have a few ideas on what happened, and there is no risk of this spreading through proximity, contacts, or most forms of interaction. Is that so? Care to enlighten me?" Harry shook his head. "I would, but it makes no sense. I'll explain it to them, and I'm sure that room has recordings, so you'll find out when they do." "Very well." Otto walked over to the door into that room and swiped his keycard and entered a 9-digit PIN code. The door opened and Harry saw everyone turn to face him as he walked in. Susan asked, Professor Potter. Harry said, Ms. Storm, good to see you. He looked up to Reed's head and said, Mr. Richards, glad to see you're up and about. He looked over to the corner where Ben was sitting next to Johnny and said, My God, Johnny, you're hideous? What happened to you? The male Storm sibling eloquently responded with, What? Harry continued in horror, You're covered in warts, moles, pimples and zits, all over your face. Johnny shouted back in horror, No. His body completely covered itself in flames as he rushed off the apparently ash-covered gurney over to a mirror. He couldn't see his face beneath the flames, so he took a few breaths which seemed to calm the flames, and a moment later his pretty boy face was revealed in the reflection. Harry said, Oh, false alarm. That's just your normal face. Johnny turned to look over at Harry and shouted, Hey, that wasn't funny. The massive orange boulder started chuckling and Susan started giggling. Harry blatantly laughed at Johnny, which caused Ben to join him in openly laughing along with Susan and even Reed. Johnny realized he'd just been used to relieve the stress of everyone in the room with a harmless prank but couldn't help but pout. This caused everyone to laugh even harder, and even he couldn't stop a small smirk from appearing at the corner of his lips. Harry opened up his suitcase and walked over to Ben and pulled out a few tools for measuring energy. Most of them were not as good as his own energy sense, but they could list off things he'd miss. As Harry started talking readouts, he asked aloud, So, about those energy shields I gave you the designs for. Everyone in the room gave a collective grunt or sigh. Susan said, The funds for the modifications were given to the project managers and they said it was done. From an outward appearance, it even looked like the shielding was installed. But the investigation last night showed that the materials that made the shielding work weren't included, meaning someone just took the money and made it look like they did it. Reed shook his head, It was our main engineer. He apparently thought that the shields he designed were good enough and didn't like to use other people's work. Ben's voice rumbled out, and he pocketed the money anyways. When I get my hands on him. Trying to divert the conversation, Reed said, Professor Potter, do you know what type of energy we were exposed to? I've got an idea. I was in contact with a teacher of mine last night and we discussed some possibilities. The conclusion she suggested was impossible, but it seems she was correct. Ben said, Give it to me straight, Professor. Am I going to look like this forever? Harry answered, Not if you don't want to. Susan asked, Can we be cured? Harry shook his head. Not in the way you're thinking. If someone goes to war and comes back a different person, you can't cure them back to who they were before they left. You're never going to be who you were before you left, and you're going to have to accept that. But returning Ben to a form that can walk into a fast food restaurant without being stared at and getting the rest of you into a state where you can live your lives the way you want to live them is doable. Everyone, especially Ben, gave a relieved sigh at that. Reed asked, Can you tell us what you think happened? Harry answered, Well, according to my teacher, you were exposed to a form of energy which she didn't think has existed for almost 14 billion years. According to her theory, before the Big Bang, there was only one form of energy. It was called power cosmic, but you can consider it primordial energy. When the Big Bang occurred, the power cosmic gave birth to all other forms of energy. Susan and Reed simultaneously said, That's impossible. Harry nodded, I thought so too. But if you really think about it, maybe not. All of you can think of a few ways to turn one form of energy into another, right? If there are an infinitely number of ways to turn different forms of energy into another, then perhaps all forms of energy really do originate from the same source. Reed said, and after we were exposed to this power cosmic, it started breaking down into a different form of energy in each of us, which would explain how we all have different conditions. Harry tapped on his instruments and after a few moments said, Mostly correct. This might be a bit tricky. I thought that at some point, all the power cosmic in your bodies would convert to another form of energy. After that, I could use a few means to flush it all out which, with some proper therapy, would return you to normal. However, it seems that in addition to some of it breaking down into a random form of energy for each of you, the power cosmic is also absorbing background radiation and converting it back into power cosmic. Susan said with some alarm, but that would make it an endless cycle. Harry took a few more readings to confirm it, but it was true. The spheres of power cosmic he'd experimented with didn't have this reaction. Basically, some of the power cosmic had merged with their life force, making each of them a bit similar to a demon sorcerer, which caused it to stabilize instead of breaking down. The stabilized power cosmic absorbed background radiation, which was converted into unstable power cosmic, which then broke down into a random form of energy for each of them. Without dealing with the power cosmic merged into their life force, the cycle would continue indefinitely. Another matter was that Ben appeared to have far more power cosmic stored in his body than the others, probably because he had just gotten through the airlock door when the wave hit. Harry took out some metal straps and connected them together while putting some heavy-duty magic into them. None of his equipment could actually help them, he just brought it as a cover for the magic he would try. After connecting the straps, he said to Ben, You have the most power cosmic stored inside you, which is why you have the largest outward changes. It is absorbing background radiation at a much faster pace than everyone else and converting it into the energy which caused your body to mineralize. This band will isolate you from the background radiation and, if I'm right, will drastically lower the amount of mineralization energy in your body. Ben presented his massive wrist, which had a 4-foot circumference. The multiple bands Harry connected together were long enough to wrap around it, and Harry clicked it into place. Ben's boulder-esque face frowned for a moment. I can feel something. Wait. Yeah. He took in a few breaths and cracks were forming around his body. Reed shouted, Ben. Harry confirmed with his energy sense what was happening and said, it's fine. The enchanted bands were basically anti-magic items which isolated the wearer from other forms of energy. Pieces of orange rock fell off his body and slowly formed a massive pile around him, revealing something beneath it. Beneath the rubble, Ben seemed to be using his arms to wipe off the stone and dust. He walked out of the rubble pile revealing a smaller rock person at a little over 6 feet in height with an outline that more closely resembled Ben's frame the last time Harry saw him. His boulder-like exterior was smoother and looked closer to bulky muscles than it did a human boulder. Ben looked at his hands and orange rock fingers. The band had a lot of elastic and had tightened as Ben shrunk, so it was still securely on his wrist. Ben walked over to the mirror and looked at his carved features. The bands weren't perfect and couldn't block all background radiation, and even if it could, Ben's body was still saturated with the mineralization energy, so without cleansing that, he'd still be a stone man. Harry said, this is just a band-aid using the stuff I brought with me. If I work alone, I should be able to make something that can give you back your normal appearance in a few months. If Reed works with me, I should be able to do it faster. Reed said, yes, absolutely. Ben said, it's definitely an improvement, Professor. Now I can fit out the door and we can get out of here. Think I'd fit in the elevator? Harry said, yeah. I'd estimate you weigh about 1,000 pounds and the elevators here are graded up to 1,200 pounds. Johnny asked, is that safe? We're not contagious or anything, right? Harry shook his head. You are literally absorbing more radiation than you are emitting. There is less background radiation in this room than anywhere else in New York at the moment. The energy the power cosmic is converting into is only affecting you. If Mr. Richards wrapped himself around a naked woman and allowed her to wear him as a dress, she wouldn't be affected no matter how long she wore him. Johnny, Ben, and especially Reed nearly choked on that idea, and the blush Reed was sporting elicited another round of laughter from Johnny and Ben and a slight glare from Susan. Harry made some more bands and said, these should inhibit your newfound abilities, but don't wear them at all times. Unlike Ben, you guys only have small amounts of power cosmic and I can already tell that it is controllable. Johnny asked, how can you tell? Reed answered for him, because he observed that our emotions affected our powers. It is not a passive effect like it is with Ben. It was obvious they had already discussed this before Harry got there and arrived at the same conclusion. Harry said, Dr. Octavius, open up. I'll sign their release papers. The door opened a moment later and Dr. Octavius said, of course. If there is no danger, then there is no reason these four cannot return home. Please follow me. They also have to sign a few things. And then we can be on our way. Reed returned to a normal size once the band was on and Johnny was no longer the incredible matchman. Susan remained in the visible spectrum of light and they all walked out and looked over the papers. Harry paused to check what they were signing and sighed. The fine print was subtle, but it basically said that Oscorp had the right to publish the findings of their stay here. That in itself wasn't much. But when combined with a few loopholes in various laws, it meant that the blood and test samples acquired by Oscorp during the Four's stay could be used for their own research purposes. There wasn't anything Harry could do to remove those samples, so he'd just have to pay closer attention to Oscorp in the future. Harry made a few calls and got a moving company truck to park in front of Oscorp and bring a massive trench coat, hat, and sunglasses for Ben to put on before leaving the building. Oscorp was quite good at keeping cameras off their street, but Harry still didn't want Ben's appearance to cause too much of a ruckus. Once they all jumped in the back of the moving truck, Harry said, where are you going to be staying at? I know some good plumbers and manufacturers. I can have them refit Ben's space with a larger, unbreakable toilet, shower, couch, and bed. Reed looked shocked at that when he realized he hadn't thought of that. He was too focused on getting them back to normal to think about how they'd live until then. Susan said, that won't be necessary, Professor. We can take care of those matters ourselves. Harry gave her an amused look and said, I never said I'd do it for free. I just know most of the best companies in New York and can hook you up with some quality service at a decent discount. Potter and Gold Bank and Trust had partial ownership of nearly 100 small and medium-sized businesses. With a pinch of magic to ensure that they could compete against the larger companies, the stores Harry had access to had higher quality products at a better cost than most, and with a discount from Harry, it was definitely the best deal. Susan said, oh, in that case, yes please. Johnny asked, know any place that can make fireproof pajamas and beds? Harry gave him a few numbers and addresses. Reed asked, so when can we start creating a stronger band? Harry said, next weekend. I'd do it this weekend, but I need to visit the UN for a somewhat important meeting. All four rapidly looked at Harry with an incredulous expression. Johnny asked, the heck? Wouldn't that require you to be serious and stuff? Harry shook his head. Of course not. If I have to be serious, I'll just imitate my godfather, Sirius Black, who is the self-proclaimed best prankster in the UK. Ben chuckled, so you're going there to prank those tidy suit-wearing fancy pants? If the situation calls for it. The main reason I'm going is because I got a request for a meeting from Wakanda, a self-isolated region in Central Africa. They always send their royalty overseas for schooling, and it seems the princess wants to enroll next semester in my classes. It was a very interesting invitation and I've never pranked royalty before, so I'm definitely interested. Johnny started laughing. Man, I really want to enroll next semester too. Susan said, you don't have the required courses and you failed the advanced placement test the last 3 times you took it. Harry's classes had an optional advanced placement test that one could take. 100 questions, 2.5 hours. If you scored 85% or more, you could take the class without the prerequisite courses, which was how Jean and a few others got into the class. Of course, the questions came from a list of over 10,000 Harry had made, so taking it over and over again wouldn't help unless you learned the material. Susan asked for them to be dropped off at the Baxter building and Harry would ensure the renovators were there before noon. He knew that Reed would try to get a head start on the research by using his tools to check the band Harry gave him, but unfortunately it would not do too much good as it was enchanted with Harry's undetectable magic. Harry also told Susan and Reed not to worry about classes. He'd have 2 desks delivered to the Baxter building that had a built-in hologram system. It wasn't hard light, but it linked to the hard light system in Harry's class briefcase so that when Susan and Reed sat in the desks, a hard light copy of them would appear in the desks in class, and the holograms the desks displayed would make it appear as if they were in class. Thus they could attend class from the comfort of the Baxter building. The fact that Harry could also use them in more pranks went unsaid, but it wasn't like they could argue against it. The next day, Harry confirmed with the university staff some of the details of the students' conditions but couldn't offer much. It wasn't so much classified as it was that Harry wouldn't divulge their privacy. Susan and Reed were both getting multiple doctorates at the same time, and much of that was self-study, so other than attending Harry's class, they could complete their papers and research this semester from their lab at the Baxter building without issue. After they completed their dissertations, they'd be Dr. Richards and Dr. Storm in a few months. The following weekend, Harry in a nice business suit took out his visitor's badge and entered the United Nations headquarters in New York. He came a bit early as this was his first time here, and 5 minutes later he found someone he knew. Dr. Doom. Fancy meeting you here. Harry's energy sense could spot Doom from the other side of the building, and he was the only person in the UN with an energy signature. Victor von Doom answered back, Professor. What brings you to the cesspool of the earth? As the ruler of Latveria, Doom of course would occasionally have business at the UN, so it was not a surprise to see him there. Harry gave a smirk and said, I've got a meeting with the Prince of Wakanda in a little bit. His little sister wants to attend my class next semester. Doom's eyebrow lifted in slight surprise. The fact that he was willing to display even a little emotion to Harry showed that he did not view his professor in the same way he viewed most. Doom asked, What do you know of Wakanda? Besides the fun facts off Wikipedia? I ran into and captured one of their drones a few years back. Perhaps not the most advanced, but certainly in the top 10 of most advanced things I've seen built by humans on this planet. When Harry blew up Sinister's mountain, he decided to stick around for a while and see who would poke their nose into it. The drone that showed up was acquired by Harry and determined to have vibranium circuitry. It didn't take much effort to figure out where the vibranium came from. Doom nodded. Most would be discreet or subtle about such knowledge, but neither applied to Harry. Doom was a politician among other things, but even he found Harry's behavior refreshing compared to the back-to-back meetings filled with political double-speech. Doom said, Behind a massive hologram in their territory is an advanced city built on technology based on the wonders of vibranium. You once told me the world we live in is based on its composition. As the world's only stable source of vibranium, their world is very different from ours. Harry shook his head. If that is the case, then Wakanda has the fanciest chains in the world. Supporting yourself on a resource you cannot share will chain you down and limit you. It was well known that Wakanda claimed they had a tiny, meager amount of vibranium, and they even claimed all of it was stolen 20 years ago. If that was a lie, it was a lie that had shackled their entire country. Speaking from experience, Doom asked. Harry nodded. Oh yeah. Parents grew up in a community that had a large amount of advantages over others, but they kept it to themselves to avoid being taken advantage of for centuries. Sure, hundreds of years ago that community was far above everyone else. But the need for secrecy to hide those resources chained their progress, and eventually the world caught up and surpassed that community. If Wakanda doesn't open up, they will eventually get surpassed and all of their advantages will become meaningless. Doom sighed and said, Far too many people look at Wakanda and turn green with envy. You on the other hand actually pity them. Harry shrugged. I don't see things the same way others do. In any case, I'm off to see a prince about a princess. Harry walked up a few stairs and through a few halls to the meeting room. The door opened before he could knock, and he was met by the Wakandan ambassador who invited him in to meet Prince T'Challa. On first impression, the man seemed to be the third fittest person Harry had ever met, behind the Mandarin and Logan. Harry's energy senses, however, were conspicuously dull against him, which meant something was muffling natural life energy emitted by most things. Harry doubted the vibranium in the suit the man was wearing was specifically there to dull energy senses, but it was an interesting idea from Harry's perspective. Though a bit lavish, T'Challa offered Harry a hand which Harry took and exchanged a strong grip. Harry was at least pleased at the surprise on the man's face from Harry's strength. This guy's warrior path rank was possibly higher than Harry's, but not his base strength. After a moment, Prince T'Challa said, Professor Potter, I thank you for agreeing to meet me here today. It's not a problem, though, I must ask. As long as an applicant passes the placement test with a high enough score to interest me, I would approve them as a student without a meeting. So why did you wish to meet? Apologies, but I did not approve of my sister's interests in your class. I wanted to meet you myself to see what kind of person you were. Harry smiled. If that is the case, then I am sorry, but you have wasted your time. I am not the type of person you can understand after a short meeting. With that, Harry turned to leave. He didn't have to cater to the needs of royals after all. Wait, please. I do not wish for a misunderstanding. I just want what is best for my sister. Harry said, so you're not using your sister's application into my class as an excuse for a meeting because you want something from me or you want to ask something of me. Just because Harry didn't use political doublespeech didn't mean he didn't understand it. Doom was the sovereign ruler of Latveria and he got in with an email and a 93% on the placement test, the highest score. Susan and Reed actually met the class's prerequisites so they didn't need to take the placement test. Doom's position was technically as high as T'Cholla's father, much less the princess, so there was no need for a face-to-face meeting. Everyone in the room frowned as Harry had skipped straight to the main point they intended to wiggle to over the course of a long conversation which they probably hoped would involve Harry begging to allow the princess into his class. Harry said, the only thing you need to know about me is that I take responsibility for my students and ensure an environment where students can get as far as the effort they put into learning. I understand the princess is only 16 at the moment, so even if she does not apply next semester, she can apply to others after my class has a bit more history. There is no point in requesting a personal meeting. T'Cholla was about 29 and his sister was 13 years younger. According to Wikipedia anyways. The Wakandan ambassador asked, then why did you agree to a meeting? Harry smirked, because it's funny. I wanted to see if Wakanda was worth my time. However, using family as an excuse is a bit low, don't you think? The ambassador sighed and said, you're not the easiest person in the world to meet after all. Harry rolled his eyes. I have a house and it has a door. You could have knocked. Yes, the street is filled with surveillance, but that's a normal hurdle to go through. I doubt any of you actually care that in a week or so I'll likely have men in suits show up and ask me what our conversation was about, right? Did you think I would lie for you? The ambassador was about to answer when T'Cholla stopped him. You are correct. My apologies. I do not trust easily and for good reason. Harry shrugged. Don't blame me for saying this, but that's your problem. Trust is easy under two circumstances. When you are not afraid of people knowing your secrets, and when you are confident people cannot discover your secrets. If you can't trust easily, that means you have secrets you don't have confidence to keep, and that is, entirely, your problem. The ambassador actually chuckled at that, which earned a glare from T'Cholla which was only returned with amusement. Before either could continue, the ground, walls, and ceiling began to shake. Every guard in the room looked like they were about to pull something out but hesitated when they remembered Harry was still in the room. Harry knelt down and put his hand on the floor and said, huh, the building is sinking. Everyone else in the room turned to face a window and noticed that the ground from about 30 feet away from the window down the way was rising up, slowly but surely. Like a massive elevator, the entire UN was being lowered into the earth, and in less than a minute the sun could no longer be seen as the edge of the edge they were descending into got higher and higher. After about 2 minutes the descending stopped. The pit the UN was now in was over 400 feet down into the earth. What are those? One of the guards pointed out the window at a mass of orange humanoids being led by a small number of short, pale humanoids out of various tunnels at the end of the hole. The orange ones were as large as Ben and numbered in the hundreds. And that was just what Harry saw out that window. If the same numbers were outside the other sides of the UN, that would mean they were surrounded by thousands of them. Once the orange men reached the wall, some entered through the door while the rest directly scaled up to the window. Moments after they were seen, the window to the meeting room was shattered and 4 massive orange beings entered through. A pale person on the back of one of them said in English, surrender and come with us. Your only hope of safety is to come peacefully. One of the guards drew a silver sword and directly pierced one of the orange beings. The creature did not bleed. A moment later its fist slammed forward and the guard was sent into the wall with a firm crack. The pale man laughed. The Oni-men cannot be harmed by blades nor bullets. You will come with us willingly or come with us in pieces. The choice is yours. Harry struggled to not laugh aloud. He was getting kidnapped. Could this day get any better? Ping. New quest, Lord of Pranks. Use pranks to slow down the migration of the hostages to give the time needed for reinforcements. The more pranks you pull, the higher the reward. Harry smiled brightly. That certainly answered that question. Author's note. Please note that much of this stuff I'm making up as I go. I already bumped Spider-Man's age by a bunch of years, so I'm bumping up T'Cholla's sister Shuri by the same amount. I thought about having T'Cholla in class, but even without changing ages, as of 2009, he's 29, so that's not a great option. No idea if Shuri will join the harem of maybe I'll pair her with Peter. No idea. Speaking of Peter, should he get the standard Peter Spider package or does anyone want him to have a few extras? Could easily have the spider be given some of Susan's blood and its bite grants invisibility and energy blasts, giving Peter the Miles Morales package. Oh, and go ahead and give me any ideas you have for pranks. I have a few which are insidiously diabolical, but if anyone else knows some to inflict on the hostages, the Moloids, or Mole Man himself, feel free to add it. Chapter 64, Chapter 64 The Mighty Mole Man. Author's note. Do not drink milk while reading this chapter. You were warned. Chapter 64 The Mighty Mole Man? Prince T'Cholla was the first to speak. Who do you think you are? Even as they waited for an answer, an endless stream of Oni men entered through the window and walked through the door into the hallway, filling the UN and looking for more people to capture. The pale humanoid said, I am Kryze the Moloid, a subordinate of the ruler of Subterranea. T'Cholla asked, Subterranea? Harry answered, Subterranea is one of the massive, country-sized spaces that exists below the surface of the earth. Specifically, the one that is closest to the surface. However, I was not aware they had a ruler. The Ancient One told Harry a few things about Subterranea, as it was the location of the Fountain of Youth. The Ancient One found it a few hundred years back, and though Harry knew of Meloids and Lava Men, he'd never heard of Oni Men and certainly didn't know about a ruler. Relatively speaking, that meant this ruler had only come into power recently. Cry said, the ruler came into power and united Subterranea many years ago. You will be taken to him. The Meloid took out a ray-gun-looking weapon. Come peacefully. Or not, he said with a vicious grin. The guards and prince exchanged glances and T'Challa said, lead the way. Another 2 Meloids had already entered the room on the backs of Oni Men, so there wasn't much of a point in killing them. Outnumbered is outnumbered, and the effects of those ray guns were not known. The sound of screams, shouts, and panicked gunfire echoed through the halls as they were escorted down the stairs. Harry wondered if the Meloids had a map of this place, but figured it might be another sense. The halls were filled with Oni Men, and minutes after the assault the occupants of the UN were already outnumbered 10 to 1, and that number was rising with each moment. Harry got out his cell phone and texted Jean and the rest. I'm being kidnapped by mole people and taken to the underground kingdom of Subterranea along with all the world's leaders. Smiley face. A moment later he got a text back from Jean. What the fuck? Harry texted back, I got a quest which implies if I do nothing, we'll be rescued. The quest was to do as many pranks as possible before we get rescued, so don't interfere. I want time for more pranks and you'd rescue us too fast. Fine. We'll watch the news. Stay safe, Harry. The prince noticed that Harry was on his phone and that the Meloids apparently didn't care. T'Challa took out his own communicator and after frowning said, I don't have a signal down here. Harry turned back and smiled, then you don't have a Brilliance Incorporated phone. T'Challa and his guards noticed that a number of other hostages already had their phones out and were making calls and texting without issues. It was obvious they did have such phones, and T'Challa seemed a little aggravated about that. It wasn't entirely his fault. Most signals are sent parallel to the Earth, and unless it is specified to do so. Harry figured those phones had some vibranium and maybe worked with a satellite, but such phones would only work in this hole if the satellite was directly above the hole the UN sank into. Otherwise there was no line of sight. Harry's phones on the other hand sent signals through the astral plane and were not impeded by such things. Moments later Harry got another message, though it was not a text so much as a pop-up on the phone screen. Are you being kidnapped? If yes, click here, and your phone will go into surveillance mode. The rear camera's feed will be enabled and streamed directly to authorities to be used to assist the rescue effort. While in surveillance mode, please keep conversations to a minimum and hold the phone forward or place it in a forward-facing pocket. Every one of the hostages with a working Brilliance phone got the message from what Harry could see. T'Challa had no idea what was going on, so Harry showed the screen to the prince and his guards before clicking on the confirm icon and placing the phone in his front pocket in a way the camera would stick out. There was a small childlike face with pointy ears wearing a green cap in the corner of the message, which told Harry who the sender was. Link, the AI which was born in Harry's server, apparently caught on to the situation, and since he was monitoring Harry's text messages and knew Harry was waiting for someone else to rescue him, Link decided to take some initiative for himself and set this up. Link had quite a lot of authority under his belt, so it wouldn't surprise Harry if some of the Squib employees of Brilliance Inc. would likely be dispatched to the UN and set up a command center which would give all the intel of what was going on to whoever was in charge out there. That would certainly make for good publicity later. Once they were out of the UN, the group saw 2 massive monsters. One of them was green and about 3 stories tall with a head similar to that of a gaping frog with an enormous mouth and massive claws at the end of its arms. The second looked like a cross between a hydra and a drake. It had 2 massive wings on its back and 3 dragon-like heads extending from 3 necks. It was even taller than the first monster. A number of screams were scattered across the groups as each saw the pair of massive monsters. Many people pointed their cameras at the pair to make sure whoever came here knew what they were up against. The Meloid leading them said, "Do not hope for rescue. Thousands of Oni men will stay here and guard the path while Giganto and Tricephalus will lead us to Subterranea." Harry had magically conjured a stack of paper which were each spelled with a color charm he used to imprint a message on the paper and a powerful notice me not targeted only towards the Meloids. One by one, Harry removed a sheet of paper at a time and stuck it to the backs of the Oni men. The signs said "Kick me." The Wakandan prince exchanged bizarre glances with his guards who each had their own thoughts on the matter. Most of them revolved around, "Do fuck is this guy doing? And did he already have those ready when he came to the U.N?" Harry noticed Victor Von Doom being escorted to Harry by a lone Oni man. From Harry's senses, this particular mushroom man was actually dead, and Victor had inserted some kind of mechanical frame inside it to puppet it. As long as it was near him, the Meloids wouldn't question it much. The Meloids weren't difficult to influence with telepathy as long as the command did not counter their loyalty to their ruler, so Harry made the group watching them ignore the fact that Harry left their group and walked over to Doom. Doom showed Harry the pop-up on his phone and asked, "Is this your doing?" "No, someone at my company decided to take some initiative. I'll get them a fruit basket later." Harry walked by Doom's side as they were escorted further into the tunnels. Doom asked, "What's your plan?" Harry tapped his chest to point out that his phone's camera was on and the conversation would be recorded. "Wait for rescue and have some fun." He tagged another 4 Oni men with kick me signs under the eyes of hundreds of ambassadors and guards, most of which could only stare bug-eyed at Harry's antics. The Oni men weren't the target of this prank, it was the witnesses watching Harry do something so ridiculous. Once they reached a large, main tunnel, Harry took out a large handful of marbles from his inventory and banished them down into the depths of the tunnel. No one saw him pull them out, enchant them, or send them away, so what happened next would not be connected to him. A number of Maloids walked near the walls, the front of the group, and the back of the group and carried lit torches which illuminated the passages. Most of them, those in the front, could only see the massive back of Giganto who led the group, and those in the back dared not turn around and face the 3 heads of Tricephalus who tailed behind them. Suddenly, several small mounds of dirt rose up, eliciting shrieks of terror from those whose nerves were already strained. What emerged from the ground was, unsurprisingly, groundhogs. Each one poked its head out from the dirt and looked around. In the next moment, they started screaming with the voice of an adult male in frustrated rage. Arrgh. This freaked out a number of people and got the Maloid's attention. Harry used the chance to post more kick me signs. Aaaaaaaaghh. A random groundhog popped up nearby and shouted with more air than such tiny lungs could possibly hold. The tunnel acted as an echo chamber and many held their ears. The Maloids looked particularly pissed and started running over to the screaming groundhogs and stomp on them. However, right before the foot hit the ground, the groundhogs would quickly duck into the safety of their hole. Thus began the historical event streamed to many sources of the Maloids' first whack-a-mole game. The speed of the group was almost halved as the Maloids would be too distracted by the screaming groundhogs to effectively corral the humans. After a few more minutes they passed the entrance to a side tunnel. Next to the tunnel was a wooden sign that said, Goblin Dungeon. Recommended level, 515. No one wanted to try to sneak through there. After a few incidents, Harry figured out what those ray guns did. Apparently they caused blindness. Harry didn't know if it was permanent or not, but those who attacked the Maloids were directly blinded and bound by the Oni men and carried down the tunnel. After another 10 minutes they come to a massive intersection of tunnels. Giganto stopped and the Maloids shouted, "What's wrong?" The massive monster pointed forward and the torch-bearing Maloids walked ahead, illuminating the path. They found that the intersection was currently filled by animals crossing the path. Hundreds of dodo birds and pandas were slowly walking down the tunnel from one end to the other, preventing them from getting through to the other side of their own path. The rest of the group had caught up and saw the massive migration of hundreds of extinct birds and nearly extinct pandas calmly walking through the tunnels, and none of them could think of anything to say. Except the groundhogs who were still following them, of course. After a few minutes, the line of pandas and dodo birds crossing the path ended and the last of them walked into the distance. This was probably the largest, most complex illusion Harry had ever cast, and he couldn't keep it up forever, of course. The life energy in the marbles would hold the transfigured groundhogs for a while, so they'd be fine, but other illusions were not so easy to maintain for such long durations. The company started moving once more. Almost 200 Oni men now had kick me signs, and most were wondering where Harry was keeping all that paper. Harry already confirmed through technopathic communications that his feed, along with many others, was being directed to the makeshift command center set up by army personnel near the edge of the crater. Apparently they were having difficulties because sending reinforcements down a 400-foot vertical hole in any meaningful way was not something they had practice with. Although they were being given all the information on numbers, maps, and directions, they were still basically waiting to set up a pulley system that could send down tanks. 400 feet was not enough to deploy a parachute, so they couldn't just drop the tanks in from that height unless they flew a cargo plane over the hole, and even then they couldn't guarantee the accuracy of the landings. They were considering dropping napalm, but that was instantly vetoed because it would destroy the UN headquarters, where they had already confirmed some had successfully hidden from the Maloids, and the blast could follow the tunnel and kill the UN hostages or collapse the tunnel itself. The best they could do was helicopters, but they had no way to drop off a large amount of personnel with helicopters while those Oni men were down there, since they'd already confirmed bullets did nothing to them. Because they had to take the remaining personnel hidden in the UN, the collapsing of the tunnel, and these strange bulletproof brutes into account, every plan they could rely on in the past was useless. A large number of military personnel, heads of various agencies, and even reporters were watching the feeds from the various cameras, trying to come up with one plan after another. A collective sigh of futility was shared by all every time they saw Harry stick another kick me sign on an Oni man. At first they were confused. Then they were irritated. Now they were already weary of the insane antics of the world's youngest professor. The fact that Harry apparently came to the UN with a massive stack of kick me signs was already a topic of debate for banning him from the premises for life, but it wasn't something people really cared for at the moment. The groundhogs were also getting on the viewers' nerves, but as the act of trying to whack them slowed down their progress, so they could only give up. Thankfully a program was already made which lowered the volume during the screams, so the intensity of the screaming would not affect those monitoring everything. Then there were the strange things they encountered along the way. There were less than 2,000 pandas in the wild, yet hundreds of them, along with dodo birds, randomly crossed their path and delayed the group for a period of time before they moved on. Several experts were called in and showed the video, but none of them could come up with an answer that made any sense. They passed several more side tunnels with signs which read things like Undead Dungeon, Troll Dungeon, and Demon Dungeon, each with recommended levels higher than the last. The so-called experts had no idea what to make of those. This was real life. Not a game? Of course, those weren't the only peculiarities found. Many ambassadors with brilliance phones did not turn on surveillance mode, but they could be seen by those around them who did. Every once in a while, one of them would slip on something and land flat on their backs. When the camera zoomed in on what they slipped on, it turned out to be a banana peel. Every single time. What some noticed but few mentioned was that each of those who repeatedly slipped were ambassadors from corrupt nations or regions who got their positions through less than noble means. The footage of them slipping on a banana peel would be pirated directly to their country later and used to discharge them for incompetence. But that was a tale for another day. After almost an hour of walking, the group finally came to a massive chamber. Sitting impatiently on a stone throne room chair was a somewhat short, large-framed human in a green suit with a metal pole in his hand. He wore what appeared to be glasses but had only a thin slit for an opening, making others wonder how much he could see. As they approached, a manic grin revealed itself and the man spoke. Greetings, surface dwellers. I am Harvey Elder, or I once was. Now, I am the Mole Man, ruler of the underground kingdom of Subterranea. Harry wanted to pull out some popcorn, but that would be a bit too suspicious, even for him. Over 50 different men groaned with pain and were simultaneously slammed to the ground by the Oni men around them, each a security guard of some kind with a gun in their hand. From his throne, the Mole Man said, "Pulling your weapons in my presence is not so easy. Why do you think I didn't care to remove them? In the surface world, you sunbaked morons lord above all. But below the ground, I am the ruler. I am power incarnate. I am the Mole Man. You are nothing." A pair of heavily built guards who didn't pull their weapons rushed forward at the throne. Harry thought they looked Russian. The Mole Man pointed his metal pole at them and said, "Kneel." Harry felt the staff interact with gravity through a pulsing field, and both Russians fell to the ground on their knees as they struggled against the massive increase in gravity which afflicted them. Of course, to those who don't have energy senses, it simply looked like the two Russians rushed forward and quickly knelt down. He waved his staff and a concussive blast shot out from the edge and blasted the two men all the way back to where they started. Both men were groaning on the ground in pain. That caught Harry's interest. He was not familiar with any technology capable of what he just witnessed. It also answered his question of how the entire UN was descended. The Mole Man used some technology which increased the gravity of the ground beneath the UN, causing it to sink. The Mole Man got up from his throne and said, "Is there anyone else who wishes to challenge me?" Harry shouted out, "Not a challenge, but a question. What's behind that door?" Harry pointed to a wall near where they entered that had a sign on it that said, "Mole Man's Secret Stash." This threw the Mole Man off. "What? There is no door there." He marched forward to the wall and under the eyes of countless world leaders he opened the door. A massive pile of magazines fell out, reaching to his knees before they stopped spreading. The obviously poor-sighted Mole Man picked one up and held it close to see it. Then he dropped it and had a hint of a blush on his face. Not everyone had such poor eyesight in the room. All the people near the door could see exactly what kind of magazines those were. A large but fit middle-aged man in a red suit with spiky white hair tied in a ponytail behind him grinned and said aloud, "I see you are a man of culture." The Mole Man immediately refuted, "These are not mine." The pervert's smile only widened to the ruler of Subterranea's displeasure. The Mole Man walked out of the pile of pornos as if he decided to ignore their existence and said, "Leaders of the world, you have a decision to make. Surrender the surface to my armies or I will kill you all as an example and destroy the surface world." A majority of those watching him from the streaming feed agreed that the impact of his speech was lacking when he was still standing a few feet from the adult-rated pile. The crowd's silence actually caused the Mole Man to smile. "I hoped you would refuse." He returned to his throne and ordered some Moloids to bring out a massive map of the Earth. Within it were hundreds of lines crisscrossing beneath the crust. Mole Man pointed at the map and shouted, "Now, before I slay you all, behold my master plan. See this map of my underground empire? Each tunnel leads to a major city. As soon as I have wrecked every atomic plant, every source of earthly power, my mighty mole creatures will attack and destroy everything that lives above the surface." Harry couldn't help but ask, "Are you monologuing?" The Mole Man sneered and said, "You can die first. Bring him to me." 8 different Oni men walked behind Harry and shoved him forward to the throne. The Mole Man pointed his staff at Harry and said, "Any last words?" Harry's pocket started ringing. Harry raised a finger in the universal, "Give me a moment" gesture and pulled out a second phone and answered it. Harry nodded a few times and said, "It's for you." The Mole Man figured someone wanted to bargain for Harry's life and had a Moloid bring him the phone. Harry had already put the phone on speaker. He put the phone to his ear and said, "Yes. Are you Harvey Elder?" "Yes. What do you want?" "We've been trying to reach you concerning your vehicle's extended warranty. You should have received a notice in the mail about your car's extended warranty eligibility. Since we've not gotten a response, we're giving you a final courtesy call before we close out your file." The Mole Man hung up the call and tossed the phone away. Harry shrugged at the Mole Man's glare, but before the execution could continue, a strong current of wind erupted from behind the Mole Man's throne and flowed back out the tunnel the captives were led through. Harry pulled out his phone and a video started streaming on it. It showed a feed from above of a camera pointing down the crater where a cyclone of fire was rising up from where the mass of Oni men were gathered around the UN building. Giving it a closer look, one would notice that a bright figure was circling the UN headquarters. The heat generated seemed to be incinerating the stationed Oni men and drawing the air from the tunnels. The mole man shouted for some moloids who ran over and said a few things in his ear. The bright figure on the screen then stopped circling and entered through the main tunnel. A few moments later, a hover car piloted by a young man, a young woman, and an orange rock entered into the 400-foot deep hole and flew after flying fire down the same tunnel. The mole man said, "It seems the surface dwellers have seen fit to send a rescue party. No matter." He pointed his staff at Harry once more. And nothing happened. Harry pulled out a gizmo-looking device from his pocket and said, "Yeah, 0-point energy weapons aren't going to work on me. I calibrated this when I noticed how your staff magnifies the center of gravity of your target. A simple isolation system renders it useless." The mole man looked unperturbed. "Unfortunately for you, I have more than one trick up my sleeve. Oni-men, kill him." Harry was slowly surrounded once more and the mole man said, "And you accused me of monologuing." Harry smiled back as the Oni-men raised their arms to crush him and said, "It's great as a delaying tactic." A streak of fire shot out from the entrance and slammed into one of the three-headed drakes' faces as Harry ducked beneath the strike of the Oni-men and ran for it. The crowd all ran to the walls as a flying car swooped in and led off its 3 other passengers. It was of course Reed and the rest. The fact that Reed already had a flying car didn't surprise Harry in the slightest. He just didn't know if the man built it this week or prior to the launch. The mole man shouted, "Go, Giganto and Tricephalus! Destroy the surface dwellers." Johnny, who appeared to be using his flame aura as a form of propulsion, was sloppily flying around the 3-headed dragon while Ben charged at the massive frog-mouthed monster. The latter swiped its clawed hands against Ben but the razor edges merely skated across Ben's exterior. Susan was unsurprisingly nowhere to be seen and Reed stretched over to the mole man. He wrapped an arm around one of the Oni-men and pulled it towards him and then flung it around to smash the others surrounding Harry. Richards shouted, "It's over, mole man. I heard everything and we know exactly what you've planned. You intended on using 0-point energy to destroy power plants on the surface like you used it to sink the UN, right? As long as I get a copy of the frequency modulation Harry used to negate your staff, I render an energy sequencer to counteract the charge of the negative gravity. I can inhibit all systems which use 0-point energy near the Earth's surface." Reed's fist stretched in size and was flung at the mole man who quickly struck it with his staff and circled it around Reed's outstretched arm like a fork around a spaghetti noodle. He shouted, "Then it's a good thing you won't be leaving here alive? I am a master of holy moly bajutsu and you cannot defeat me." He continued twirling his staff which pulled in Reed's arm while sending blasts of concussive energy. Reed had to stretch from side to dodge. Giganto was large and slow and his claws could not hurt Ben but his size and strength both far exceeded Ben's own. The massive green monster was obviously not the intellectual type, but it only took a few exchanges for it to figure out that Ben could be smashed into the ground, forcing the latter to dodge more than attack. Tricephalus was actually using fire breath against Johnny. It didn't harm him but it did blast him into the wall which looked like it hurt all the same. While Reed was trying to get himself out of the mole man's grasp, the latter quickly jumped and spun around, knocking an invisible foe to the ground. This opening allowed Reed to unravel from the staff but Susan appeared to have suffered some damage. "You sun-baked fools. I am the mole man. I do not rely on sight to fight my battles. I can feel the presence of all around me and your invisibility is useless. You will all die here today." Reed helped Susan up and said, "No, we are going to stop you and save everyone here." The mole man gave a sarcastic sneer and said with spite, "You really think you four are so fantastic, do you? Well, Mr. Fantastic, what are you, that invisible girl, that thing over there, and that human torch gonna do?" Susan shouted, "We're gonna win, now Ben." Ben answered back, "Right." He pulled off the elastic bands around his wrist and suddenly started growing in size. Moments later he nearly matched Giganto in height. Ben shouted, "It's clobberin' time," and smashed Giganto's face in. Ben's massive form stepped in and dealt a barrage of blows staggering the monster back with each step. When the enormous monster appeared dazed, Ben reeled back and slammed his fist forward, smashing the monster into the air and to the other side of the cavern far behind the mole man's throne where it struck the back wall and caused the entire cavern to shake. Johnny braced himself in the air and when all 3 heads fired at him, this time he was not pushed back. Instead, his fire glowed brighter and brighter, showing he was actually absorbing the heat of the flames. Soon the drake's breath reached its end and Johnny pushed his hands forward and shot a white beam of pure heat. "My eyes." The hundreds of moloids commanding the Oni-men shouted in pain at the presence of the intense sunfire-like light that illuminated the cavern. The drake's scales were burned and melted through, forcing the 3-headed dragon to flee for its life. Johnny kept up his intense illumination which caused the moloids to run away after the back of Giganto and the fleeing Tricephalus. The cavern started rumbling and the mole man looked up with a hint of fear. He looked back over to Reed and shouted, "You may have won here but this is not over. I will have my revenge against you insufferably fantastic four." As the mole man turned to run away, a dozen gunshots echoed through the cavern from guards who decided now would be a great time to kill him. However, the green jumpsuit the man wore went over his head from the back and seemed impervious to gunfire. The cavern continued to rumble and half the hostages had already started running back the moment the moloids started running away. Harry noticed that one of those who stayed back to watch the fight was Victor Von Doom. It seemed he watched the whole thing from start to finish before he started running back himself. Partway through the run back, parts of the tunnel started collapsing. Ben had already put back on the wristband to return to a smaller size as his weight while running through the tunnels could have destabilized them further. A large boulder fell from the ceiling. Before Harry could do anything, he saw a barrier emerge for a second and shatter the rock before vanishing. He and a number of others turned and saw Susan's hand in the air. This event repeated a dozen more times along the way, with Susan creating a barrier to block the rocks from crushing the world leaders on the way back. When they reached the UN once more, the army had already set up pulley lifts to get everyone to the surface. Harry was sure he could work out something with Reed to get the UN back to the right height. He just had to figure out how much to charge first. Ping. Quest complete, Lord of Pranks. Reward, Apple of Discord. Harry smiled. Apparently he must have rated quite highly in the quest because this was the holy artifact of pranks. He wondered what he should do with it. Author's note. 99.999% of the time I do a quest, I have no idea what reward I'm going to give later and usually just wing it. As a fan of the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy, the Apple of Discord was the first thing to come to mind when it came to artifacts of pranking. It was either that or Loki's spell book, but that is something that should be saved for later, so Apple is it. No idea what to do with it, but I'm sure I'll figure something out. Chapter 65. Chapter 65. The Fantastic Four. Sitting in front of Harry may not have been the oddest thing he'd ever seen, but it at least ranked in the top 10. Well, 15-ish. It was a little bit smaller than an average-sized dog and slightly fuzzy. Its skin was bright purple and covered in wrinkles like a SPHYNX cat, though its ears were fluffy. Its head resembled a miniature hippo and it had a large tail half the length of its body that ended in a hardened claw-like appendage. On the creature's head were two horns, one tiny, set between its nostrils, while the other was large and curved, going from its forehead and extending back with a curve and a length twice the size of its skull. This was the result of an experiment using the Apple of Discord, Harry's trophy for being an awesome prankster. The apple could transform itself into nearly anything but had unusual limits. It could only transform into things which could be used for pranks, mischief, or chaos in general. As long as he thought of an item he could use for a prank, he could make the apple transform into it. Standing in front of Harry was the apple displaying a transformation into something Harry wasn't sure actually existed. A few months ago, Hermione sent a copy of a magazine called The Quibbler to Harry, and it was there Harry learned of the questionable existence of the Crumplehorn Snorkack. According to the magazine article, the Crumplehorn Snorkack had a magical approximation of the exact same power as Harry's former roommate, Forget-Me-Not. Not long after seeing one, you would lose your memory of seeing it. This of course made the creature's existence difficult to prove, as the only evidence that you encountered one would be your lack of memory of having seen it. Of course, as the owner of the apple and shaper of the image, that particular effect did not work on him. However, Harry had confirmed with some magically conjured creatures that the effect did work. Harry also found that the creature's existence could be observed, but not recorded. A live image of the creature could be displayed on a video camera's live feed if streamed, but if the video was recorded and watched, the recording would lack the creature's presence. Same for digital cameras. The creature appeared on the screen of Harry's cell phone if he turned on the camera, but the creature would not exist in any saved pictured or stored videos. The same was true for pictures taken using film and disposable cameras. Even if a snorkack stepped in a pit of sand, its footprints would slowly vanish. If Harry drew a picture of it, the picture would slowly distort until it didn't look like a snorkack. The level of reality manipulation required in order to achieve this effect was not something to look down upon. Especially because this was not even the actual creature, but an imitation of it created using the Apple of Discord based on Harry's knowledge of the Crumplehorn Snorkack. Harry wasn't even sure that being able to replicate the creature even proved its existence. It simply meant that Harry could use it for pranks. Of course, the apple's power was not limited to that. If Harry put some effort into it, he could charge the apple with his own magic and set loose a horde of Crumplehorn Snorkacks all over New York. No matter what they did, no one would have any evidence they existed the following day. Harry couldn't say he wasn't tempted, but such a prank would require a truly special event, so it should be saved for another day. Probably another city too. And another planet, just to be on the safe side. For now, he'd just bring it out when he felt like it. If someone was bugging him, he'd throw a Crumplehorn Snorkack at their face and later they wouldn't even know what happened to them. That was certainly more classy than a banana cream pie to the face. After playing around with a holy artifact of unspeakable power, Harry headed out and picked up a newspaper before finding his way to the Baxter building. Harry already got the security codes to enter when he arranged for the renovators to set up Ben's bedroom and bathroom, so he knew his way up. The newspaper had a general summary only 17 pages long of everything that happened the prior day. Though many of the hostages did in fact click the button to enable surveillance mode, not everyone did. And many of those who did not streamed their cameras feed to friends, family, and a few news stations. This had a number of effects. First, it revealed the fact that streamed content from any camera had a 10-second delay before it hit the receiver. The feed from cameras which enabled surveillance mode was nearly instantaneous. The reason for the delay was that all publicly streamed footage would be scanned by dumb ace to check if the content fell under anything that shouldn't be streamed. Or at least, that was what the press was told. The actual fact was that if someone caught someone using magic on tape, the delay was used to shut down the feed. Harry's phones were decently magic resistant and wouldn't fry immediately if used in magic-rich areas. In the year since the phones were released, there were 13 attempts to actively stream someone using magic to someone else or to the internet. All attempts were stopped, flagged, and reported to the relevant Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Amelia Bones had already assisted with the setup of a system for other countries to receive such notifications, and so far, nothing had gotten through the cracks yet. Most were just dumb kids who thought they could get away with it, but when the DMLE showed up minutes later accusing them of violating the International Statute of Secrecy, they learned very quickly that these things were not jokes. Most got off with a warning when they realized how serious it was, but a few who did it with malicious intent were arrested. Both magical and non-magical governments supported the Statute of Secrecy at the moment, so it wasn't a small matter when someone tried to violate it. The matter concerning the mole man was not determined to hold any great value for international secrecy, so the content was not flagged, and many news agencies directly streamed to their viewers what was streamed to them. A lot of security guards were fired that day, but they made a lot of money streaming their phones to those news agencies, so they probably didn't care. Because of this, almost everyone in the country and many in other countries knew of what happened, meaning they also knew of Harry's antics. Most news channels had a few clips of Harry running around planting kick me signs on the monstrous Oni men, and there were at least 100 different videos of Harry giving a prank phone call to the mole man when his life was in danger. Unsurprisingly, there were just as many videos of Reed and the rest fighting the mole man and his monsters and rescuing the hostages. Everyone agreed that Reed's group were heroes, people who were willing to put themselves into danger to help others. But since the danger was far superior to other dangers and Reed's group had superpowers, everyone seemed to unanimously agree that they were not just heroes, but superheroes. The concept of a superhero was something most agreed belonged in comics, and in the modern era, the only superhero to ever emerge was Captain America. Of course, in war, one country's hero is another country's enemy. Reed's group was the first group acknowledged by nearly all nations to be superheroes, the world's first publicly recognized superhero team. Brilliance Incorporated got a lot of good publicity as well. The command center sent by Link not only included hundreds of screens to monitor everything, but also automatically mapped out the region, giving those around them information to plan with. Of course, since they couldn't decide on a plan even with all that information, it looked rather bad for them, but Harry's company still got a lot of good press. Not just for freely providing information, but for being able to work hundreds of feet below the earth and still stream a quality picture. Those from other countries who didn't have a Brilliance Inc. phone would likely have one within the next week. The fallout from what the press labeled the Mole Man crisis was less than what most expected. Reed already found the machine which pressed the ground below the UN and offered to reverse it. Unsurprisingly, the UN officials declined. Instead, Reed put into motion a system that would prevent it from happening again and freely distributed it to the world. At the moment, a massive military detachment was stationed down that hole while everything of value in the UN was taken back. The location of the new UN headquarters was still under discussion and would likely not be determined for some time. More than one general had argued to send a military force down the tunnels in retaliation, but the tunnels to Subterranea had already collapsed and there was little the military could do about it. When Harry made it to the Baxter Tower's main floor and saw his students and their friends in a depressed slump watching the news, Harry couldn't help but tease, "How's the world-famous Fantastic Four today?" Everyone groaned. Johnny said, "I can't believe they're using that guy's insults as names. Human Torch? What is this, the Middle Ages? Before yesterday, I've never even seen a torch before." Susan said, "What about me? Invisible girl? Girl? Who do they think they're calling a girl?" Ben cleared his rocky throat and gave a mild glare at the pair, who both awkwardly looked away. The papers had of course called the group the Fantastic Four, using Mole Man's naming sense. Of the four, Ben was the unluckiest, as the Mole Man just called him a thing and the newspapers ran with it. So while Susan had to suffer being called a girl, Ben was called the thing. Reed said, "I feel bad they're calling us heroes. I mean, I wanted to help them, but they weren't the reason we went down there." Harry shrugged. Reed got badly caught in the moment when he told the Mole Man he'd stop him and save everyone, but the actual reason they went down there was to get Harry. Reed had already analyzed the anti-magic band Harry had given them and determined he would have no luck replicating it without Harry's help. If Harry died, Ben would be stuck as a rock forever, so all four agreed to head out. They were of course stopped by the military, but when they saw on the monitors that Harry was going to be executed, they ignored the military and headed down themselves. The flying car was apparently built in the last couple of days for them and Ben, since a normal car couldn't handle Ben's weight and Johnny insisted that it should fly. Later they realized that Harry likely would have been fine. Harry carried all sorts of tech with him and was pretty much playing around the whole time. Harry said, "It's not all bad, at least the Storm Foundation survived." The Storm Foundation was able to get first shot at the pyramid because they made a lot of promises, and though it wasn't their fault, the fact that the pyramid exploded and they couldn't keep those promises caused a lot of issues with creditors and other organizations. Everything completely changed of course due to their recent heroics. The creditors were pulling back and willing to give them more time on loan repayment at lower interest rates. The groups who were pressuring the foundation found that others were pressuring them to leave it be, and the almost dead Storm Foundation was able to breathe once more. Harry pulled out some papers and said, "Sign these please." Susan was the first to look it over and asked, "Harry, what are these?" Reed was quite the speed reader and asked, "Likeness rights." Harry said, "You need to patent your likeness rights so others can't profit off your images." Apparently a few groups are already trying to do it, including Oscorp, but as long as you apply, you should win the rights to your own likeness. Ben asked, so what, they'll make toys and junk that look like us. Harry smiled, they're already planning on it. Whether you get a profit off those toys will depend on you. Reed had apparently finished reading through it all and asked, why are you setting this up, Professor? Harry didn't write in for himself to get a cut because he didn't need it. Harry said, I felt like it. And it's not like this won't benefit me. There are a few toy companies I have partial ownership of which could make some mighty fine toys. Especially if you let them make a toy of that flying car you put together. Ben said, I don't know, Professor Potter. Harry got out a few things and set up a hologram of Ben's large form in the shape of a toy. It was next to a toy version of Giganto. Two holographic kids were playing with the toys, getting them to fight each other while smiling. Harry said, Christmas is right around the corner after all. Ben smiled and agreed. Reed confirmed there was no downside and signed the papers. Harry ensured they were delivered where they were needed and would be approved soon. He also contacted a few groups to go ahead on the toy production. After business was done, Harry started working with Reed on the anti-magic bands. The problem they discovered when dealing with power cosmic was that it could turn any energy into power cosmic, even the energy powering the anti-magic bands. That meant the bands would need to be recharged or replaced regularly and were not a permanent solution to their problem and couldn't be used to give Ben a human form. Harry brought a set of metagems keyed to the location for Reed to study to determine how they interacted with his powers. If they were ever removed from Baxter Tower, they would automatically disintegrate, so Harry wasn't worried they would be stolen. Though when he saw the gleam of interest in Reed's eyes, he was worried what kind of things he'd build in the tower. The following weeks were mostly normal, or as normal as New York gets. For the last 2 weeks of classes before the end of the semester, Harry got in 2 more pranks. The first required a lot of setup but was satisfying nonetheless. During class, a man wearing a bubble wrap jumpsuit walked in and said, I'm sorry to interrupt your class. Most of you know who I am. Every student stood up at the same time, put their hands together with their thumbs crossed to make the letter Z, and said, Zoltan. Zoltan nodded and smiled. Tomorrow the ship will be launching and we will fly into space and meet cool aliens who actually like us. The students all made another Z and shouted with enthusiasm once more, Zoltan. Zoltan said, now, when you're driving out to the barn behind my parents' house, I just want to remind you all to be quiet as I don't want you to wake them. And remember to bring your spacesuits, he said, pointing at his bubble wrap jumpsuit. The students made another Z and shouted again, Zoltan, before finally sitting back down. Zoltan smiled and left the classroom. Harry just stood there and gawked at everyone as if he couldn't believe what he'd seen. He looked openly confused, ill, and horrified by the class's actions. After a few moments he shook his head and looked like he decided to forget about it and got back to his lecture. Of course, the students were all just as confused and horrified. The first part of this prank basically made all the students invisible except to themselves by making a field of bending light around their desks. The next step was to make a hologram over each student. This type of hologram couldn't be seen up close, so the students couldn't see the hologram overlaid onto them, just onto everyone else. The last step was setting up the audio. Harry doubted many noticed that the sound of Zoltan came from their own desks as well as everyone else's, though they remained silent. So every student saw every other student stand up and say Zoltan, making every one of them think they were the only student in class who didn't know what was going on. Eventually they'd figure it out, but Harry would be laughing his ass off until then. The last week of the year didn't have the best prank, but Harry considered it a classic. The door to the classroom opened and the giant head of what could only be described as the Loch Ness Monster came through the door. What was strange, however, was that it was wearing an enormous blonde wig and had a red strap around its neck with badges, and on its wig was a giant red hat. The Loch Ness Monster then said, I'm selling Girl Scout cookies. Harry acted as if the monster reaching its neck through the door wasn't from the Cretaceous period and said, got any Thin Mints? How much for a box? I need about 350. All right. Harry got out a wallet and handed the giant head the cash. The head then retracted completely through the door, and a moment later re-entered with a box of Girl Scout cookies. Harry took it and said thank you. The Girl Scout left and the door closed. A number of students were staring at the box and Harry noticed this and said, what? Thin Mints are usually $4 a box, so that was a good deal. Harry then of course continued his lesson as they went over the details that would be on the finals. By now a number of them were desensitized and Harry was looking forward to a new semester with new students. He was looking forward to new students. The semester ended and Christmas was around the corner. A number of stores already had shelves filled with Fantastic Four toys, and Mole Man and his giant monsters also got their own toys. Harry and the girls all spent Christmas in Britain with Sirius and Amelia. Harry enjoyed watching Jade's shocked expressions at all the magic, as this was her first introduction to the wizarding world. Well, second according to Jade. She said her Uncle Jackie once accidentally stumbled upon a group of wizards trying to use Stonehenge to destroy London a few years ago. Jade retold that story to everyone, of course, describing the wizards who spent the entire time chasing her and Jackie for knowing too much even though they had no idea what it was they knew. This had Sirius laughing his arse off while Amelia was writing down the details and would likely see if she could find and arrest these wizards. They returned home after the party and thanks to the difference in time zones still had a few hours before the end of the day. Due to the nature of some of the gifts given and received, they all decided to spend that time together in bed. Ping. Sex path has risen to rank 19. It was a good night. Though exhausted, the girls did not go to sleep. Harry opened a portal to a mountain range and everyone stepped through. Harry handed Jean a moleskin pouch with an undetectable extension charm and a few dozen other things built into it. Within the pouch was a wizard's tent that was modified to work in space, several hundred years worth of food, precious metals of every type, hundreds of different types of clothes, and of course, several Phoenix Fire-infused reality bombs. It was time for Jean to fulfill her duties as the avatar of the Phoenix Force. Every time she used its power, she'd gain awareness of what the Phoenix knew and the Phoenix knew what needed to be burnt in the universe and why. Though most of that knowledge faded when the power was not in use, not all of it did, and Jean had reached her limit on ignoring the need to remove those planets. Harry had no way to track the actual location of the planets, so Jean had to simply find them herself, one by one. Not all of them were close by and some were not even in the same galaxy. Jean would be able to use the full power of the Phoenix Force to move there, but she couldn't teleport there or use a portal, meaning the trip would take time. In addition to a dozen magical items to be used for her protection and safety, Harry also made her a beacon-type intergalactic portkey. It used Harry's position as a point of return and was powered by Harry's magic. Normal portkeys certainly could not be used from different planets, much less different galaxies, since they weren't strong enough. It only worked if Harry powered the portkey as return from his side. No one had any idea how long it would take for Jean to return. Weeks, months, years. It was even possible she would not return for centuries. Thankfully, Harry was able to make an astral tech transmitter and receiver which should allow her to send a receive message to Harry regardless of the distance, so they'd be able to keep in touch. If they were a few galaxies away, the messages would take a couple of days to travel, but it was still a lot better than nothing. Jean would be spending most of her time traveling through the void, so she wouldn't be able to chat, but she'd be able to give updates after each planet. Everyone came through the portal to say their goodbyes. Rogue said, "If you find anything nice on those planets, feel free to snatch them up first." Jade said, "And pictures? Take pictures? I bet there's lots of cool things in space." Wanda added, "If you find any planets not on your list, feel free to check them out as long as you tell us." Harry's probably going to head out to the big wide world eventually, so a map and a traveler's guide would be useful. Harry shook his head at their antics and said, "Above all, remember to stay safe. I don't care if you can revive yourself from your own ashes. I prefer you to stay in one piece for as long as possible and come back to us." Harry took Jean in her arms and she was quickly surrounded by a group hug and was already crying. "And remember, Jean, no matter what happens to you, no matter what you do, you will always be my wife, the one I love, until death do us part." Jean and everyone else smiled at that. Harry and Jean were pretty much immortal, so that was his way of saying he'd be with her forever. Jean separated from their hug and was slowly enveloped by flames. She said, "I love you all. I promise I'll return as soon as I can." With that, she flashed and a stake of light extending into the darkness of the sky shined for a moment before vanishing. The reason Harry took them to this mountain range was because there were no satellites around to see Jean leave from here. Harry made another portal and everyone returned to bed. They stayed in Harry's room that night for comfort and closeness, as they all hoped Jean would return to them soon. The first week of the new year didn't bring too many surprises. The only thing of interest which occurred was a hacking attempt against Harry's company servers. They technically got in and downloaded everything, but it was only considered an attempt because the hackers targeted the dummy computers in the dummy buildings Harry registered as the main site for Brilliance Inc. Because the actual labor was mostly done by goblins, Harry needed fake companies to look like they were doing the work on paper. One of those fakes was the target. The goblin who informed Harry of this had a vicious, toothy grin. The data on the server would look normal, but once you loaded that data into anything, it would turn into the most vicious sort of virus. Goblins loved all forms of combat. To goblins, even business was a form of combat, so hacking was as well. The viruses hidden within those dumb files were updated nearly every other week, and there were entire groups of goblins competing against each other to see who could create the most vicious virus and antivirus. The winner would have their virus stored on the servers, and it was considered a great honor. This was not the first time they'd been hacked, but this was the first time the hackers had gotten past the half-assed firewalls the goblins made. As far as they were concerned, anyone who couldn't get past those firewalls was not fit for cyber warfare. The smile on the goblin who gave Harry the news made him ask, which group's virus was in there this week? The goblins smiled because even more viciously cruel, it was Stonebreaker's war party. Harry thought back to them and remembered what they specialized in with a bit of horror. Their viruses didn't just destroy or steal data. They actually caused the computers to heat up and would shut off the cooling systems to make them explode. Harry shook his head but didn't bother to give whoever stole from them pity. If the gods were merciful on them, those guys wouldn't upload the stolen data directly into their company servers and would use disconnected systems to check on the data first. Classes for the new semester would start soon. Harry would have another Foundations of Metaphysics class, and then in the fall semester he'd teach Advanced Metaphysics to the students who passed in either of the first 2 semesters of Foundations of Metaphysics with AB or higher, since those who passed the first semester were not enough to make a class for Advanced Metaphysics. It wasn't that Harry taught them poorly. It was just that the subject was ridiculously advanced and those students who didn't get it only got a C. Only one student actually failed, but Harry found out from him he was just having family issues, so it wasn't because of Harry's class. He would have taken it a bit personally if he were the reason someone failed. However, before the start of the new semester, something big came up. It all started with a silver dude on a surfboard landing on the roof of the Baxter building. Author's note. So, if it wasn't obvious at this point, I had Jean leave because I couldn't have her go Phoenix Force and shoo Galactus away. Not exactly suspenseful. Now the best they could do would be to send her a message to use her portkey to return, but the message would take days to reach her and be too late by then, so they're on their own. Galactus can't really be killed by anything below the celestial level, and even then, it would take multiple celestials to do it. Now there were a lot of questions from the last chapter, but only 2 were important enough to matter. Why didn't Harry kill the Mole Man? A few reasons. The main one is that the Mole Man was the leader of an enemy country, and killing him meant making the entire country his enemy. Harry figured that would cause more trouble than the Mole Man himself. The next question was, is Holy Moly Bajutsu an actual thing? No idea, but I found it on a few of Mole Man's fandom pages and it looked hilarious. Another thing I want to point out is that I didn't make up Mole Man's tack. He actually does have a staff which is made from deviant technology which uses 0-point energy to make a target's center of gravity heavier. Yes, it sounds stupid, but that one I didn't make up. Also, for those who gave a hard cringe on the of Mole Man's dialogue, I took a lot of it directly from the comics, so that was all him. Anyways, for those who want an idea of how to fight Galactus, feel free to look up how the Fantastic Four did it in the original comic. Though I might change a few things. Chapter 66, Chapter 66, The Herald of Galactus. Within a familiar arena in the astral plane, Harry rushed back and forth dodging the attacks from an undefinable creature. When first conjured from the power cosmic energy stored by Harry, the being now attacking him took the form of a sphere of constantly shifting color. In the next moment its form shifted into something insect-like which used razor-like appendages to slash at Harry's position, forcing him to dodge or block. Before it attacked again, its form shifted once more into a ball of emerald flames which rushed at Harry and tried to roast him to cinders. With each attack, the strange being changed its form and method of attacking, preventing, thus, Harry from predicting its pattern and counter-attacking. If there was some pause or opening when the creature shifted, he could use that, but the shifts were seamlessly integrated into the being's motions, and consecutive attacks of different styles and types were launched like a flurry without pause. The strength and speed of each attack had no way to overwhelm Harry as they matched his own level, but the range of attacks were far beyond anything Harry had ever encountered. It had been 2 months since the shuttle incident which granted Reed and his friends their powers, and Harry had spent that time studying the power cosmic among other things. This was his first attempt to use power cosmic for battle meditation, and it was certainly enlightening. After observing the creature's attacks for several rounds, Harry saturated himself with crimson energy and dimensional energy and conjured an eldritch longsword. The being of power cosmic Harry just decided to call Anomaly turned into purple bush and shot out 24 thorn-covered purple vines at Harry's limbs and neck. The vines tracked Harry's position, so Harry used a dimension trick he learned from the Ancient One and curved the space, causing the vines to bend around Harry as he rushed forward and attacked the bush. He slashed forward and a crimson cut neatly formed on the bush before it shifted into a massive wolf-like creature with spikes over its body. Harry continued his assault and discovered another attribute of the anomaly. Harry's eldritch sword was slightly drained of energy when it came into contact with the anomaly, and the anomaly used what it seemed to drain from the sword to heal itself. However, the amount it stole and used to heal itself was far less than the amount of damage inflicted on the creature with each of Harry's attacks. Harry recognized that this was power cosmic's ability to turn other forms of energy into itself, though the speed it could absorb other forms of energy was very slow. Harry figured at higher levels that speed would increase, making fighting anomalies in the future far more difficult. Harry tried several different forms of attack but concluded that single-target strong attacks were best. It healed itself with each attack, so instead of a large amount of weak attacks it was better to use a small amount of strong attacks. After about an hour of constant attacks between dodging and running away, Harry was able to chip away at the anomaly's health bar, and eventually it broke down and was destroyed. The energy that formed the anomaly was greedily absorbed by Harry's Obscurus particles, which easily reached saturation, causing them to multiply and increase Harry's level. It wasn't a full level gained from the one anomaly, of course, as Harry was already rather close to leveling up, but the efficiency at which Harry's Obscurus particles replicated after absorbing power cosmic was far greater than other forms of energy he'd absorbed in the past. This matched what Harry had discovered about power cosmic. It could turn into any form of energy and was probably a delicacy for a life form like Harry. Then again, perhaps not. Harry doubted there were too many life forms out there capable of consuming any type of energy. At the edge of the arena, a pedestal started beeping. Harry walked over to it and pressed a few buttons before picking up a corded phone-like device off it. "Hello," the Ancient One said from the other end of the line. "Harry, there has been an incident. Something has breached the atmosphere and penetrated the mystic shields over the Earth." This got Harry's attention. Mystic threats could come from space as well, and there were shields in place to stop them from getting close to the Earth, created by the Sanctum Sanctorums placed around the world. The shields of course only reacted to mystic threats, as that is what they were designed for. Harry asked, "Where was the breach?" "New York City. It's why I'm calling you." Harry inwardly rolled his eyes. One of these days he would just stop asking. "Get the breach sealed and I'll check out the something. If I need backup I'll call." Harry hung up the pedestal's phone and took a moment to concentrate and return from the astral plane to his body. The pedestal was astral tech that forwarded his calls to the pedestal when he was meditating so he wouldn't miss anything important. Once he was in his body he turned invisible and made a silver portal into the sky above New York City and passed through using flight magic. It was just about morning and the streaks of sunlight could be seen stretching over the horizon and illuminating the city's skyline. Harry created a few mandalas which connected to the mystical defense grid over the city. It pointed him to where the something had landed. Harry flew over using the mandalas as a compass and found that whatever had breached the shield landed on top of the Baxter building, though it wasn't there anymore. Harry did a few scans and confirmed the Fantastic Four had also left the building. Harry guessed he wasn't the only one on the trail of this visitor and did few calculations to determine where it had flown off to. The feedback from his spells however gave him nothing useful. The target may have adapted. Still, he had a plan B. Harry pulled out his cell phone and used administrative access to locate Ben Grimm's cell phone. Illegal? Probably. But useful. Once Harry had a location, he made another portal and walked through. The location was a field in some woods outside New York City. The flames on the ground were the evidence of a recent battle and the four were standing off against a male form humanoid who had a completely reflective surface, as if made from or covered in silver. The man seemed to be gathering energy into his hand and Johnny was launching a stream of fire at him. Between Johnny and the silver being was what could only be described as a solid silver surfboard. It stood in the way of the stream of fire and in the same instant Harry stepped out of the portal, the silver being released the stored energy in what felt like a pulse. Ben was charging forward just as the energy pulsed out and in the same moment Ben grabbed the man's surfboard and in one fluid motion, whacked the silver dude over the head with it. The silver dude staggered back which caused Ben to strike him a few more times with his surfboard until the silver dude was unconscious. Harry became visible and walked into the clearing. He asked aloud to get their attention, "Who the hell is this guy?" Reed and Susan turned over to see Harry and the former asked, "Professor Potter? What are you doing here?" Harry honestly answered, "A friend of mine monitors weird stuff that enters the atmosphere and called me. I tracked that guy to your roof but lost his trail so I tracked you guys instead." Johnny said, "We followed him here because he didn't seem up to any good, but he wiped the floor with us." Ben held the dude's surfboard and said in his standard gravelly voice, "He could fly around on this thing and shoot energy beams and stuff." Susan added, "My force fields didn't work against him at all." Reed walked over to the unconscious foreigner and said, "I'm concerned with that pulse he sent. It looked like a signal or beacon." Harry frowned and said, "Let's take him back. We got questions for him." Harry walked over to the man and picked him up. What he found through his energy senses was most discouraging. He said, "No one but Ben touches the surfboard. That thing is concentrated power cosmic. Among you all, Ben has the highest concentration of power cosmic, so he can touch it safely, but anyone else touching it won't end well. If a normal person touched it, it's possible they'd explode." Ben took another look at the surfboard in his grasp and shrugged before walking over to their flying car. Harry said, "We need answers fast, so let's skip the ride back." Harry directly opened a portal which led to the port the flying car took off from and threw the portal forward, engulfing everyone and translocating them into the tower. Ben was the first to ask, "What just happened?" Reed answered, "Stabilized singularity-based transdimensional relocation." He was still staring with fascination at the space where the silver ring vanished after passing over them. Johnny asked, "What?" Susan summarized, "Harry made a wormhole and threw the event horizon at us." Ben looked over at Harry and asked, "You can do that?" Harry nodded, among other things. "Save the questions for later. We need to restrain this guy first." The amount of energy Harry felt within this surfer dude would put his level if he had won at about 100. Strong, but not that strong. Logan could probably kick his ass. His surfboard on the other hand was something else entirely. It was practically alive, like another heart. If it had a level, it would be over 900. That meant when the guy was on his surfboard, he was about level 1000. Until now the strongest people Harry had seen on the planet were the Ancient One who'd be about level 270, Selene the Immortal, who was around 400, and Apocalypse, which Harry would guesstimate was around 320. His death did give Harry a bunch of levels after all. Of course, those numbers weren't entirely accurate. The Ancient One's title of Sorcerer Supreme wasn't for show. She could channel unbelievable amounts of energy from other planes and if she went all out, she could be measured closer to level 400 herself. Selene couldn't recover lost energy so when she started fighting, her energy level would drop and after her fight with Harry, even if she survived, she likely would have dropped to somewhere between level 200 and 300. Harry had warned her multiple times after all that she'd gain nothing fighting him, so it wasn't his fault the fight ended the way it did. Apocalypse was weaker than Selene at her full strength but he didn't get weaker as the fight went on. In fact, since his tech could absorb energy, he could probably wipe the floor with Selene if they clashed because he had equipment which was far superior to anything she had access to. So depending on path mastery and equipment, level was just a number, up to a certain point. 1000 on the other hand was something else altogether. If it were some distinct form of energy, then it wouldn't be that bad, but this was a level 1000 concentration of power cosmic of all things. That wasn't good. If this guy sent a signal, Harry was concerned, so he didn't bother hiding his abilities if doing so would waste time. In the 2 months since the accident, Reed had turned the top floor of the Baxter building into a massive lab. Harry found a heavy-duty gurney that looked like it was made to support Ben's weight and Johnny's flame and set the surfer on top. He took a few things out of his inventory and used them to strap the surfer down. Watching from the side, Reed said, "I believe he channels his power through his surfboard. Can you isolate him from his connection to the board?" Harry answered, "Already done. Honestly, this guy is too much. If he was on his surfboard, there's no way I can think of to beat him." Reed went over to a computer terminal set before a massive screen and said, "I would have to agree with you. His powers caused our own to go out of control. When he hit me with one of his energy pulses, I lost all semblance of solidity for a while." Johnny added, "Yeah, my flames only looked like they inconvenienced him and he flew around too fast. If he didn't get off his board, Ben wouldn't have been able to get him." Susan asked, "Why did he get off his board though?" Harry remembered the pulse and considered it. He answered, "Perhaps the pulse he sent required information that could only be derived if his feet were on the ground. But if so, why'd he leave the city for a wild area? Did he want to stand on a specific type of ground before using it to send a pulse of information?" Reed had already brought up a few programs, maps, and scanning tools on his terminal and asked aloud, "And what was the purpose of the pulse?" It couldn't have been a call for help or distress beacon, not for a being with his level of might on a planet such as ours. Suddenly, the scanners on the terminal screen showed line after line of red bars and the speakers were blaring loudly in alarm. Ben said, "That doesn't sound good." Susan joined Reed at the terminal and Reed said, "I'm getting distorted readings from all over the planet." Susan brought up a video screen which appeared to originate from a camera outside the Baxter building. The clear morning sky was suddenly filled with strange clouds which gave an ominous feeling and were getting darker and darker. From the gurney, their captive woke up and said in English, "Galactus is coming." Harry summoned the gurney rather than walk over to it, causing it to quickly roll over to him. He asked, "Is Galactus the one you called? Who is he and why'd you call him?" The silver dude looked around but didn't seem to mind his predicament. "You struck me with my own board. Impressive." He looked over at Harry and answered, "Galactus is the devourer of worlds and I am his herald. I seek out planets rich with life for him to feast on." The lab was silent for a few moments. Had anyone else said something so bizarre, they likely would have been mocked or laughed at. No one in the room however found it funny. Susan was the first to break the silence. "Can you tell him to go away? This planet is filled with innocents. Billions of them." The surfer answered, "If Galactus does not consume worlds, the hunger within will kill him. He will not be dissuaded. There are innocents on this world, but there are innocents on many worlds. However, this world has far greater life energy than any I have ever seen. After devouring your world, Galactus's hunger will be alleviated for a long time. This will spare many other worlds from his hunger, saving the innocence of many worlds at the cost of the innocence of a single world." Something about that didn't add up to Harry. If so, why hadn't Galactus devoured this world already? Harry asked, "Why'd you come to this world?" "Originally I did not come here seeking a world. Your world is hidden from my long-range senses. But I felt a source of power cosmic originate nearby and when I came to investigate, I found your world." Harry loudly groaned, causing everyone in the room to give him a questioning look. The Ancient One obviously had not seen a future where the world got devoured. So why were they targeted now? Apparently it was because of that pyramid. She couldn't see consequences of Harry's actions, meaning this was, technically, his fault. Harry wondered about why the planet was shielded from the Sopha's sight, since he doubted any sorcerer supreme of the past knew specifically of Galactus. If they did, they probably would have written it down somewhere, and Harry had read everything in the temple and had never heard of him. Then Harry remembered that there were other protectors of this planet and they had probably set up the shield. Harry looked back down on the surfer and said, "This planet is Midgard and protected under the Nine Realms Treaty enforced by the Alfathor Odin Borson and the realm of Asgard. They set up the shield which hid this planet, and attacking this realm means incurring Asgard's wrath." The 4 humans in the room all had no idea what Harry was speaking of, but the surfer chuckled. He said, "Apologies, but Galactus's hunger does not recognize such treaties. I am familiar with Asgard, but once Galactus arrives, the Alfathor's site will be covered, and by the time he chooses to send someone to investigate, Midgard will have been consumed. Look for yourselves, he is already here." The camera feed on the monitor started getting fuzzy like the cable/antenna input on a TV. Reed and Susan spent a moment to recalibrate it, and once finished, the screen showed a massive sphere-like spaceship far larger than the tallest building in New York. It descended through the clouds and stopped just over the Baxter building. Harry's phone rang, and when he answered it, the Ancient One said with more concern than he'd ever heard from her, "Harry, the future is gone." The energy reserves from the planet's mystic defenses were instantly drained when something passed through them. The phone was on speaker, so everyone in the room heard the call. Harry said, "I'll think of something. Work on damage control." Harry hung up and called another number. On speaker once it answered, Harry said, "Xavier, we have a planet-devouring alien in a city-sized spaceship parked outside New York. Get your ass in Cerebro and see if you can reason with it or attack it if need be." Xavier could feel how serious Harry was, and instead of questioning it, responded, "Understood," and hung up the call. Reed was still monitoring the camera feed and asked, "Why isn't anyone looking at the ship?" The cameras included some shots of people in the city walking around, but though some looked up at the sky, no one specifically pointed at the ship. The surfer answered, "Beings under a certain level of existence cannot perceive the ship without assistance. Susan said. Well, that's not stopping the military. She brought up another screen with a map and 2 moving, blinking dots and said, we have 2 missiles on the way. Harry figured Reed wasn't the only person on the planet who could calibrate a monitor, so others would have noticed as well. The dark clouds over the Earth slowly became thicker. Strange lights and sounds could be seen and heard coming from them, all over the world. Reed had a dozen scanners up on his half of the monitor and said, the energy radiating off those clouds is shifting the frequency of all the electron valence bonds on the planet. He looked over at the surfer and asked, why? The surfer again helpfully answered, when the frequency matches the void at the center of Galactus's stomach, he will start feasting. Once he starts, it cannot be stopped. All forms of energy and all forms of life on this planet will lose cohesion and be sucked directly into his mouth as if it were a black hole. I have seen it happen thousands of times. When he is finished, all that will be left of your world will be a cold and empty husk. Ben asked, so, what's the cloud doing? Reed clarified, it's cooking the planet. Harry asked, how long until he finishes? About 10 minutes. Everyone turned to the surfer in shock and Harry rolled his eyes. No wonder the surfer had no qualms answering their questions. He was completely convinced nothing he said would help. Harry had been looking into the surfer's eyes the whole time using legilimency, but the man's mind was wrapped in clouds of darkness and Harry couldn't break through them. Harry wouldn't bother calling Jean. From the last update he'd gotten from her he knew she was 3.5 galaxies away. Harry had given her a tool that could display her 6-dimensional coordinates, and if she gave them to Harry, he could use them to make a portal directly to her. However, if Harry sent her a message using the astral tech communicator he'd given her, it would take a week for her to receive it and another week for her to send those coordinates back. That was why he gave her an intergalactic port key. Once activated it would return her to Earth in a moment, but Harry couldn't activate it remotely and it would still take a week to send her a message to activate it on her end. On the screen, the missiles had reached the ship, but once they got close, they vanished. A long-distance telepathic message was sent to Harry from Xavier. Harry, it's worse than you thought. That isn't a ship. That is a miniaturized space-traveling planet a quarter the size of our own. I have spoken with Galactus, but convincing him to find another world was like convincing a starving dog to ignore meat in front of it. He shared with me a fraction of his hunger. It was pure pain, suffering, and madness greater than any I have ever encountered. I could not dissuade him and even Cerebro cannot strengthen me enough to attack him. I have asked Eric for help, but the best he can do is buy us some time. You'll need to find something else. Reed didn't hear the message but had already zoomed into the ship once the missiles vanished, and after several rounds of magnification only possible because of the high-end equipment of the Baxter building, they saw the missiles again, heading slowly for the ship. Susan grasped what was happening first and said, incredible. The space around the ship is in a completely separated time-space. Reed added, it's a factor of 10,000 to 1. That ship is a lot bigger than it appears. Harry and the rest watched the 2 tiny missiles crashed onto the ship's exterior and made 2 tiny puffs of light. The ship looked completely unharmed. At first Harry thought if it was a normal ship, he could portal inside and sabotage it. Apparently it was Death Star-sized ship, and unless he conveniently found a astrodroid with the planet ship's designs, he wouldn't be able to disable it from within without being discovered and probably eaten by Galactus before he could do anything useful. In the next moment, a pulse of white light was shot from the ship into the clouds. Still bound to the gurney, the surfer said, many planets far more advanced than yours have been devoured by Galactus. Reed looked over the readings from the white pulse and said, all of the long-range weapon systems on the planet were just disabled. Harry raised an eyebrow and took out a spare planet-busting Phoenix Fire reality bomb from his inventory. The moment he did, Harry felt the energies within start to stabilize and the Phoenix Fire start to die out. The bomb worked on instability, increasing until it reached a critical point. A planet-wide field that not only prevented it from becoming more unstable but decreased its inherent instability meant that this bomb was now a massive paperweight. As another test, Harry took out a magic grenade. These were just magically conductive materials that exploded a few moments after Harry had injected enough magic in them to reach critical mass. Once Harry took it out from his timeless inventory, the critical mass of exotic energy immediately stabilized and calmed down. All of his magic weapons were based on the concept of exploding after reaching critical mass. All of them were now useless. The only one left was his railgun, but he only had 3 of those and each only had 6 shots. That wasn't anywhere near enough to take down a friggin' planet ship. Another alarm blared on the monitor. Reed pulled up another window and saw a massive city-sized asteroid rapidly descending through the atmosphere on a direct collision course with the planet ship. Harry recognized that asteroid. It was a space colony set up by Magneto, Asteroid M. Though empty now, he'd been working on it for years and once finished, he'd use it as a place for mutants to live freely without fear. Harry's eyes widened with shock when he realized that Magneto was using his most precious treasure as a blunt weapon to attack the planet ship. The surfer could see the monitor from where he was bound and said, clever, but useless. The shields on Galactus's ship cannot be harmed by an asteroid. Everyone in the room watched as the asteroid passed through the field separating the spacetime of the ship and shrunk accordingly. However, it was still very large. The asteroid impacted the ship and caused a massive explosion with a blinding light. It broke through the ship's exterior and tore apart the hull. The Sufiscom exterior broke at the sight. That's impossible. Harry used that moment to look into his eyes once more. He found a hole in the darkness and used every bit of magic and telepathy he had to pierce into the depths of his mind. Within those clouds Harry found bound memories. Harry didn't know how long he had until he was kicked out, so he released every memory he could find. The cloud of darkness followed him and Harry had to move quickly from one memory to the next. Harry could tell that these were the memories of a man's life, probably the Sifa's. Originally he broke into his mind hoping to get lucky and find some intel, but if he could get the man his memories back, perhaps he could gain even more. Wizards knew more about sealing and erasing memories than most and Harry knew more than any wizard. Recovering stolen memories was hard for others but for Harry it wasn't difficult. The power sealing those memories was in fact power cosmic, but Harry had spent enough time studying it to make getting through the seals a simple matter. With each freed memory, the black space filled with more and more light. The dark clouds continued to attack Harry but got thinner and thinner with each unlocked memory. After Harry unlocked another, it seemed to start a chain reaction causing the other memories to unlock in a massive wave of blinding light. The darkness shattered and revealed the mind of a family man from an alien world. Harry retreated from his mind in the next moment. The entire exchange had taken less than a second. Reed was still monitoring the footage and said, "There was power cosmic in that asteroid? That must be how it penetrated the ship's shielding." Harry then remembered when he shielded the Earth from the pulse of power cosmic, he only shielded the Earth. Asteroid M was actually floating in orbit further out than most satellites and apparently got a full blast of the wave. Some of it had probably turned into other forms of energy but not all of it and there was enough there to cause a reaction when striking the planet ship. The black clouds over the Earth became quiet but didn't disperse. The damage caused wasn't enough to disable the ship. Reed zoomed in on the damage and said, "It's repairing itself at a remarkable rate." From the gurney, the surfer groaned with a headache and said, "My name is Norin Rad." Everyone turned to him. Harry said, "I was able to break into your mind and unseal your memories. Did Galactus seal them?" The four looked back at Harry in confusion. Norin answered, "Yes. Long ago, Galactus came to my world. I promised I would serve him if he spared it. He agreed, and I became his herald, the Silver Surfer." Johnny asked, "Wait, your name is actually the Silver Surfer?" Harry glared at him and said, "Not now, Human Torch." Johnny pouted and Norin continued, "My memories of my home world and my life were sealed to prevent me from returning." Harry asked, "Can you think of a way to save this world?" After a moment of thinking, he said, "Perhaps, there is a way. There is a device stored on Galactus's home world called the Ultimate Nullifier. It is the only thing I believe we can threaten Galactus with." Johnny asked, "And just how are we supposed to get there?" Harry had the same question since he didn't have the coordinates and he doubted the surfer had them in a 6-dimensional format Harry could use to portal to the location. However, for the first time since receiving the Ancient One's call this morning, Harry smiled once he heard a familiar sound. Ping Chapter 67, Chapter 67 The Ultimate Nullifier. Ping. New quest, steal the Ultimate Nullifier. Travel to the Eye of Infinity past the celestial barrier of the region of unlife. Do not touch the heavy anti-electro matter cloud or you will die. Acquire the Ultimate Nullifier within the 7th chamber in the 7th level of Galactus's home world. Do not make contact with any surface within Galactus's home world or you will cease to exist. Have Fantastic Four stall Galactus to buy more time. The longer he is stalled, the more likely he is to reduce them to their molecular essence. Harry immediately paused just so he could confirm that he read what he thought he had just read. This looked like an over-the-top Dungeons and Dragons quest thought up by a dungeon master with a penchant for the dramatic. Eye of Infinity? Celestial Barrier of Unlife? And what the fuck was heavy anti-electro matter? The quest had a target which meant it had a target pointer. So Harry knew the direction of the target. The problem though was making a portal to a region he'd never been to required 6-dimensional coordinates he couldn't get from a map pointer. Harry stared at the quest and sighed. He knew what this was. The Living Tribunal or whoever gave him these quests could not help him and could not give him a quest to do something he had no knowledge of, which was why he only got it after Norin told him about the thingy at Galactus's house. A map pointer was all he'd get. But that was fine. It wasn't difficult to think of a few ways to derive the 6-dimensional coordinates, he just needed more directions. Harry took his time crafting an integration formula which could use the map pointer at different coordinates to point to where the target was. Once finished, Harry unpissed and asked the Silver Surfer, "You wouldn't happen to be able to take me to Galactus's home world, would you?" "I am sorry. I cannot go there myself, much less take another. I do not know where it even is." Ben asked with some anger, "Then what good is that gonna do for us?" Harry shrugged and said, "Worth a shot, I'll find it myself," before walking over to the middle of the room. He then created silver ring after silver ring in rapid succession, 5 or 6 every second, which came into existence and showed a brief sight of the space beyond before collapsing to be replaced by another ring showing a different space. Each lead to a region of empty space in the vast universe, and Harry's map pointer adjusted accordingly using the new position on the portal's other side. Of course, a place named the Eye of Infinity past the celestial barrier of the region of unlife didn't sound like a place you could drive to on the way to IHOP. Harry doubted it was in this plane of the universe, so many of the portals created by Harry went to different realms and other dimensions. With each portal Harry was having the possible locations of his home world, but the universe was immense and only after making just over 1,000 portals did Harry narrow down the search and find it. Harry used magic to release the binds on Norin Rad and sat down in the ground, completely exhausted. "Does that look like it?" The unbound surfer walked over to examine the portal that remained after the other portals vanished. Harry was catching his bearings and used his settings to remove his sense of taste before he took out several nasty potions from his inventory he used to refill his magic capacity. Beyond the portal was the darkness of space, and further out was a massive sphere of swirling, dark gases, spinning around. Some parts of the swirling gases opened and closed, showing that under the sphere was a metallic planetoid. It was difficult to gauge the size from the distance and perspective, but Harry could tell that the sphere of dark gases was larger than Jupiter and the metal planet under the sphere was many times larger than Earth. The surfer remarked, "Incredible." He wasn't shocked by the portal, but by Harry's ability to locate Galactus's home world in only a few moments. Reed examined it and asked, "What are those clouds?" Most gases in space only remained gases because they were hot and glowing, or because they were a part of gas giants which were highly reflective. Dark, non-reflective clouds in space didn't make any sense unless it was particulate matter, but those clouds were clearly gaseous, not particulate. Harry said, "Oh, those? Why, those are clouds of heavy anti-electro matter. Touch them and you will instantly die." He decided to shamelessly pretend he knew what those were and didn't learn of its existence a few moments ago. The surfer stated, "He is correct. They form a barrier which separates Galactus's home world from the rest of the universe." Susan shouted from the terminal, "Reed, Galactus's sphere is almost repaired." Harry said, "I'll get the ultimate nullifier. If I found the planet and I can find the nullifier too. You guys need to stall Galactus until I get back. Be careful though, if you piss off Galactus too much, someone with that much power will probably reduce you to your molecular essence." The surfer said, again, "He is correct. For returning me my memories, I will help this world. But do hurry, we do not have much time." Harry nodded and flew directly into the portal before it closed. Once Harry was on the other side and away from prying eyes, he opened his inventory and got out a time turner. Though he had a plan B would be quite nice as well. Harry turned it back 5 hours and returned to Earth. The map pointer was disabled since the quest had not been issued yet. It would be re-enabled once the timeline caught up to the point the quest was given. Harry couldn't search for and grab the ultimate nullifier early either, since he used it in the present to find its location. If he nabbed it in the past, it wouldn't be there when the present caught up and would create a paradox since it wouldn't be there for him to search for. Still, there were two things Harry could do with 5 extra hours. He could map out Galactus's home world and send an SOS as a plan B. 5 hours wasn't enough time to do much else, and even if he had more, his options were limited. Why'd he get a quest to steal the ultimate nullifier and not a quest to drive away or kill Galactus? There were only 2 answers. The first was that it was impossible to succeed without doing great harm to the planet. Harry certainly considered making a new bomb and setting it off in Galactus's ship, but the ship was in a field that reduced its size by 10,000 times. If damaging the ship removed that field, the ship returning to its normal size would destroy the planet anyways. The second reason he may not have been given a quest to do so was that there would have been terrible consequences for succeeding, so the Living Tribunal did not ask it of him. Harry decided to put some trust in the opinion of the being who judges all of reality, so he wouldn't waste time trying to find a way to drive back or kill Galactus without the ultimate nullifier. Instead, he'd just do everything he could to make its acquisition as fast and efficient as possible. Still, a plan B wasn't a bad idea. Harry found an empty field in New York and created a massive sigil circle filled with Norse runes. Harry empowered it with energy until it discharged, which was a sign the message Harry inscribed had been sent. In 5 hours' time, Galactus the Devourer of Worlds will descend on Midgard to devour it. Please send help. Harry hoped it would work, but he wasn't going to hold his breath. There was no quest given to call Asgard for aid. If this message went right to Odin or even Heimdall, that'd be great, but Harry had a nagging feeling the message went to a Dropbox the Asgardians probably checked once every couple of decades if they were feeling generous. The last time Midgard called for aid was during the 14th century when frost giants from Jotunheim invaded and tried to freeze the world. Modern historians call that period the Mini Ice Age, though they guessed that phenomenon was caused by fluctuations in the sun. Still, it was worth a try. Once finished, Harry returned via portal to the celestial barrier of unlife, which apparently separated the Eye of Infinity from the rest of the universe. Harry already confirmed that this barrier of swirling dark clouds somehow scrambled the coordinates of the space within, so even though Harry could see the other side through the gaps, he couldn't make a portal into it and would have to traverse the cloud manually. The dark swirling clouds, apparently made of heavy anti-electro matter, had gaps and openings which opened and closed randomly with the flowing rotation of the clouds themselves. The cloud itself over the planetoid was incredibly thick, and one wrong move traveling through it and it was apparently instant death. Harry could have sworn he had instant death immunity from a perk, but the fact that the quest said it meant that he probably couldn't rely on it for something of this level. Still, he wasn't worried. Harry got out something from his inventory which looked almost like the chassis of a motorbike but sleeker, lacking in wheels, and made of wood with a form reminiscent of a speeder bike from Star Wars. This was the latest prototype Harry had come up with for an ultimate broomstick. Harry didn't feel he'd reached the limit yet, but this thing's top speed would tear the flesh off a normal witch or wizard and go at speeds which made a jet plane cry. Harry hopped on and launched forward at speeds which would have created multiple sonic booms had the space any air. Harry was fine with some white magic survival spells and was holding his body together with dimensional energy and dragon chi. Thanks to this he looked like a red and golden streak of lightning. Harry sped directly into the closest gap and through the storm of dark swirling clouds like lightning bolt. The field of clouds, this celestial barrier of the region of unlife, was tens of thousands of miles deep, and the gaps that randomly formed between the clouds were barely large enough for a bus to squeeze through. Considering that contact with the clouds meant instant death, it wasn't a walk in the park. Harry hadn't had so much fun in years. Though Harry would deny being an adrenaline junkie, that was simply because he did not actively search for opportunities to feel alive. Of course, his excuse for not looking for them was because there weren't any places that could give him such a feeling. His fights against Selene, Apocalypse, the Black Dragon, and Voldemort's flunkies all had their ups and downs, but it never felt like he was in real danger because he could still come back. The only thing that came close was his encounter with Thin, but that wasn't devoid of excitement and was instead filled with desperation. Without the quest pointer, Harry did in fact get surrounded and reach a dead end, but that didn't stop him from making a portal out of the gas and starting over. The gas destroyed the portal if touched, so making it too soon or too late would cause his death as easily as riding into the cloud itself. After about a half hour and a dozen attempts filled with racing through unmappable paths forwards, backwards, and all around, Harry was able to pierce through the clouds intact and made his way to the Death Star-looking planetoid. The space within felt nothing like the space in the rest of the universe. In fact, it felt like it was encrypted. Harry was confident while inside the space he could make portals within the space and even make portals exiting the space, but if he left, he wouldn't be able to make another portal back in without traversing the celestial barrier of unlife once more. Though Harry couldn't find the ultimate nullifier until the quest popped up in a little over 4 hours, Harry wasn't going to sit there and twiddle his thumbs. It was time to do some mapping. Even without the pointer, the quest said it was in the 7th chamber in the 7th level. So first Harry had to find the entrance and from there do some counting. Harry said aloud to no one in particular, "Now where's an exhaust port when you need one?" Harry used his broom to fly to the surface of the planetoid and was thankful he had his broom. The magic of the broom was internal, meaning it could not be tracked, which also meant it did not emit anything that could disrupt other systems and give away his position. Harry spent an hour circling the surface of the planetoid at several multiples the speed of sound to map the various entrances and found 5 that looked slightly larger than the others. Having nothing else to compare them to, he asked himself, "But is it bigger than a womp rat?" He picked one and flew into it and then flew 7 levels down and mapped the region. He explored a few rooms but didn't see anything that looked like it could be an ultimate nullifier, but then again, he didn't know what an ultimate nullifier looked like. After spending 30 minutes expanding his map, he made a portal to the surface and found another entrance and went another 7 levels down before he started mapping once more. In this way, Harry spent the next 4 hours mapping the planetoid and exploring various regions. The planetoid was by a wide margin the most advanced thing Harry had ever seen, exceeding even the tech used by Apocalypse by a wide margin. Harry wasn't afraid of death, but he was fond of existing, so he didn't touch anything nor interact with anything using magic or technopathy. Because of this, every system was rather confusing. Despite having an understanding of block transfer computation acquired from a ship that traveled through time and space, having an understanding of material alteration physics from his studies on the sonic screwdriver, and having an understanding on most forms of energy and magic to the point he created a new branch of science, nothing in the planetoid made even the smallest bit of sense. He felt like a caveman walking through the heart of CERN. His best guess was that much of the systems used power cosmic in the same way Earth used electricity, meaning the systems could automatically derive specific forms of energy needed for their function from the power cosmic fed into them. A system which used a single source of energy to derive many others which all used it for various purposes reminded Harry of a biosphere powered by sunlight. Though the planet was metal, it was as diverse as Earth in form and function. It was also likely many millions if not billions of times more efficient. Probably the thing which made the least sense about the planetoid, however, was that it was empty. Since this was the Pat, Harry didn't know if Galactus was home, but he didn't encounter any living creatures or personnel. Of course, the paths he flew through on his broom weren't exactly hallways with doors. They were simply jagged open spaces filled with things built at random angles built between various sections of strange gizmos. It was like the planetoid was built from millions of spaceships which had been brought together and built into a single object. There were still many spaces between the various structures which were impossible to traverse without being able to fly. Harry suspected there might have been hallways in other parts of the planetoid, but Harry wouldn't try to find any until the quest popped up and he knew Galactus had left the building. Eventually the past caught up to the present and the quest became active, giving the map pointer something to look at. Harry made a dozen portals around the superstructure and used the pointer to determine which was closest to the ultimate nullifier. When used, however, Harry realized that whatever the map pointer was pointing to was moving. Harry used a portal to head into the mapped-out region closest to wherever the pointer was directing him to and flew in the direction of the nullifier. After passing though another layer, he found a region his map hadn't filled out before, meaning it wasn't open before. Harry flew in and found an entrance to a spinning hallway. Once Harry entered, he realized the interior core of the planetoid apparently spun within the exterior shell. The so-called 7th level he thought he found through each opening was wrong. The true 7th level was actually the divide between the exterior shell and the interior core. Once Harry was standing within the core, he didn't fly in the direction of the nullifier. Instead, he flew perpendicular to the direction it was pointing and mapped out the angle the pointer changed to triangulate the position. He wasn't just going to fly to the nullifier, this core was still larger than the Earth and he didn't have time to take the direct route. Once Harry calculated the approximate location of this so-called 7th room, Harry directly made a portal to it and the map pointer proved his calculations true. Harry flew inside and found a normal-looking room with a strange-looking device placed on a pedestal. It looked like a cross between a camcorder and a water filter with 2 protrusions sticking out from one end and a rounded semicircle on the other end with no place to hold it. It certainly did not look like a weapon and was quite small for something with ultimate in its name, but Harry's pointer was showing it as the ultimate nullifier so Harry wouldn't question it. Harry flew closer on his broom to get a good look but didn't touch it. Instead, Harry made 3 portals. He made one to the left of the nullifier, one to the right of it, and the last next to himself. Harry passed through the portal next to him which brought him to a park in New York. The dark clouds overhead were cracking with dangerous sounds and lights. Near the Baxter building were the echoes of explosions and the unmistakable sound of combat. Near where Harry exited were 2 other portals next to each other, one to the left and right of the ultimate nullifier's position. Harry grabbed and broke off a long tree branch off a nearby tree and used it to give the ultimate nullifier a harsh jab through one of the portals. The tree branch disintegrated into nothingness and the tree Harry plucked it off vanished from existence. The jab however pushed the ultimate nullifier off the pedestal into the opposite portal where Harry grabbed it. The room beyond the portal flashed red and all 3 portals both shattered. Ping. Quest completed, steal the ultimate nullifier. Reward, manual for the ultimate nullifier. Harry paused and took a metaphorical breath. He had his suspicions about how to steal something in a place where touching anything could negate your existence and he was right to be cautious. He was also pleased with the reward. If he couldn't use the thing, he couldn't threaten Galactus with it and his lesson with the Darkhold taught him the dangers of putting strange things in his inventory. Harry went through the manual and quickly got a headache. This was going to take a while. It wasn't as long as the Big Book of Time and Space but it wasn't a short read either. Some interminable amount of time later, Harry finished his readings and shook his head. This thing was ridiculous. The manual didn't describe how the thing was made but it did describe how it worked and how to use it. This thing was probably the most dangerous weapon in the universe and Harry could understand why Galactus would be concerned over it. It was basically a delete key. It completely and utterly violated the law of conservation of mass and would remove the existence of a target from reality. It seemed to have other features as well, but they were far too advanced for Harry to understand and he would simply memorize them to ponder another time. What was dangerous about this weapon was that it was not aimed by pointing it, but aimed using the holder's mind, willpower, and understanding of the target to be nullified. If the user tried to nullify something beyond their understanding, they would instead be nullified. Harry was confident if needed, he could use this to nullify Galactus, but he wasn't confident he understood enough about Galactus to withstand the feedback meaning it would probably kill him too. Thankfully as long as Harry demonstrated he knew how it worked, that should be enough of a threat for Galactus to skedaddle. Harry took a moment to ponder if there was anything he wanted to use the nullifier on before going over there. The manual made it clear this device was as much a part of Galactus as his heart and could be recalled. Harry felt he could fire it if Galactus tried to take it from him but he couldn't keep it after Galactus left. He could fire it at the 5 great garbage patches floating in the various oceans and rid the world of much of its trash. He could fire it at the sky and remove the accumulated greenhouse gases, resetting the climate changes and bringing the air quality back to how it was before the Industrial Revolution. After considering it for a while, Harry decided not to use it like that. Harry may have been a hero on occasion as a hobby, but he was not a janitor. Solving all of the Earth's problems would not stop the people of the Earth from committing them again so there was no point in doing so. However, there was one thing that he could delete that the Earth could do without. Harry unpaused and took out a corked glass vial containing a bacteria suspended in water and threw it into the air. Harry turned off the safety on the nullifier and fired it at the vial, causing it to glow for a moment before it stopped glowing and fell back down into Harry's hand, bacteria-free. Harry felt a bit of the recoil, but he was fully aware of exactly what was in that vial and had no problems deleting it. The ultimate nullifier did not simply remove the existence of that bacteria from the vial. Harry simply used the vial as a sample and used the power of the nullifier to remove that bacteria's existence from the universe. This bacteria is, or was, called Sublime. It was an annoying piece of work Harry discovered while researching how the Friends of Humanity were funding the mutant weapons programs like the Weapons Plus program Harry and Wolverine raided in Canada. The bacteria originated from a single life form that could sustain its existence through a concentration of this bacteria within a suitably infected host. A large percent of the humans on Earth, especially in first and second world countries, had been infected with Sublime through contaminated water systems and Sublime could influence anyone who was lightly infected, manipulate anyone with a moderate infection, and directly control those highly infected. For some reason however, humans with an awakened X gene were immune to Sublime's infection and control. Because of this, the irrational fear and hatred many had towards mutants was in fact generated through Sublime's influence and control. Harry had been working on ways to negate Sublime's influence but hadn't figured out a way to remove Sublime from the planet in any realistic way. But since he happened to run across an unrealistic way of deleting it, why not? Those influenced by Sublime would feel a light headache with the bacteria's nullification. Those manipulated by it would feel a strong headache. Those directly controlled by Sublime would probably lose consciousness and when they woke up, they might not even have memories from when they were controlled. Thankfully there was a massive, scary-looking cloud over the planet and everyone would blame that for anything caused by Sublime's removal. Honestly speaking, Harry didn't care that much for Sublime. Harry's business partners weren't human and Sublime apparently didn't infect them. Not that it couldn't, it just didn't, so the bacteria wouldn't be able to do much to Harry. The reason Harry targeted it for oblivion in the first place and nullified it the moment he had a chance was that Sublime was Jean's enemy. Harry knew all of this because he basically hacked into Sublime's channel using invisible magic. Sublime apparently existed through a massive sonic field over the planet which connected all the Sublime bacteria together. Somehow, it not only knew of the existence of the Phoenix Force, but knew Jean was the avatar of it and had targeted her for death. If not for Harry warding the New York University against Sublime's influence, there would have been a few incidents already. Now however it was no more. Harry hadn't told anyone about Sublime yet because he didn't want Sublime to know he was onto him. The bacteria certainly suspected, but it didn't know. Once everything was settled, Harry would speak with Charles and Eric on the matter. The latter had given up a lot to protect the Earth this time and Harry would do what he could to make it up to him. After catching the vial, Harry put it back into his inventory to confirm Sublime was gone and made a portal to the top of the Baxter building. Once he was out, he paused to take a look around. There were a number of things which stood out. First, the Fantastic Four were fighting two other beings. Reed and Ben were fighting a stone gray-skinned barbarian-looking dude with a red vest and a massive axe. Susan and Johnny were going against Johnny's brother, or so it appeared. Like Johnny, this guy was also covered in flames but he had a long staff with flames at both ends and was using it as a weapon. The Silver Surfer was overhead, though not on his surfboard. It seemed he had just been swatted and was soaring backwards through the air. His surfboard was in the air next to an enormous purple and red armored man wearing a tall metallic hat with upwards pointing spikes. The man was standing on a platform which was extending from the planet ship out, beyond the range of the 10,000x reduction field. Harry didn't have to be a genius to know who that was. At the moment Harry stepped through the portal, everyone except for the batted-away surfer looked over at him with a look of relief. Harry was glad they had not been reduced to their molecular essence yet. Harry unpaused and said aloud, "Galactus, does this look familiar?" Having just exited a silver portal, Harry's presence did in fact garner enough interest for Galactus to turn his head just a bit to look in his direction. His uncaring expression however did not survive seeing what Harry was holding in his hand. In a deep voice, the purple titan shouted, "The ultimate nullifier? Where did you get that? Give it to me you fool before you reduce the entire galaxy into subatomic particles." Harry pointed it up and fired. The dark clouds overhead quickly broke apart and the sky was revealed. Harry nullified the system cooking the planet in such a way that the very act of cooking the planet had been reversed. If Galactus wanted to cook it again, he'd had to start over from scratch. Harry then pointed it at Galactus and said, "I want you to give up on devouring this world." Galactus froze for a moment. A flash of real fear crossed his eyes. He asked, "How do you know how to use that?" Harry pulled out the manual from his inventory and banished it toward Galactus who easily caught it. Harry said, "I am a chosen of the Living Tribunal, Eternity, Infinity, Lady Death, and the Phoenix Force. The Living Tribunal showed me where to find your nullifier and gave me that manual on how to use it to protect my world from you." All true, though it gave the wrong message when strung together like that. Still, it gave Galactus much to think about. Galactus's eyes glowed for a moment and so did the manual. He'd read it in an instant and the frown he displayed showed that he hadn't doubted Harry's words. None of the Fantastic Four knew any of the terms Harry used but the Barbarian and Fire Guy number 2 both displayed traces of fear at the names Harry dropped. Galactus looked beyond the sky's horizon and growled in frustration. He looked down at Harry and said, "Return to me my nullifier. This lowly planet is not worth the time and effort I have expended. I shall pursue its life energy no longer." Ben walked over and asked, "Is he serious?" The surfer, who apparently controlled his board to fly over and catch him, flew down and said, "Galactus has never gone back on his word." Johnny said, "No way, you should totally keep it." Ben said, "Use it on him anyways, make sure he won't come back." Galactus growled and Harry felt the nullifier being irresistibly pulled away. Harry released it without struggle and allowed it to fly into Galactus's hand. Galactus said, "Terrax, Fire Lord, return to the sphere." "As you command," they answered in unison. Galactus turned to face the surfer and said, "And you my once and former herald. I hereby exile you to the planet you have saved. No longer shall you soar the endless skyways for the rest of your days. I condemn you to this minor galaxy." A beam of purple light shot from Galactus's finger to the Sufa's board, but didn't seem to cause any other effects. As the Devourer of Worlds turned back, Harry shouted, "Since I denied you a meal, before you go, here's a snack." Harry took out a crystal containing a large amount of pure life force derived from Phoenix Flame. This was the life force obtained from burning a small plane of hell's worth of demons back when the X-Men rescued those kidnapped kids. Next, he took out a golden apple. With a flash of light, the apple and crystal vanished and became a massive apple pie far larger than Harry himself. Harry used magic to deliver the pie to Galactus who only took it because he could in fact sense some meager amount of life force within. Obviously not a planet's worth, or even a continent or cities, but at least a town's worth and better than nothing. Harry then conjured a small apple pie in front of him and said, "This is the traditional Earth way to eat apple pie." Harry then smashed himself in the face with the pie pan. A moment later he removed it and started picking pieces off his face to eat. Galactus stared at him for a few moments before looking back at the pie in his hand. The incredulous looks of the Fantastic Four were ignored because Galactus didn't pay attention to beings on that level. Harry on the other hand had confirmed he was not on the level of insects, thus had a bit more of his attention. After considering it for a moment, Galactus smashed the pie into his own face, which caused the Fantastic Four to openly gap at the impossible spectacle. Galactus then removed the pie pan and picked some pieces of the pie off his face and proceeded to eat them. The life force was meager, but the taste was certainly not bad. It was better than empty calories at least. Galactus turned back and started walking back to his ship while eating more of the pie off his face. The conjured pie on Harry's face vanished and Johnny was the first to break the silence. Did you just prank a world-devouring monster into pieing himself in the face? Harry smiled proudly at Johnny but didn't answer back. The apple returned to his inventory since it was bound to him. The apple hadn't been eaten, he simply used its magic to change the form of the life force into a giant pie to be used for a prank. Harry said, "All right, time for a debrief. I'm sure you all have questions." Reed smiled and said, "I can certainly think of one or two." Susan rolled her eyes and said, "I'm surprised smoke isn't coming out of your ears from all the questions you probably have." Norinrad said, "I believe it is time for me to go. Though I have lost the freedom of the stars, I do not regret my choice. And now I must see what this galaxy has to offer." Susan asked, "What did he do to your board?" The surfer answered, "I can no longer traverse the gaps between galaxies. I am bound to roam this galaxy alone." Harry walked over to the surfboard and placed a hand on it. Though dangerous for others to do so, the surfer did not stop Harry as he did not feel Harry would do something that would endanger him. One aspect of sorcery Harry never used was the ability to drain energy. Mordo and the Ancient One could do it but neither ever would. Draining energy tainted the body and would change you. Drain too much and the person you were was dead and standing in your shoes was someone else, someone with your face but a different mindset, a corrupted mindset. Plus, even if Harry drained energy, he could only use it to add a temporary expansion to his magic reserves. He couldn't absorb it to level up without combat or battle meditation. Harry sensed the energy of the board and found that the pure power cosmic within had been removed. The rest of it was converted power cosmic, similar to the power cosmic fused into the Fantastic Four. Converted power cosmic was obviously less powerful and had less potential than normal power cosmic. Harry took a sphere of store power cosmic from his inventory and directly drained it before pushing it into the Sophiz board. Doing so was not easy. Harry was not skilled enough to do so in combat, but since the world was saved, he could put all his focus into this. Once done, Harry confirmed the effect and said, "I've planted a seed of what was taken back into the board. It will take a long time, a very long time, but that seed will grow and what was taken will eventually be restored." Since power cosmic could absorb other forms of energy and convert them into power cosmic, this small seed would eventually restore the board's full power. The surfer took his board and said, "I have seen more miracles this day than in the many years I have served Galactus." Well, was their champion chosen? Harry smiled but wouldn't correct the misunderstanding. Besides, a vain part of him liked the street cred. As the surfer got back on his board, Susan asked, "Will we ever see you again?" The surfer smiled back and answered, "I believe you will. Until then, take care." His board rose into the air and with a streak of light, vanished into the horizon. Harry looked over at the four and wondered how many times he could break them during the upcoming Q&A. He looked forward to it. Author's note. Okay, now that I've done the stuff I wanted to do with this FIC, I'll finally start with the MCU. Iron Man will be kidnapped soon, so we're finally kicking off the stuff everyone is looking forward to. The idea of Harry using the ultimate nullifier was a random thought that came to me while writing this, and dealing with Sublime was the only thing I felt was worth the weapons use that Harry knew of. Dealing with him will also let me focus on the MCU stuff without having to throw in violent X-Men stuff to mess with the timeline. Chapter 68. Chapter 68, No Rest for the Weary. On the way down the stairs from the Baxter Building's roof, Harry sent out several text messages. The first was to the Ancient One. "Everything has been resolved. I'll head over for a debrief after settling matters in New York." Harry got a reply, "Please do. The future is restored thankfully." Harry wondered if he would have considered calling Xavier if the Ancient One hadn't basically told them he was going to lose. The only reason they had a chance was because of Magneto, and he only acted because Xavier had informed him of the situation. Not only did his act of sacrificing Asteroid M buy them time, it also gave Harry the opening he needed to free Norinrad from Galactus's control, which is what gave Harry the info needed to get the quest. Harry next sent a group text to his girls. It was actually still morning and they might not have woken up yet. "Big thing happened this morning. It was solved. I'll give details at dinner." Harry expected that they might end up angry at Harry for not including them in this mess. They could have assisted the four with stalling Galactus, but the quest only said to have the four stall. Harry figured it was because of their level. His girls were far more powerful than the Fantastic Four and may have caused Galactus to become irritated faster. Though powerful, Harry didn't assume they were powerful enough to survive Galactus's ire. The next text was to Xavier. "If you didn't already notice, Galactus was sent packing. See if you can get Eric to come over. I want to speak with you both about a few matters." Harry got a reply, "It will be done. I'll text you when he arrives." The last text Harry sent was to Link. Find a big piece of land, preferably an island, the bigger the better, that can be acquired through legal means. Moments later his phone's screen was directed to a page with the top 10 best results found. Harry used technopathy to connect to the phone and went over the details. Relatively speaking, there were no pieces of land on Earth that weren't owned by someone, so through legal means basically meant somewhere that no one cared about a revolution. The top result was not the largest island available, it was only about a third the size of the state of New York and located north of Madagascar, but the details about who owned the island definitely had Harry's attention. Harry messaged back that he wanted a list of plans to be made available and to discuss them with the goblins. They hadn't had a good war in a while, and the self-isolated circumstances of this island nation was perfect for one. Ginasha wouldn't know what hit it. Harry was also checking out the reactions from the world. The planet ship was invisible to low-level beings, and any normal camera that looked at it would be instantly covered in static. A number of people were able to filter out the static, some better than others, and many saw the blurry planet ship, while a few with real skill saw the entire sphere and even Galactus himself with crystal clarity. Then there was the fight with the Fantastic Four against Galactus's goons and the Silver Surfer facing off against Galactus himself. None of the goons nor the Surfer were covered by static, so any recordings of them were crystal clear. And of course there was Galactus's voice. Though his image was blurry or covered in static or crystal clear depending on the camera operator, his voice was clearly recorded as it echoed very well. Not all of the fights were seen, of course. The Baxter building was the tallest building in the area, so even if witnesses stood on adjacent roofs, they could only film the flight of the Surfer and Johnny while only catching glimpses of the other two aliens when their fight was seen near the ledges. Due to the planet ship overhead, no satellite could see the roof of the Baxter building it had parked over, and the only recording of the fight from the roof would be the cameras set up by Reed and his computer. Though Reed's computers were very good, they didn't have any defense against technopathic hacking, so Harry was already editing the footage to show Reed using the nullifier while removing himself from the film with Link's help. Harry's voice was also being removed and replaced with Reed's, and since Harry didn't shout, none of the witnesses from the adjacent buildings heard him speak with Galactus. According to the footage and anything witnesses would see, the Fantastic Four and the Silver Surfer fought against Galactus, then Reed showed Galactus the nullifier and shot it into the clouds, breaking them apart and scaring Galactus into retreating. Reed then offered a giant pie to Galactus delivered by Susan's force fields, and, for some reason, he pied himself in the face with it and walked away. Yeah, Harry wasn't going to leave out his masterpiece from the footage. Now he just had to bribe his students enough to go along with the story and take the credit. The longer Harry could remain low profile when it came to abilities, the more pranks he could pull on those who didn't know what he could do. In addition to everything else, Harry also wanted to make a few plans to prevent this from happening again. Harry didn't know how many world devourers were out there, but Galactus may not have been the only one. Harry wondered if he could just ask Jean to give him the locations of those planets that needed to burn, and he could use their locations as a bargaining chip, but Harry doubted it. The Phoenix burning a world was different from Galactus devouring one. A burned world would be wreathed in Phoenix flames and would be granted new life, meaning any world burned by the Phoenix would one day grow into a flourishing new world. From what Harry understood on how Galactus's devouring worked, there would be nothing left but a husk afterwards, and there would be no way to return life to a devoured world. Jean got those planets from the Phoenix, and the Phoenix may not have been okay with killing the chosen planets completely instead of allowing them to be reborn in fire. Still, it was worth a shot. Harry would send Jean a message later and maybe get back from the Phoenix some details about Galactus. Otherwise, it might be a good idea to cultivate other planets. Like, what if Jean and Harry covered Mars in Phoenix flames to burn the surface and convert it directly into life force, and then Harry planted algae and various seeds over the planet which absorbed the life force to grow. The planet would be a bit smaller if he did that, but it might work. Or perhaps Harry could create a means using what he learned from the Silver Surfer's surfboard to create a system that could generate power cosmic. If he could perfect such a system, he could feed it black holes and convert their energies directly into power cosmic. Of course, such plans would take a while to implement, but Harry probably had time, so it wasn't an issue. Once Harry and the Fantastic Four had returned to their lab, Harry said, "All right, who's first?" Johnny quickly said, "Yeah, I got one." "Who are you really?" Harry considered it and said, "Husband, student, teacher, prankster, practitioner of most forms of magic, billionaire, warrior, inventor, and part-time protector." Part-time because it's more of a hobby than a calling. He was also a mutant, an Obscurus in human form, and a gamer, but he didn't want to give away all of his secrets. Not just yet anyways. Before anyone could ask a different question, Reed asked, "What did you mean when you told Galactus you were a chosen of the Living Tribunal, Eternity, Infinity, Lady Death, and the Phoenix Force?" Harry considered it and said, "I died when I was 9, and for some random reason, those guys, who are big shots in the universe, brought me back to life and gave me some abilities. I was never told the reason they did so, but a few years back the Phoenix Force did tell me I could do whatever I wanted with those abilities." Johnny was quick to ask, "What sort of abilities?" "A few. The main one being direct energy manipulation, what others might call magic, sorcery, extra-reality programming. I had to spend a long time learning how to use it, but I can do a lot right now." Susan then asked a question no one in the room was expecting. "Were you the one who saved the shuttle?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to face Susan before turning back to Harry. The latter smiled and answered back, "I wondered if you could see that." Yes, that was me. Since you know about that, I might as well come clean with a few other things. Ben exclaimed, wait a minute, you're the one who steered the shuttle back when everything was on the fritz. Reed added, I confirmed the autopilot was completely disabled, so some external force must have been behind it. Harry nodded and said, well, remember my TV appearance? I referenced some powerful ancient Egyptian mutants and someone watched that and actually opened the tomb of the guy I was referencing. Turns out he wasn't dead. Once he woke up, he enabled a system which launched those pyramids into the sky and turned the sky purple. Johnny asked, wait, that was made by some old Egyptian guy? Reed said, it would explain the structure's form. Harry continued, the purple sky was the prelude to something much worse, so I made a portal and used it to shoot the pyramid with magic, and the Egyptian guy showed up and tried to kill me. I had backup and friends there with me, and together we fought and beat him. According to his monologue, the pyramids were a part of a mutant ascension system which would awaken the dormant X gene in everyone on the planet. After beating him, I fired more magic at the main pyramid which caused the little ones to explode. The system was disabled but the main pyramid didn't explode, so I left it alone since I had other things to do at the time. Ben frowned and repeated back, you left it alone. Harry nodded. It was my wedding day. Ben looked surprised at that, as did the rest, but they nodded a bit in understanding. When I found out you guys were going to investigate it, I gave you those shield designs since those should have protected you from any form of energy the pyramid generated. I just didn't expect things to go so wrong. After a few moments of silence, Susan sighed and said, I can't blame you, Professor. You did what you felt you could. Harry gave an awkward smirk and said, well, when the shuttle started its crash course, I went back into space and used some unique means to control the descent of the shuttle. Rather than let the awkward mood settle in further, Reed asked, how did you find Galactus's home world and the nullifier so quickly? Reed could guess how large the area Harry had to search for was, and Harry had found it in under 10 minutes. One of the abilities I got when I came back to life was an innate sense of how to solve certain problems, but only after I learned of their existence. Once Norin Rad told us about the ultimate nullifier, that sense kicked in and told me the direction of the nullifier. I made portal after portal to narrow down in the universe where my sense was pointing until I found it. I'm pretty sure that this sense was gifted to me by a very powerful being called the Living Tribunal, though it was gifted on a whim. Once I got the nullifier, the manual for how to use it appeared in my possession, and I'm pretty sure that too was given by the Living Tribunal. Beings on that level won't interfere with beings on our level, but giving me a direction and showing me how to use that weapon was not a large enough matter to be considered interference. I did most of the work myself. Ben said, so you've got some friends in high places, guardian angels like. Harry considered it and said, I'm not sure if I'd put it that way, but it's not entirely wrong. However, what activates that sense and what does not are not in my control in the slightest. Johnny said, sounds like a video game, quests, and stuff. Trying not to smirk, Harry pretended to ponder over the analogy and said, I guess you can consider it like that. Harry spoke as if he was speaking about the weather, but the four were stunned at the content of the conversation. Harry inwardly smirked at having successfully broken them. Now to go in for the kill. After coming back to life, I spent a year in a Scottish castle learning wizard magic. A lot of evil wizards tried to kill me and I took all their money and invested it into a company. Then I spent 2 years in a temple in Tibet learning sorcery. I then got American citizenship and spent 2 years at a high school in Salem learning under Dr. Hank McCoy and Jonathan Silvercloud and got my doctorate while expanding my company. I used what I learned of magic energy to create metaphysics, and then I applied for a position at NYU, and that's my story. All 4 of the world's first superhero team stood there gapping at the simplistic summary. Harry smiled and said, no more questions? All right. Oh, and I edited the footage of that fight and removed myself from it. If anyone asks, tell them the Silver Surfer gave you the nullifier and you were stalling until you could make it work, and then you used it to fix the sky and threaten Galactus. Susan was the first to recover and asked, wait, but why? The others looked like they were about to convince Harry to take the credit for saving the world, but Harry replied back with a smile, if they know what I can do, I can't prank them anymore. Pranks are far more important to me than credit, so please do me a favor and don't let the world know I did anything. Make something up, please. That logic would not make any sense when it came to anyone else, but Harry took the time to hold back the devourer of worlds so he could trick him into pieing himself in the face. Harry did not work on normal logic. Reed sighed and said, very well. We'll come up with something believable to cover for you. Ben understood that Harry was pushing the problems associated with this mess on them and said, fine, but if we need something later and you skimp out on us, I'll make sure everyone in the future calls us the Fantastic Five. Harry visibly flinched at that, making Johnny give a predatory look. Yeah, I wonder what your name will be? Wizard? Professor. Susan wanted to get in on pranking Harry back and said, I don't know. Harry gives me the feeling of some old guy who spends all his time in a cave on the mountain, so maybe hermit? Or sage, the wise and powerful. Harry got goosebumps and said with a whimper, please no, stop. Reed chuckled and said, he does have that ancient, all-knowing vibe, doesn't he? Harry operated out of there before he took any more mental damage. The cameras built into the lab he turned off with his technopathy would turn back on when he left, and he'd already said everything he wanted to say. After escaping from the Baxter building, Harry took out the long-distance communicator which let him stay in contact with Jean and sent a long message. When Harry moved to the States, he built a quantum entanglement communication system he used to avoid long-distance charges, but that system was heavily reliant on magic and didn't work so far away from Harry. He'd tried to make a few similar systems which could be used at any range, but they hadn't worked out, forcing Harry to rely on astral tech for now. Magneto hadn't gotten to Xavier's yet, so Harry made a portal to Camartage and arranged for a meeting with the Ancient One. Wong was waiting and Harry got out his best tea once he arrived at the table. The Ancient One took a sip and with a calming breath said, "All right, please begin." Harry nodded and told her everything that happened. About the Silver Surfer who sent the beacon before Harry could do anything. About Galactus and his world-devouring cloud. About calling Xavier and the world's failure to attack the ship. And about Asteroid M and Norrin Radd's release and the quest. Then Harry told her of his tracking of Galactus's home world, about going back in time and sending an SOS to Asgard, and breaking in and getting the nullifier and getting the manual. He explained what Sublime was and why he decided to use the nullifier on it before he headed over to threaten Galactus, which got him to leave. Harry refilled the Ancient One's cup twice during the tale and Harry could tell she was rattled. She could have escaped to another realm or plane of existence, but the Sorcerer Supreme was one who went down with the ship. Her only option, had Harry been unable to stop the end of the world, would have been to use the Time Stone, but that would have merely delayed the end of the world. Even if the Time Stone was used to defeat Galactus, the energy released for such a massive usage would tell the whole of the universe about its presence on Earth and probably invite something just as bad as Galactus to Earth. All magic comes with a price after all. Of course, since even time energy can be devoured by power cosmic and converted, it wasn't a guarantee that would have worked anyways. After sitting in silence for a few moments, the Ancient One said, "I agree that a plan B must be devised to prevent this from happening again. If you need any assistance, please keep me informed." Harry informed her of the possibility of creating another planet rich in life he could use as a bargaining chip, that or a way to protect the planet. It had been hours since the SOS was sent and no word had been heard from Asgard, and neither expected them to respond, meaning Asgard was a poor choice for a plan B. The title of Sorcerer Supreme was not as grand as one would think. It was granted to the most powerful magic practitioner on the planet or dimension, but Earth was not the only planet with a Sorcerer Supreme. The powerful beings that the Ancient One and those who came before her defended the Earth against were, in the grand scheme of things, basically pirates and rogues. Powerful on a planetary scale, but in a universal scale, not so much. Galactus was on a completely different level than anything any Sorcerer Supreme has ever, in the history of Earth, successfully defended against. The only times that anything came close, the reason they survived was because they hugged the shin of something more powerful, like the Alphather Odin Borson. Thankfully it worked out and the Ancient One was highly pleased with her student. She had taught him when fighting something more powerful the best option was to borrow the name of someone bigger and bluff like your life depended on it. Harry had pretty much done just that. Even after Dr. Stephen Strange became the Sorcerer Supreme, Harry would still, in her mind, have that title as well. The actual definition of Sorcerer Supreme was, the practitioner of the mystic or magic arts who has greater skills than all others or commands a greater portion of the ambient magical energies than any other organism on a given world or dimension. Because the word "or" was used in the definition, if there was a sorcerer who commanded a greater portion of the ambient energies of the world but was weaker than another sorcerer who possessed more skill in the mystic arts than the former and all others on the planet, then both would actually have the title. The Ancient One was, for now, more skilled than Harry in the mystic arts and she controlled the greatest portion of the planet's energies. Harry never used evocation magic, so the amount of ambient energy he could use would never match a master of evocation. Evocation masters borrowed the names of realm lords to control the energies of those realms, while Harry always controlled those energies manually. According to what she'd seen, Stephen Strange would grasp the command of energies unlike any other before her and become a powerful Sorcerer Supreme who would far exceed her. He would also be a master of evocation and be capable of using vast amounts of power. However, she felt that even at his peak, Stephen's skill when it came to magic may never exceed Harry's. The pair discussed matters of great and of little importance for some time until Harry got a text from Xavier that Eric had arrived at the Institute. Harry said his farewells to the Ancient One and made a portal to the Institute. Charles and Eric were waiting with the latter in full metal armor. Without wasting words, Eric said, "I'm glad to see you're not dead." He'd been fully informed of the power of Galactus. Otherwise, he'd never have been so decisive in the sacrifice of Asteroid M. Harry nodded and took out a hologram projector and placed it on a table. "This is an island called Genosha. The ruler of the land has every child tested for an unawakened X gene, and if found, the child is forced to undergo a treatment to turn them into an brainwashed enhanced who is added to the ruler's army and used to suppress the locals." Being friends with Charles and being a self-proclaimed mutant leader, Eric was not a layman when it came to genetics. He asked, "What does this island have to do with anything?" Harry brought up a few UN charters and said, "I would not have had the time to do what was needed without your sacrifice, and you sacrificed a lot, so I am in your debt. This island nation is in a temperate climate and far from the control of the UN, but ideally placed for shipping and travel. Because the country actively violates human rights, they have no protection granted by the UN, and within 6 months, I will be removing the current government from power and giving full control of this island to you." What? Apparently both were surprised. Harry continued, if you become the leader of Genosha, you will have diplomatic immunity, meaning your crimes until now will no longer matter. As long as you follow UN guidelines, you can choose your own laws and if you want, have a mutant-only country. Eric was only stunned for a moment before he stared thoughtfully at the hologram. Xavier asked, this is legal? Harry smiled, oh yes. Of course, I'm 85% sure if Eric leads his own, mutant-only country, he'll eventually use it to declare war on others. Because of that, you will help him with the country. Eric looked at Harry with a slight bit of amusement at Harry's accurate presumption and said, if our people are all gathered in one place, we would simply be putting a target on our backs. Harry nodded. You were already prepared for that with Asteroid M completely. Your plan with Asteroid M would have made you the greatest enemy on the planet simply because of your position. Becoming the leader of Genosha will have the opposite effect, which will increase the rate of migration. Harry added, I also found the one responsible for causing humans to hate mutants and I killed him earlier today. What? Harry wondered if there was an echo. Harry asked Xavier, before the clouds broke up, did you notice the static of the astral plane vanished? Xavier nodded. There had always been static in the astral plane, but suddenly it was gone. He had no idea why. Harry continued, there was a parasitical, bacterial, psionic entity on the planet that was unable to infect mutants, so it wanted to kill all the mutants on Earth. That static was a low-level telepathic field over the planet which caused people to mistrust mutants. I stole a weapon that could delete anything from Galactus's planet and used it to threaten Galactus with. Before doing so though, I used it to delete that bacteria off the planet. Xavier's eyes widened and hundreds of pieces fell together in his mind. He'd always known the fear of mutants was irrational, but never understood the cause. Harry said, from now on, people will only fear mutants if you give them a reason to. He gave a poignant look at Eric and said, in addition to removing the current regime, I'll also arrange some farmlands and reshape the land a bit. I'll get the details to you in 2 weeks and we can discuss how you want to build your capital. Xavier asked, why would you do so much? What would you have to gain? Harry shrugged. Giving the goblins a chance to let loose was already a decent reason. If he wanted to gain something, he'd had Eric meet the goblins and they could discuss business. Since Harry was married to Eric's daughter, Eric could be brought into the fold of magic, the same way Vernon could be informed about magic second-hand through his wife who was a Muggle-born sister. Harry answered, someone who uses magic cares a great deal more about debts than most. Eric sacrificed his most valued possession and in doing so, saved my life. Yes, he saved his own life and everyone else on the planet's life too, but that doesn't make it any less meaningful to pay him back with something of equal or greater value than what he gave up. Eric had remained silent for a moment but said, very well. I accept your offer. Harry nodded and brought up documents, maps, charts and figures for the region and explained everything about it detail by detail over the next few hours. Eventually they finished discussing the preliminary discussions and Harry returned home. Not just because of the black clouds and the news, but because of the after effects of Sublime's deletion. Classes had been cancelled for the day and the girls were all home watching the news. Rather than explain everything for the umpteenth time, he simply invited the girls into his head and directly showed them all the memories. Jade didn't have any way to explore the mind, so Harry had to pull her into his head. Unsurprisingly, Rogue, Wanda, and Jade were pissed that Harry didn't invite them to face off against Galactus with the Four. Harry could only reply, the quest said, the longer he is stalled, the more likely he is to reduce them to their molecular essence. Galactus treated the Four like insects. If something stronger than an insect tried to stall him, he might have reduced them to their molecular essence right away. With the power of the dog talisman, Jade can be considered immortal, but I don't even think she'd survive that, so I couldn't risk it. Wanda said, I get that, but being left out still hurts from our side. I want you to promise, no matter what the quest says, next time you are in a situation even close to that, you'll call us. Rogue said, yeah, I don't like being kicked to the sidelines but a pop-up message. Jade said, besides, video game rules are more like guidelines. It's not cheating if the game doesn't crash. Everyone turned to look at her and she responded, what, causing the group to release a collective sigh. Harry turned on the news and pulled up his tablet. There were about a dozen applicants for Harry's next Foundation of Metaphysics class who actually had the proper prerequisite courses, and there were 5 who'd gotten more than 85% on the 100-question placement test. Shuri the Wakandan princess was not an applicant this semester, which was fine with Harry, but there was something about the placement tests which Harry found humorous. Some student profiles tried the placement test over a dozen times and still didn't get a passing grade. The placement test said how many you got wrong, but didn't say which you got wrong, and the 100 questions were taken from a list of 10,000 Harry had come up with. Harry figured there were some groups who assembled large teams of scientists and had them try the placement test together so they could fake a test result and send someone into Harry's class. The problem was that these teams kept getting the stuff wrong. Not everyone was like Victor Von Doom. The news channels all had the same story about the planet ship, but with the exception of channels from New York, all other channels seemed to agree the entire thing was an elaborate hoax. The governments of the world knew differently, but they neither confirmed nor denied the reality of the situation, and the press didn't want to look like idiots for telling people space aliens invaded New York, so they pretended to be smarter than everyone else and accused them of lying while stating they were smart enough to see through the lies. Harry was not surprised at how easily people were convinced of something if they were told. Smart people believed it, and with lines of experts pointing out why this was a hoax, it was easier to get around than the terrifying truth. Most in New York still believed what they saw, but no one else in the world was buying it. The girls quickly got tired of the world calling New Yorkers liars, so they changed to another news channel that finally had a different story. It turned out that Stark Industries was releasing a new weapon called the Jericho and would be demonstrating it soon. For some reason, Harry felt he'd be meeting the genius billionaire soon. Author's note: who should show up in Harry's class next semester? I'ma save Shuri for later, and I've forgotten most of what I watched from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Besides S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, spies from other countries or other people, who should be in the class. Also, for a terrible, cringeworthy, yet accurate name, I'm thinking either Hermit or Sage. Marvel timeline details. Iron Man the movie was released in the year 2008 but was set in the year 2010. Iron Man 2, Hulk, and Thor were all set in 2011, and Avengers was set in 2012. Chapter 69. Chapter 69 New Semester. Harry leaned over a dilapidated table in a house that looked ready to be demolished, hidden away in the deepest part of Salem, New York. This was the Brotherhood safe house, and for some reason, Eric insisted on meeting there even though Harry knew the man didn't live here. Mystique and Pietro were in the room as well, and the other members of the Brotherhood of Mutants had all stepped out as they felt awkward being in the same room as Harry and not trying to get back at what Harry did to them. Harry felt they were all being drama queens. Their clothes eventually changed back and the smell was almost completely gone. In any case, Harry had brought over a large assortment of highly detailed maps and folders containing detailed tables, charts, and graphs of insanely boring information that would be required to take over and lead a country. Thankfully, Eric had been preparing to do just that with Asteroid M, so he wasn't learning this stuff from scratch, just changing the layout and how resources would be delivered. Pietro asked in his normal rapid tone of voice, "Are you sure you don't need some backup? I wouldn't mind dealing with guys like these." Harry shook his head. "I doubt you would, and Eric could probably take on most of the country on his own, but do remember that the armed forces are not humans, but enhanced mutates who have had their X gene forcefully awakened before being brainwashed into loyal servitude. No matter how many you kill, they only have to kill you once. The forces I'll be using will accept the possible death toll for taking the country, so there's no need for it to fall on you." Harry had already met with the goblins who'd been more than pleased with this idea. If the hostile party was made of normal humans, the goblins would not waste their time with them, but Harry had explained the details and the goblins recognized the country's ruling party as a worthy foe. Goblins trained to fight goblins and wizards, so enhanced mutates would be a good match for them. Of course, they had not agreed for free. According to goblin law, if they conquered the land, it belonged to them, but because of wizard law, they could not own land above ground. Harry used a loophole in this to have them conquer the land and then purchase the land from them using a decent chunk of his savings. This was in accordance with all laws and the goblins were satisfied with the arrangements. Besides, Harry was providing the transportation. Portals were terrifying in war. After he disabled any form of communication and monitoring on the island and covered the island in clouds to shield the island from satellites in space, Harry could direct the goblin swarms to exactly where they needed to go. With this option on the table, the Goblin Council had gone over dozens of heated debates about how not to make the conquest too easy. The only difficult part would be the memory removal of the surviving citizens afterwards, but mass memory removal was something wizards were good at. While laying out plans, Harry innocently asked, "Are you going to build another boob detector on the island?" Harry timed the question just as Pietro was drinking some juice and achieved a magnificent high-speed spit take. "Wait, what?" he shouted. He figured Harry was joking until he saw the massive frown on both Mystique and Magneto. "What? You don't actually have a boob detector, do you?" Magneto asked with a flat voice that contained well-seated anger. "How do you know of that?" The so-called boob detector was the results of the stolen Cerebro plans Mystique had taken from the Institute. When they had a telepath on their side named Psylocke use it, instead of locating mutants, they could only locate women with boobs DD cup or larger. Magneto was most displeased. Harry nonchalantly shrugged and said, "I may have altered the plans Mystique stole from the Institute. You're not getting any younger, so I thought I'd help you settle down and find a nice woman with a giant rack." Pietro looked horrified at Harry's admission and at the irritation rolling off Magneto. Harry smiled and continued going over the plans for the island. He figured they wouldn't be building another boob detector after all. When the last weekend of Christmas break was over, Harry started his new class and was looking forward to it. Not enough people had passed Foundations of Metaphysics to justify the upper class, so this was the same class he taught last semester, just to a new group of HAREM students. Harry stood over his desk looking over the details of his new class as students showed up one by one. There were 6 students who stood out. One because his last name was Connors, but apparently he had no relation to Professor Kurt Connors. Nothing else really stood out about him. The next 2 were interesting. Gemma Simmons and Leopold Fitz. Both were 22 and apparently obtained multiple PhDs by the time they were 17, just a year older than Harry was when he got his. Their fake backgrounds were something Harry recognized as the standard cover for the SHIELD Academy of Science and Technology, meaning they were junior agents. Simmons looked to specialize in biology and chemistry and minored in the physical sciences side, while Fitz was the other way around. Both had all the prerequisites to apply for the class, so they didn't need to take the 100-question test. The pair sat together and looked both nervous and excited, though Harry didn't look at their faces while unpaused, so they didn't know he was observing them. The next girl was even more interesting. Hope Van Dyne was the daughter of Hank Pym, the apparently inventor of Pym particles, though he denies it to anyone who asks. She was homeschooled all her life and had never actually attended a physical school, meaning though she was an adult, this would probably be her first actual classroom. She'd gotten in with 89% on the placement test, the highest score for placement entrance in this particular class. And then there were the two fake students. 3 seats behind Hope was a blonde woman with hair that had been completely dyed black and set into a nondescript ponytail. She wore large, fake, thick-frame glasses that Harry could tell had a built-in camera. In fact, including hers, there were 4 different hidden cameras in the classroom amongst the students. Her identity was completely fake and she'd gotten in with 85% on the placement. Her fake name was Polyglottos, and Harry admitted that S.H.I.E.L.D. was pretty decent when it came to making up fake names and backgrounds. Trying not to draw any attention, her posture was both attentive and uninteresting, which made her not stand out at all and look just like a normal student among the rest. Harry wished the second fake had her style. In the front row right in front of Harry's desk was a beautiful brunette that looked both innocent and seductive and kept glancing sideways at Harry while biting her lips. She'd gotten in on 80% on the placement test, which, technically, wasn't enough to pass. Harry let her in because he was informed by Link there was a chance that students who did pass would go missing until there was a spot for her, which is how little Miss Leoartha became his student. Harry could use telepathy or legilimency to determine their goals, but where would be the fun in that? The only reason he was looking over the background checks Link did on each student was to ensure the pranks were tailor-made for them. For example, one of his students this semester lost his aunt in a burning building a few years ago, so fire pranks were out. Harry didn't care for their real names, he just wanted to know who he should target for the best pranks this year. While handing out the syllabus, Harry asked himself if so many cameras meant he should tone down the mischief and mayhem. He almost snorted at that thought. Of course not. A bigger audience meant he should perform even more outrageous pranks. Of course, for legal purposes, the syllabus did say no cameras or microphones allowed. After finishing with the syllabus, Harry asked, "All right, questions." Fitz's hand went up first and Harry pointed at him. "What is the point of pranking the class?" Harry nodded at the question and said, "Brains are very good at doing something they've done or experienced before, but are actually really bad, or should I say, inefficient, at doing things for the first time. That's why learning something new is not so easy and pioneering something is harder still. The point of these in-class pranks is to get you used to dealing with things you've never dealt with before in a somewhat safe environment so that in the future you will be more capable of dealing with brand new things without panicking or freezing up." Harry didn't look at the students directly but did pause to check out a few things and noticed the disguised blonde in the back had a smirk she was trying to hide. Harry wondered if he could get her to laugh out loud. After unpausing, Harry said, "For example, I may or may not have replaced one of the desks in this room with a flesh-eating mimic. So just in case, you should check your desks each day to make sure it is not a mimic in disguise." The incredulous faces made by almost every student in class made Harry's heart warm. Harry did his best to keep a straight face when a few students started experimentally poking their desks. Harry answered a few more questions and went over the timetable for the semester and when they would be covering what subjects. Every subject also had videos associated with them on VideoShare that the students could watch and quiz themselves on to catch up if they got lost or fell behind. Next, Harry went over the first project for the month. Since January was almost over, this project would need to be finished as either a blueprint or a prototype by the end of February. For those in class who wish not only to learn the subject, but apply themselves in a way where they can learn where they can improve, I offer monthly projects and this first one will be due at the end of February. The roof next to Harry suddenly caved in and something black and shiny fell through and smashed against the floor to the surprise of everyone in class except Harry. Once the dust settled, the fallen figure appeared to be a man in a full set of medieval armor. Not a finger or hair could be seen beneath the complete set of metal plating and his helmet was in the shape of a bucket. After a groan, the fallen knight got up and said with a clip British accent, "Oof. Sorry about that?" He pointed at the roof and said, "That'll buff right out." Harry asked, "Are you all right?" The Black Knight said, "Never better. Now if you excuse me." He bent down to pick up the sword that had fallen to his side. "I have a duel to win." Just as he took his first step toward the door, the arm carrying his sword fell off. Everyone in class stared at it. Harry asked once more, "Are you sure you're okay?" The knight stared down at his fallen arm and bent down to pick it up. "It's all right. 'Tis but a scratch." Harry said flatly, "Your arm fell off. I've had worse." A moment after picking up his arm, his other arm fell off onto the ground with a noticeable bounce. The Black Knight looked back and forth between his fallen arms. Harry said again, "I really think I should call an ambulance. It's just a flesh wound." After looking back and forth between the arms for another moment, he looked up and asked, "Do you have any tape?" Harry shrugged and got some scotch tape. He put both arms on his desk and taped over them a few times to get them bound together. He then put the pair on the Black Knight's back and walked around him a dozen or so times to tape the bundle of arms securely to his armored back. The unarmed knight then said, "Thank you. Could you stick my sword to me?" Harry said, "I can't tape it. The tape would get cut by the sword." "That's all right, just stick it through me." Harry picked up the sword and said, "Oh, all right then." Harry then walked behind the knight and pierced the sword through his back, into his front to the gasp of a few students in the class. Though there was no blood, the Black Knight with his severed arms bound together and taped to his back with a sword sticking out of his front said, "Well, all right then. With this, I should at least be able to get a draw." And with that he walked out of the classroom to the gobsmacked looks of the students, and Harry went back to describing the end of the month project. This project will be the ultimate bounce. Create a surface that can best bounce something with a high amount of kinetic energy back away from the surface without harming the surface. After answering a few questions of the students who weren't still shell-shocked, Harry started teaching the content of the first chapters of the book until the class was over. To Harry's surprise though, he felt the tug of Jean's super porte-clés near the end of class. Harry pulled out some assignments and placed them on his desk and said, "All right, and with that, class dismissed. Before you leave, you can pick up one of these assignments for practicing." In the next moment, Harry's desk massively expanded and shredded apart, revealing a giant set of wooden, splinter-like teeth on the jaws of a large creature hidden under the wood. The giant set of jaws bent over and crunched into Harry's torso and lifted him into the air to the screams of a few students as his legs wiggled back and forth. The terrifying mouth opened and swallowed Harry completely before bending back down and shrinking slightly as the wooden pieces sent themselves back. Once it stopped moving, it had completely returned to the form of a perfectly ordinary desk, though Harry was nowhere in sight. During the next class, Harry was unsurprised to find that no one chose to pick up any of the practice assignments off his desk. The hard light system could make Harry invisible by placing a hologram over him, though he'd become visible after leaving the room since he took his suitcase with him. Those with cameras might notice it on replay, but Harry doubted anyone picked it up during the show. After Harry left the campus and returned home, he entered the basement and tugged on the connection between him and the porte-clés. Harry's magic partially powered it, so he had to pull on it for a few minutes before Jean popped into existence next to him. Her eyes lit up at Harry's presence and she stepped forward to embrace him and proceeded to fall sideways due to the insane dizziness of the intergalactic porte-clés travel. Rather than pull Jean up, Harry lay himself on the ground and held her in his arms and pulled her into a kiss. Eventually the kiss broke and Jean said, "I just got your message and there's a lot of things I need to tell you." Harry just continued laying there, enjoying her scent and their connection to each other. "Everyone will be out of class in an hour, so let's go over it together, all right?" Jean pressed herself into Harry's chest and listened to his heartbeat and simply enjoyed his presence. What she had to say could wait after all. Harry sent text messages to the girls that Jean was back an hour later. He was certain they would ditch class if he sent them right away, and he wanted a bit of time with Jean until then. Unsurprisingly, everyone was back about 5 minutes later, even Jade, who'd gone dragon form due to the noble cause of seeing Jean again and just turned invisible and flew back from her high school. Little Potato started cooking up a massive dinner when Jean got back and would finish shortly. Everyone sat at the dinner table and Jean started telling them what she knew. According to what the Phoenix knows, Galactus is the egg of the next universe. Jade asked, "What does that mean?" "When this universe ends, Galactus will fuse with another being of great power and they will explode. That explosion will be the Big Bang of the next universe. He is a tool of the universe created to harvest the seeds of this present to plant in the field of the next universe. The worlds he devours are not truly destroyed. They will basically be used as blueprints for the first worlds of the next universe. Galactus serves a really important purpose in the universe, so it would be really bad if anything happened to him." Rogue asked, "Can't we just direct him to those bad worlds you gotta burn? Save them nice worlds and let him eat all the nasty ones?" Jean shook her head. "If we did that, then the next universe would be filled with too many bad worlds. It is best if he consumes random worlds, the more variety, the better." Harry shook his head and said, "So seeding life on dead worlds and feeding him those is no good." Jean considered it before closing her eyes. A moment later she opened them, but within were flames. After another moment, she closed them and opened them once more to show her normal eyes. She said, "As long as he doesn't only eat those worlds, it might be alright if you filled them with variety, so you'll need seeds from all over the universe." Wanda rolled her eyes and said, "We'll just hop over to the grocery store and pick up some. They're next to the oatmeal, right?" Jean smiled and said, "Actually, I may be able to help with that. Last week, while flying through space, I saw a spaceship. I used a bit of telepathy to convince them to go to the nearest inhabitable planet and I followed them. It was out of the way but so worth it. I found a really nice, really advanced alien world and I have the coordinates for it for Harry." The girls all jumped up and shouted with excitement. Harry left a device with Jean that could record the 6-dimensional coordinates of anywhere she was. She'd recorded where she was before she activated the porte-clés, so Harry could send her back later after making another porte-clés for her. Jean said, "The first and only planet I've gotten to so far was in the Andromeda Galaxy. It was a really nasty place. The surface was destroyed by war and the only survivors on either side of the war continued the war, even though it was obvious both sides had long since lost. The planet was a little bigger than Earth, so I charged 6 Phoenix bombs and released them all. Planets were all different sizes and there was no way Harry could build a single bomb that could cover the surface of a planet. The only reason he could make one that covered a sixth of an Earth-sized planet was because he used a lot of Time Lord math inscribed adamantium to supercharge the properties of the reality bomb. Everyone also had a spark of Phoenix fire which needed to be charged by Jean or Harry. They charged slowly, but slowly charging 6 bombs took far less time than the recovery period Jean would need if she empowered herself to become strong enough to burn an entire planet in one go. Jean continued, I stayed on the planet for a day or so and got a lot of intel. The best news is that they don't think the Phoenix was responsible for burning the planet. Jade asked, why not? I mean it got burnt with Phoenix fire, right? The Jade from a few months ago would probably not have been cool with burning planets, but she was part dragon now and didn't see things the way she used to. She was aware she'd changed but didn't really care. Jean said, if I burned it down normally, I'd turn into a planet-sized firebird first which would be visible through much of the galaxy. No firebird showed up and the reality bombs churned the crust in a way that normal Phoenix fire can't do, so some people think someone is framing the Phoenix. Even if I get outed, as long as no one catches me with the bombs, I have plausible deniability. Harry asked, how did the bombs work compared to doing it manually? Jean said, good enough. The bombs carried the flame into the crust which allowed the flames to grant life to a deeper part of the planet. The main difference is that it is uneven, but I can tell the Phoenix doesn't mind at all. The new life on that planet will be stronger at the locations closer to where the bombs went off and weaker further away instead of uniform, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Harry was pleased to hear that. It meant he hadn't let the Phoenix force down. Though the entity claimed it didn't care what Harry did with its power, Harry still wanted to pay it back. He owed a lot to the ones who gave him a childhood and brought him back after all. Jean asked, so how did you beat Galactus? You said you drove him off but didn't say how. Harry invited her into his mind and once more shared the memories of what happened. Once they got to the part where Harry found Galactus's home world, Harry sighed. More than anything, Harry wanted to use the same method to find the planets the Phoenix wanted burnt. However, Jean could only go to those planets using teleportation or flight. The problem was that teleportation required a degree of connection Jean wasn't willing to commit to, as she might lose herself to the Phoenix. Once she was older and wiser, it wouldn't be so bad, but at only 17 years old she would lose her identity as Jean Grey if she used too much of the Phoenix's power, so he had to go the long way. The problem with flying as the Phoenix through space, however, was that she flew using astral currents and found planets which needed burning through those currents. She didn't have a pointer showing her the direction of the planet she needed to burn. The best she had was a pointer which showed her the location of the closest astral current which would take her to the planet that needed burning. She could only find the path, not the destination, so Harry couldn't use his portal trick to narrow down where she needed to go. Thankfully, astral currents were filled with shortcuts and wormholes. Jean had apparently gotten to the Andromeda Galaxy in a few days and was already 3 galaxies further away, nearing the location of the second to be burned planet. After showing off his adventures with Galactus, Jean got out her pictures of the universe and of the planet she'd found just in time for dinner. Even though Jade rushed home first, tonight was still the night of the weekly student group, so Mary Jane, Felicia, Gwen, and Peter showed up later. Apparently Gwen and Peter would be going on a field trip to Oscorp in a month. After the study group was over, Harry took Jean to bed and began ripping off her clothes, much to the redhead's delight. It had been a month since they'd truly bonded and neither intended to waste the night sleeping. In another part of the country, Nicholas Joseph Fury was sitting in front of a computer monitor with a split screen. On one side was a video of Harry's class and on the other side was the woman with the black dyed hair who was watching the same video alongside the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. from her apartment in New York. The last 2 weeks had not been good for Fury. Some agents had interviewed the Fantastic Four about the Galactus incursion and even gotten security footage which showed the entire battle from start to finish. The four explained how the Silver Surfer came to warn them of Galactus's coming and gave Reed the ultimate nullifier. They did what they could to stall until Reed could figure out how to use it, and then they used it to threaten the massive purple monster himself with it and get him to leave the planet alone. The Galactus incursion, the interview, and the video were all declared classified simply due to the fact that most who watched it had nightmares afterwards. Seeing how close the planet came to complete annihilation was not a wake-up call anyone enjoyed. Fury, on the other hand, was the type of man who slept with one eye open, so he didn't have issues going over the video a few times. It was only because he'd gone over it a few times he could sense that something wasn't adding up. Something was missing from the report and the four were leaving something out. The pie was a dead giveaway. As the video of Harry's class finished and the desk turned into a mimic and ate Professor Potter, Fury's eyebrow twitched just a little, which was not missed by the agent watching alongside her boss, though she would never admit to having seen a thing. After the viewpoint of the camera left the classroom and the video turned off, Fury looked into the camera on his monitor so the agent on the other side would see him looking at her in the eye and said, "What are your thoughts, Agent Morse?" After a slight pause, Bobby Morse answered, "He's definitely well-trained," though since he admitted to being well-trained on live TV and admitted to having successfully registered himself as a deadly weapon, I suppose that's not too surprising. Fury returned a deadpan stare and stated, "Now tell me something I don't already know." Other than taking a cursory glance at each student and looking at those who asked questions, he didn't take a long look at a single person, not even Hank Pym's daughter, and even I was surprised to see her there. Yes, and so he didn't need to look at anyone. He acted like he didn't care who came into that class, but he is certainly not stupid enough to teach just anyone, so he likely knew every single person in that class before we sat down. Whether it was the bimbo in the front or me in the back, he didn't take a short or long look at anyone, but an exceptionally well-measured glance that seemed more perfunctory than needed. so he was pretending to look around because he knew who everyone was, meaning he'd done a background check on everyone beforehand. Yes sir. However, it isn't that hard for someone of his level to find out where Simmons and Fitz studied at, yet he spent no longer looking at them than he did me. I wouldn't be surprised if he knows I'm using a fake name and doesn't care. Fury considered it but knew it didn't matter. Mockingbird was there to protect Simmons and Fitz without either knowing. The pair were the smartest to come out of SHIELD Academy of Science and Technology in decades, having both graduated 3 years early. A few years ago, S.H.I.E.L.D. considered them at the peak of the world, right up there with Hank Pym, Reed Richards, and Tony Stark. Then Harry Potter showed up. What's your opinion on him as a teacher? Non-standard but effective. At least I don't see a chance of anyone falling asleep in his class. It was normal in the academy for a teacher to pull out a weapon and fire blanks to get students used to the sound and not freeze up. Professor Potter seems to have taken the idea to another level. She couldn't help the smile that formed on her face. She also wouldn't admit to looking forward to the next prank Harry thought up. Fury could tell she was enjoying it but didn't care enough to berate her for it. Keep an eye on the other students and watch out for anything suspicious. A gleam of mischievous flashed through Agent Morse's stare and she answered back, "Aye, sir." Fury rolled his eye as the feed went dead. He'd get her back for that one. Author's note: all right, so the class is set. Now, I wrote myself into a corner when I figured out what I was going to do with Stark, but then I realized I had a few things I could use, so instead of changing that, I decided to go with it. So my events after Tony is rescued will be a bit different due to my mistakes/butterfly effect, but it should be cool, I think. Also, I finally decided on a name. Oddly enough, it wasn't Sage or Hermit. Saw some comments and saw one that gave me an idea I can't believe I hadn't thought of before. Anyways, Harry's ID will just be Professor Potter. Xavier is usually the professor, but since Harry gets alliteration points, he gets the professor title instead. Harry's superhero alter ego will have a separate name. I'd be really impressed if anyone guessed it. The best part is that it will be super obvious after the fact. Chapter 70. Chapter 70, Gathering Intel Off-World. In the expanded basement of Harry's New York home, Harry watched his newest lover fire bursts of green energy at small black demons Harry had conjured earlier. With each shot, the demons dissolved into shadow and darkness only to fade away. Due to the influence of her dragon heart, Jade Chan's chi had traces of red, but it was still effective for use in chi magic the pair had been practicing. Harry's chi, while also green, had streaks of gold, making it very eye-catching. These meager demons were not from any general demonic plane, but creatures Harry made using what he knew of demon magic and the air of negativity prevalent within any human city. The origin of this conjuration spell was an attempt to make creatures he could fight in this plane for EXP instead of going to the astral plane and using battle meditation. It didn't work out the way he wanted. The air of negativity could be considered a psionic and magical field generated when people who had a lot of problems gathered together. When defeated, the little demons did indeed become energy Harry could absorb. The problem was that they were too weak and the gain from absorbing it was minuscule. They were about as formidable as a swarm of Karens demanding to see a supervisor. Moreover, absorbing negativity like that was useless for Harry as he didn't use any black magics which required it. That's where chi magic came in. Chi magic contained some of the strongest purification spells out there. Harry was originally worried that the influence of the dragon aspect of his and Jade's chi would reduce the purification effect, but in fact the effect was enhanced, much to Harry's relief. The air of negativity coalesced into these Karens was purified when they were slain with blasts of chi magic. Though hardly a reduction in the overall mood of the city, it was still better than nothing and was a method even the Ancient One approved of to train chi magic, as it purified the area around it instead of polluting it as many other forms of magic practice did more often than not. While firing said blasts out from a two-fingered point with her hands, Jade was quickly muttering under her breath, "Umo gui guai fai dizao, umo gui guai fai dizao," the rough translation of which was, "Evil demons and malevolent spirits, be gone." It directly rejected all evil, and the direct rejection combined with the characteristics of chi magic caused complete purification against weaker demons. Even against stronger ones, it would harm them. This incantation had centuries of history and many benefits. Of course, it had obvious weaknesses as well. The rejection effect could be used to harm, purify, and protect from evil and evil magics. It had no effect whatsoever against anything that was not evil, and it had weaker effects against evils that did not originate in China. These Karens obviously did not originate in China, but the strength of Jade's chi and her experience in using this incantation made up for it, and even if these demons were 50 times stronger, Jade could manage to beat them if it was one-on-one. Harry never used incantations and wasn't going to start now. Thankfully, Uncle's journals were well written, and by reading between the lines, Harry was able to figure out a training regime to practice implanting his chi with intention to cast spells in the same way he could do so with other forms of energy and magic. Of course, it wasn't easy. If it was, Harry wouldn't have asked for assistance and would have figured it out himself. Chi is not like other forms of energy. Chi is a person's individual life force synchronized with their soul. Pure and young children naturally draw in vast amounts of chi until they are tainted by the world. That chi stays with them and the body uses that chi to grow. Once they reach adulthood, the chi is mostly used up. That's why an untrained child will have more chi than an untrained adult. Or at least it was for other people. Harry's status as a living person was questionable at best since his death and revival as a human form obscurus. Harry wasn't an Obscurial. An Obscurial is a human who possessed an Obscurus. Harry was the Obscurus, who just happened to be able to maintain a human form due to his mutant power. Even though he'd figured out a few new ways to use his mutant power thanks to the Obscurus perk he acquired, he couldn't remain in human form and send away an Obscurus like an Obscurial could. Thankfully his body was able to accept and merge seamlessly with the immortal dragon chi because he merged with it. He could apply the same invisibility to his dragon chi as he could his magic. This was useful since the immortal black dragon Qiantang had probably revived by now since immortal true dragons could do that. If he was ever in the same city as Harry and Harry wasn't cloaking his chi, Qiantang would be able to locate him with ease. Though he merged with it, it wasn't originally his chi which gave him a handicap when it came to learning chi magic. Thankfully, using dragon chi was easier with the autocorrect of the dragon path, and using it for physical combat was additionally assisted by the autocorrect of the warrior path, and of course everything he did when it came to magic was assisted with the autocorrect of the magic path. Thanks to that, he had already caught up to Jade and the pair were neck and neck in their advancement of chi magic. After finishing off the remaining Karen demons, Jade took a few breaths to steady herself and smile. She wasn't physically exhausted, but the mental strain of the chi magic practice wasn't something to look down upon. Harry smiled back and said, "Nice work. That will be all for today." Jade's smile widened and she said, "Thanks. Now if only I had a way to wind down." Jade's form flashed with light and had changed to her adult form disguise. Harry grinned with approval at the look in Jade's eye. She could shift into this form while doing something noble, and apparently, she considered this a noble pursuit. Harry, not wanting to be outdone, shifted his own form from 17 to 25 to match Jade's and overtake her in height. After months of practice, he'd finally figured out how to use his Obscurus perk to adjust his form in the same way Mystique did, so he no longer needed to rely on nasty-tasting polyjuice potions for a disguise. Just because he could turn his taste buds off when he drank it didn't mean the taste didn't linger after all. Jade pulled down her silk mask and started to slowly unbutton her red cheongsam while locking her eyes, Harry letting him know exactly what she was thinking. Harry's smile widened and he joined her, thinking, a noble pursuit indeed. Ping. Sex path has risen to rank 20. After taking Jade's unconscious, smiling form to bed, Harry did not go to sleep but headed for his own room and prepared a few things. Harry's form shifted once more into that of a stranger, and Harry put on some clothes that would stand out in any city simply because of how remarkably plain they were. Once finished, Harry took in a breath and shot out a silver ring which expanded into a portal and stepped through before closing it. The sky overhead was bright as it was daytime, and though Harry was in an open venue surrounded by people, no one was looking in his direction. Harry had made a tiny portal to this spot earlier for scouting and had placed a time release "Notice Me Not Here" to prep for his arrival. Harry was no longer on Earth. Although Jean claimed she found and followed a spaceship, Harry figured she just didn't want Harry to know the effort she actually took. Harry figured after blowing the planet, she waited while cloaked at the location until some big, fancy-looking ship appeared and then followed it back to the planet it came from. This was Xandar. According to the info Jean got from the heads of the pilots she followed, Xandar was the home of the Nova Corps, a set of self-appointed peacekeepers in the Andromeda Galaxy, which was why they sent out an investigation in the first place. After finding out they thought someone was faking a phoenix burn, she got the planet's location and returned to the route she needed to travel to find the next to be burned planet. Six-dimensional coordinates also included aspects like planetary rotation and movement around stellar bodies, so even though the planet had obviously moved its position in space since she'd taken the coordinates remained the same, allowing Harry to make a portal here. The area he'd chosen to enter through was rather scenic and included a vast public courtyard with a fountain in the middle and dozens of benches around the area. Harry found an empty bench away from others and sat down. He took something from his inventory and put it in his pocket before leaning back and just watching. Harry was not sure which was stranger, the fact that so many species on this planet could pass for human, or the fact that they were apparently speaking English. This of course brought up a chicken and the egg series of questions, but Harry decided not to care about that. And pass for human was relative. Most of their facial structures were not something Harry could categorize as something belonging to any nation on Earth. For example, the man sitting on the bench on the other end of the courtyard reading something had cheekbones and a nose which stuck out further from his face than any normal human, even Professor Snape, giving him an almost bird-like quality. He wasn't sure if he should have been thankful the written language was clearly different. On one hand, if the language was the same, he'd have an easier time. On the other, it would completely throw off the alien world vibe. In any case, he used his telepathy to scan for passing minds to get tidbits here and there about the local common sense and customs before he did anything. Harry had a couple of goals for coming to Xandar. First, it was cool. It just was. Next, he wanted an exotic vacation house to make the girls feel special. Further down the list of priorities, Harry wanted to check the star maps and the local tech. The local tech would help him advance his tech path, and the star maps would give him more options when it came to using his portals. Harry was fully aware that his portals were too useful. Only beings with ridiculous skill in magic or godlike beings could resist being pushed through a portal, so even if Harry could do nothing else, he could solve 80% of all problems with portals. Especially since Harry had the coordinates to Galactus's homeworld. Unkillable monsters? Toss them at the heavy anti-electro matter cloud. A being who can devour all forms of energy and can resurrect itself from the dead. Toss him at the surface of Galactus's homeworld. A machine from the future built to kill you? Portal it to the sun. Got sucked through an interdimensional doorway with no hope of escape? Portal out. Late for work? Portal to work. The problem with how useful portals were was that people who knew Harry could use them may end up asking Harry to use them to solve all their problems. Harry told those at the Xavier Institute he needs a big diamond to make a portal so they wouldn't ask him for stupid things. If they ever did so, Harry was prepared to wipe their memories of his portals. Thankfully, Harry was not included in their team sessions and they knew not to rely on him. Besides, they had Kurt. Though not as good as a portal, his teleporting was still useful enough. Harry had subtly removed the memory of portals from Blade, Whistler, and Karen so they wouldn't bother him about portals, but Harry couldn't wipe the Fantastic Four's mind. He'd already discovered that the power cosmic within them made them resistant to most forms of energy. Even if Harry overpowered the spell, the energy of the spell would eventually be devoured by the power cosmic and converted into more power cosmic, just like it did with the background radiation around them. They all respected him though and appreciated that Harry only revealed his portals to them because it was a world-ending threat. Harry may have also mentioned once or twice that if they ever called him for anything and one of them wasn't dying when he got there, he'd prank them. Harry's smile when he told them sent shivers down their spines. The only other ones who knew were the sorcerers who could use portals themselves, Sirius Black, who knew better than to take advantage of his godson, and Magneto and Mystique, who were unlikely to ask something of Harry as they knew Harry would expect something in return. Portals were simply too useful. Harry had faced several beings they could not be used against, but that was not entirely Harry's fault. The immortal dragon Kyantang could fly and disrupt magic. The Juggernaut was protected by the elder god Sidorak so he couldn't be pushed through a portal without the portal being destroyed. Selene could fly and there was no way to push her through a portal. That damn avatar of the blood god couldn't be pushed through and Harry was still annoyed by that. And Apocalypse could both fly and not be pushed, so even if Harry made a portal beneath his feet, the immortal wouldn't have fallen through it and may have had ways to teleport out even if tossed into another dimension. Of course, those exceptions were beings at the peak of existence on Earth or had connections to beings at the peak of existence in the cosmos. At the very least, unless there was a 100% world destruction imminent threat, Harry wasn't planning to let others know about his portals for now lest he be bugged to solve all the world's problems with them until the end of time. Harry shivered at that thought. Some thought otherwise, but even if Harry was a part-time protector as a hobby he still didn't think he was a hero and he certainly wasn't a janitor. He was pretty sure that most problems he faced could be resolved without portals anyways so it wasn't a big deal. Harry sat on that bench for a few hours and had a responsible idea of the planet itself. First of all, it was considered peaceful. There were a lot of laws to prevent idiots from doing whatever they wanted and most followed them. Something interesting was that besides being the headquarters of the Nova Corps, Xandar was also the capital of the Nova Empire. According to what Kitty and the other X-Men learned when they got abducted, the planet Earth and the Milky Way was a part of the Shi'ar Empire, but that was not technically correct. The Asgardians had taken Midgard into their own territory along with several other worlds so the Shi'ar had Earth declared off limits, lest they anger the battle-hungry Asgardians. From the info Harry was getting, this Nova Empire was one of two empires in the Andromeda Galaxy, along with the Kree Empire. The two had frequent on-again, off-again wars over the last several thousand years and the latest one had been going on for 1,000 years already and it seemed most people had enough. They were trying for peace talks at the moment but hadn't gotten anywhere yet. This planet's identity as a capital planet certainly explained the peaceful environment and the overall beauty. What Harry found funny was that a lot of people had already heard about Jean's handiwork. The planet Jean burnt was not, technically, a part of either the Nova Empire or the Kree Empire. It was a self-enclosed planet that did not allow visitors or meddlers and had no great resources to speak of so no matter how horrible it was a place to exist, no one had any great reason to step in and change it. Even though there were people who knew the Phoenix only burned planets which were stagnated, that didn't stop the fact that a planet-burning entity was terrifying to most life in the cosmos. Jean obviously wasn't the first host of the Phoenix Force but she may have been its first avatar. According to records in Camartage, there had been 3 human hosts for the Phoenix in the past. The first was during the Hyborian Age. There were even stories about that host hooking up with a young Odin, before he became the Alfather. The second was an elderly Viking woman from the 11th century who fought alongside several others, including a young Thor against foes such as Mephisto and Apocalypse. The third was a woman from the 16th century who quickly left the Earth and was never heard from again. Though Earth was obviously not a great standard for the universe, the fact that the Phoenix pops up pretty often on his planet or others makes it common enough for most people throughout the universe to recognize her. In all likelihood, Jean would be the last. Harry wasn't sure if it was due to his presence or not, but the Phoenix was not treating Jean in the same way it treated its previous hosts. She wasn't really a host at all. After another hour, Harry pulled the red gem he'd placed in his pocket out and took a long look at it with a smile. On Earth, there were a number of ways to find the Philosopher's Stone because people knew it existed and knew where to look for it. Everyone had been told it had been destroyed and none of those means had worked since Harry kept it in his inventory, but that didn't mean those looking for it had given up. Harry had been sitting at this bench in what should be the most technologically advanced planet in this empire and no one approached him about the stone in his pocket. No one had any special means of tracking this thing, which meant he could actually use it here. The Philosopher's Stone had two main functions. If you put enough magic into it, it could either create the elixir of life or it could turn base metals into copper, silver, or gold. However, there was a limit for the first one. The stone needed some time between uses, otherwise if continually used, would only produce a drop or two a day. In the years since getting the stone, he'd only been able to get 6 vials. Each vial could stop a person from getting closer to death for 1 month and heal any wound, restoring a body to a state furthest from death. If left out, the stone could produce 4 vials a month. The problem was that Harry's inventory stopped time and wasn't considered out. Before Harry got the stone, Voldemort squeezed it for everything he could, which was quite a lot since it hadn't been used for about 10 months up to that point due to being hidden by the Flamels. Harry was about to get 2 vials when he was in the past, since there was no spell to look for the stone before the stone had been invented, and he'd figured out a way to completely isolate all energy forms and keep the stone in a protected space for a few hours a day every once in a while to give it enough time to get 4 more vials. He'd used one on Whistler, but didn't have any use for the others, so they remained in his inventory, but that didn't mean it wasn't useful enough to stock up on. If Harry could get a nice, safe place on this world, he could safely leave the stone here and collect all the elixir he wanted. The other function of the stone, the ability to turn metals into gold and the like, was easier to use and less limited. Charging the stone with magic and touching it to a metal would cause the magic charge to be converted through the stone into a pulse of magic that would permeate the metal with a catalytic transmutation wave, which would convert it into 100% gold or the like. The amount of metal changed through the pulse was determined by the charge, though the stone couldn't hold too large of a charge. There was no way to give an infinite charge to the stone and touch it to the side of a metal building to convert it into gold. It was easier to change small pieces to gold, and there was no way to change any metal protected by magic into gold. It could also only affect base metals such as iron, nickel, lead and zinc, and would have no effect on metals such as platinum or titanium. You could also use it to convert copper to silver or gold and convert silver to gold. But you couldn't convert silver into copper or convert gold into anything else. This would give him some easy funds since Harry had already confirmed that gold was valuable on this planet. Harry had even found the address of a place to sell some it from a few of the shoddier people who'd wandered through the area. He wouldn't sell it now though. Today was just for scouting. He'd bring the info to his girls and decide what to do later. One of his primary goals, besides having fun, was to see if he could use what he found here to make a communicator which could allow instant communication at any distance. If he could, then he could call Jean wherever, and a situation like what happened with Galactus would never happen again. Harry left the area and scouted for a while before finding an area that was out of the way. He felt there was a possibility that some security camera looking at the courtyard may have seen him, but no one approached him, so the footage had not been flagged and noticed by anyone who cared. Harry's technopathy was less effective here as he didn't know the programming language of the tech of this world yet, but he could at least feel when there were cameras nearby. Once Harry found a spot that was too narrow for onlookers and he felt there were no cameras, Harry took note of the coordinates and portaled home. It was the end of the month and time to see who submitted projects. Harry's metaphysics class was normal today, for him anyways. He couldn't prank them every class or they'd expect it, which would take away from the impact of the class. 3 teams had submitted prototypes for his Bounce project. Fitz and Simmons worked together as one team, but Hope Van Dyne and Leah Arthey both submitted their prototypes as individuals. At the end of class, Harry took the 4 down to the lab the university let Harry play with, and the 4 all locked eyes on what looked to be an old ship cannon from the 18th century and a brick wall. Harry's technopathy could feel the 3 cameras on Simmons and Fitz and the 7 cameras on Leah. Harry turned them all off once they entered the lab just to mess with them. Harry said, "All right, first is Mr. and Mrs. Simmons." Fitz twitched and immediately said, "Mr. Fitz and Miss Simmons." Harry asked, "What, you're not going to take her name?" Fitz had no idea why such a question had been asked in a place like this and said the first thing that came to mind. "What? No." Harry asked, "Why not?" Miss Simmons was apparently quicker on the draw than Mr. Fitz. She turned to him and said, "Yeah, why not?" Fitz looked like he was about to have a panic attack and Ms. Van Dyne seemed to be suppressing a smirk. Ms. Arthey looked like she was smiling, but there were no wrinkles in her eyes. Harry shrugged as if it were non-consequential and said, "Anyways, please place your prototype on the wall facing the cannon." Hope asked, "You're really gonna fire a cannon at them?" Harry answered with a smile, "Why, do you want to fire the cannon instead?" Hope smiled back, "Yes." Harry nodded proudly. This student of his would be going very far in life. Fitz and Simmons pulled out several rolls of what looked to be carpets and placed them on the wall in layers. Harry walked over to a cabinet near the wall and pulled out a bunch of earmuffs and handed them to everyone. He also pulled out a massive torch and after setting it with a lighter, gave it to Fitz and said, "Light it up." Though socially awkward and not the best spy, Fitz was a man and he was happy to take the flame and ignite the cannon fuse as everyone put on their earmuffs and waited. With a massive boom, the cannon recoiled back a few steps and the cannonball bounced off the wall and back a few feet. Harry pulls out a tablet and checks a few things before saying, "Nice. Go on and collect your stuff. Leah is next." As the next prototype was set up, Harry refilled the cannon with gunpowder and stuffed a different cannonball into it before setting another cannon fuse at the end. Once ready, Harry handed another lit torch to Leah, who carefully lit the fuse before handing the torch back. An equally massive boom followed along with the sound of a crumbling wall. Harry shrugged. It happens. Please collect your stuff. After Harry checked a few things in the tablet, the broken wall vanished and a new wall appeared, showing off that the wall was a hard light construct. Hope finished setting up her own stuff by the time Harry had set the cannon back up. Hope gleefully fired the cannon, and after the final boom, the cannonball bounced back, this time even further than Team Fitz. Harry was pleased with the obvious results and said, "We have a winner." Hope smiled confidently and Simmons seemed to be consoling Fitz. Harry walked over to Fitz and said, "The material was too uniform, which resulted in too much energy bleeding away. If you tried again but made the materials non-uniform, the compression would bleed less and even become slightly unpredictable, which could be useful as well." Harry then walked over to Leah, who asked before Harry could say anything, "Is there any way I can convince you of giving a private lesson? I can pay whatever you want." Simmons and Hope rolled their eyes and Harry answered, "Nope, I'm ridiculously busy all semester. In any case, the materials you used reminded me of something I read from some German scientific research papers. I'm sure it's just a coincidence and you certainly didn't plagiarize another's work and claim it as your own." Harry handed her a sheet of paper and said, "Here are some works and other papers which had similarities to your project. If you look them up, you should be able to find out a few of the flaws and ways of correcting them." Harry ignored the anger in the brunette's stare and said, "All right, Hope won, so I'll be showing her my version of this project. Better luck next time." Simmons forgot a pencil on the floor and walked away from it. Harry said, "Please don't leave your trash in the lab. Do it again and I won't be accepting any projects from you." Simmons looked embarrassed and quickly turned back to pick up the pencil. On their way out, Harry turned back on all of their cameras, including the tiny one hidden in the pencil. Harry thought it would have been less conspicuous in a pen, but maybe that was the point. Who'd expect a spy camera in a pencil? By turning the cameras off when they entered and on when they left, Harry could give the false impression that the room was shielded from recordings. Once they were alone, Harry said, "The principles you used in your material were pretty fancy. It could take the energy, store it, and release it for a bounce. My only real suggestion on how to improve it would be to hook a battery to it. Yes, it is less cost efficient to keep it pre-charged, but energy was lost from the cannonball's impact charging the material, so it was pre-charged, it would have bounced further back." Hope asked, "How can you tell how this works without even looking at it? Was there a scanner on that wall?" Harry shook his head. "I'm familiar with most materials on that planet and know how to put them together. Unless you use a material I am not familiar with, I can usually guess how something works by seeing it once." Harry walked over to a footlocker and opened it up, revealing a roll of material he took out and set up on the wall. Harry also sets up through hard light a clear wall in front of them. Harry lights the torch and tosses it over the clear wall where it lands on the cannon fuse and ignites it before the torch hits the ground. After a moment, the cannon goes off with a boom, but in the next moment, the cannon itself jerks to the side and the cannonball plants itself into the clear wall in front of Harry and Hope. It takes a moment for Hope to realize what happened. The cannonball bounced back at the cannon and knocked it to the side before hitting the see-through wall. Harry pulled out the schematics of the material and said, "This material uses red energy to reflect momentum. Now I used a metagem emerald to make it, but I'll show you a way to make it without one that will still be stronger than what you made." Harry pointed out piece by piece each segment of his schematics and explained step by step how he processed the materials and how it could gain the properties of red energy. Red energy was of course energy from Sidorak's realm, but since Harry wasn't using Sidorak's name to obtain the energy, there wasn't anything the destruction-loving elder god could do. Harry wondered how Sidorak would take it if Harry told him he was making defensive tools with his realm's energy. Once finished, Harry packed everything up and said his goodbyes to Hope before going home. Hope and Fitz were probably the only ones who'd use what Harry taught them properly, so Harry had no problem teaching either of them. Harry didn't care who Leah reported to or who made up the work she submitted, but that wouldn't stop Harry from viciously trolling them if they couldn't come up with something original. Later that day, after Jade's study group had left, Harry explained to the girls what he'd learned about Xandar while they ate dinner and watched TV. Everyone was excited, of course. This was an alien planet, and as long as they wore the right clothes, they wouldn't stick out too much and could explore and have some fun. While discussing the legality of borrowing spaceships, the news actually said something of interest. After a weapons test in the Afghanistan, billionaire Tony Stark had gone missing. Author's note: Tony was missing for 3 months, so he won't be showing up in person until Chapter 72. For those not familiar with the timeline, Xandar and the Kree had their peace treaty signed in 2014. And don't say to get the Power Stone. Apparently, the ruins the stone is underwater and it only surfaces for like an hour once every 300 years. That isn't difficult info to get since even Star-Lord got it, but Harry won't be going near any stones for a while.